I stared at my hand. 4 fingers. 1 thumb. All of them bent in ways no human hand should bend. The skin was the color of deep ocean water, smooth and dense, almost like living rubber stretched over bones too long to belong to a human frame. When I told the hand to move, it moved. The fingers curled. Tendons shifted under the blue surface. My brain refused to accept it. This isn't real, I whispered. This is a dream. I'm still in the car. The highway. Rain hammering against the windshield as I drove down I-90, coming back from the investor pitch. The road shining black under the storm. Headlights cutting through the blur. Then the truck jackknifed across 3 lanes. I remembered the front of it filling my windshield. I remembered the scream of brakes, the sickening crunch of metal tearing into metal. Then nothing. And now this. A mechanical hiss sounded behind me. Something released. Clamps, maybe. A harness. The chair beneath me tilted forward without warning, and I spilled onto a hard floor that smelled of antiseptic and ozone. My knees hit first. They were blue. My arms were blue. Then something long and heavy whipped behind me. A tail. A goddamn tail. It lashed sideways and knocked a tray of instruments off a nearby table. Metal tools scattered across the floor with a crash loud enough to bring people running. Easy, easy, someone shouted. Chen, take it slow. Hands grabbed my shoulders. Human hands. Small hands, compared to the huge body I was trapped inside. I looked up. A man in a white coat crouched in front of me. Brown skin, wireframe glasses pushed up onto his forehead. His name tag read, Dr. M. Patel, Xenobiology. Behind him, the room was all steel, glass, blinking monitors, and thick cables. And I knew this room. Not from memory. From a screen. From a movie I had watched 3 times because the visual effects were incredible, even if the plot was nothing special. The link room. The Avatar link room. From Avatar. My stomach twisted violently. I gagged, but nothing came up. This body had nothing in it. James, can you hear me? Patel asked. Follow my finger. He raised one finger and moved it left, then right. My eyes followed. His face softened with professional relief. Pupil response is good. Motor coordination. He glanced at the fallen tray. Still developing. How do you feel? How did I feel? I felt like I was 10 feet tall, blue, trapped in a body that wasn't mine, and every joint had been installed by someone who had never seen a human skeleton. I died on a highway in Montana, I wanted to say. Instead, I forced out, dizzy. The voice that came out of my mouth was wrong. Too deep. Too resonant. It vibrated through a chest cavity built like a barrel. Where am I? You're in the Avatar compound at Hell's Gate, Patel said, helping me into a sitting position. Pandora. My tail moved on its own, curling around my thigh like a cat settling into place. You've been in Link for about 40 minutes, Patel continued. Standard first session disorientation. It passes. Pandora. He said Pandora the way someone might say Cleveland. Casual. Normal. Geographic. I pressed my palms against the floor and pushed myself up. The ceiling suddenly felt too close. I hunched instinctively, my shoulders brushing the ductwork above me. Everything in the room was built for humans, which meant everything was too small. The chair, the doors, the tables, the technicians backing away to give me space. 9 feet tall, maybe more. I was inside a body grown in a lab from human and NA6 DNA. And the last thing I remembered before waking up here was a truck smashing into my car. Think. My name was Chase Sinclair. 32 years old. Project manager. Dead, apparently. Now I was here. In a movie. Inside an avatar body. Which meant I was using someone's avatar. Which meant. Dr. Patel. He looked up from his day top hat. My human body, I said carefully. Can I go back? His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just a small tightening around his eyes. A slight downward pull at the corners of his mouth. The look doctors get when they know the patient is about to hear something terrible. James, he lowered the day top hat. I need you to sit down for this. I am sitting. Right. Of course. Patel pulled over a stool and sat across from me, trying to bring himself closer to eye level, though this body still towered over him. During transit from Earth, your cryopod experienced a malfunction, he said. Not with the cryosystem itself. It was a cardiac event. An arrhythmia that escalated faster than the medical team could control. They attempted resuscitation for 18 minutes. The room seemed to shrink around me. Or maybe the silence just became louder. James Chen's human body was pronounced dead 9 weeks ago, Patel said softly. Cremation was performed according to standard protocol. I'm sorry. James Chen. That was whose body I was wearing. A xenobotanist who had crossed 6 years of space to study alien plants. A man who was supposed to lie in a link chair while this blue body walked through Pandora collecting specimens. But James Chen was dead. His real body was gone. Cremated. Reduced to ash before I had ever opened these yellow eyes. Which meant I was trapped. There was no human body to return to. No link to sever. No waking up in a chair. This avatar, James Chen's avatar, was all I had. 32 years of being Chase Sinclair, and now I was a dead botanist on an alien moon. And nobody in this room knew the truth. I forced myself to breathe. The lungs were enormous. They pulled in more air than any human lungs should. The air tasted strange too. Thicker. Metallic. Processed through filters never designed for a NA6 body. James. Patel asked. Talk to me. Response check. I'm here, I said. My voice. Not my voice. I'm processing. Patel nodded. That's normal. Grief response combined with first session disorientation can be overwhelming. We'll keep you under observation for the next 24 hours. Standard assessment. There's a counselor available if you need one. I barely heard him. One question kept clawing at my mind. What happens to the avatar? Patel blinked. What? If the driver is dead, I said. The human driver. What happens to the avatar body? The room went still. Patel removed his glasses and cleaned them with the hem of his coat. A stalling gesture. Standard protocol allows for a 30-day evaluation period, he said at last. The avatar is maintained in temporary driver status. If a compatible replacement driver is found, the avatar may be reassigned. And if not, he put his glasses back on. Then the biological material is recycled. Driverless avatars are too expensive to maintain. 30 days. I had 30 days before they dismantled this body. The only body I had left. Okay, I said quietly. I placed my hands on my knees. 4 alien fingers. Blue skin. A fictional world pressing in on me from every direction. Okay. Patel rested a hand on my arm. You should rest. The disorientation will settle. I nodded. Even that felt wrong. Too much neck. Too much range of motion. Like a puppet built by someone who had only heard descriptions of how humans moved. Across the room, a reflective panel caught my movement. Yellow eyes stared back at me from a face too sharp, too angular, too alive to be mine. Faint blue-white markings pulsed along my jawline, glowing in rhythm with a heartbeat I had not earned. James Chen's face. My face now. Learn the role. Play it perfectly. Or die again in 30 days. Dr. Max Patel. The avatar link room finally went quiet after Chen agreed to sleep in the designated recovery bay. Max Patel closed the observation file on his day top hat and stood behind the glass partition, watching the massive blue form curl awkwardly on a cot 2 sizes too small. Standard first session confusion, he had written. Grief response, appropriate. Psychological stability, monitoring required. All accurate. All incomplete. Max had worked avatar orientation for 3 years. 12 drivers decanted. 12 first sessions observed. Every one of them had opened their eyes with the same expression. Wonder. Fascination. The giddy disbelief of a child waking up in a superhero costume. Chen had not looked fascinated. He had looked trapped. Max cleaned his glasses again, though they did not need it. On the wall monitor, the avatar's vitals pulsed steadily. Heart rate elevated but stable. Neural sync, 94%. Excellent numbers for a first session. Better than excellent. James Chen's neural conductivity scores before deployment had been average. Acceptable. Nothing remarkable. These readings were not average.
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
They were off the charts. Worth noting. Worth watching. Max dimmed the lights and stepped away from the glass. Tomorrow, James Chen would report for his first field assignment under Dr. Augustine. Grace would tear him apart in 20 minutes if he did not know his protocols. Not Max's problem. Not yet. The sample container shattered on the lab floor less than 3 minutes after I entered the xenobotany wing. Glass burst across the tiles. Thick nutrient gel splashed in a glossy arc. 2 lab technicians froze where they stood. At the far bench, the woman with short auburn hair looked up from her day top hat. Deep frown lines framed her mouth, and a cigarette she clearly was not allowed to smoke indoors sat tucked behind one ear. Her expression carried the calm, exhausted patience of someone deciding whether a specimen was worth dissecting. Dr. Chen. Grace Augustine's voice landed with the full weight of a woman who had spent more than a decade as Pandora's leading xenobiologist. That was a Tier 3 containment vessel. Pressurized. Her eyes narrowed. You did read the handling manual during transit, didn't you? My hands hovered uselessly over the mess. Too large. Too long. Too many joints moving in ways my old muscle memory did not understand. Don't touch it. Grace snapped her fingers without looking away from me. Garcia, clean up kit. Harmon, check the adjacent samples for contamination. The technicians moved at once. Grace crossed the lab in 4 brisk strides. Up close, she looked tired in a way sleep could not fix. It lived in the hard lines around her mouth, in the slight curve of shoulders that had carried too much institutional weight for too many years. What's the sterilization protocol for biological spillage in a level 2 lab? I stared at her. The honest answer was simple. I have no idea. I managed renewable energy accounts. The closest I ever got to biology was a high school frog. But I could not say that. UV followed by, I stopped. Guessing would only make it worse. Grace's expression sharpened. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More diagnostic. She was measuring me. UV followed by enzymatic rinse, then atmospheric cycling. That's day 1 orientation material, Chen. Day 1. The cryosleep, I said quickly. I tapped my temple with one oversized blue finger. Memory gaps. Dr. Patel said it can happen after cardiac trauma. The lie tasted sour in my mouth. Grace did not soften, but something in her changed. The irritation faded by a few degrees, replaced by scientific curiosity. She had moved me from incompetent asset to unusual problem. For now, that was better. Fine, she said. We'll do a field competency assessment. If you can't handle basic protocols, you don't go outside the fence. She shoved a sensor array into my hands. It was a cylindrical instrument, lined with measurement interfaces and calibration nodes. My unfamiliar fingers closed around it. Then something happened. The hands knew. Not me. Not Chase Sinclair, who had never calibrated anything more complicated than a coffee machine. The hands. James Chen's muscle memory, encoded into the avatar's nervous system during development, stirred awake like a sleeping animal. My fingers found the power toggle. They adjusted the frequency band. They checked the calibration against ambient temperature and corrected the baseline drift. Smooth. Automatic. It felt like watching someone else drive my car. Grace noticed. Her head tilted slightly. Motor skills are intact. That's something. She pulled up a holographic display of Sector 7's topography. Your field request came through. Solo specimen collection, Eastern Quadrant. I approved it, but I want baseline readings from these coordinates first. She pointed. My hands were still working the sensor array, adjusting, testing, recalibrating with quiet precision. I let them continue. Every physical task James Chen's body remembered was a life raft in an ocean of ignorance. Theoretical assessment can wait, Grace said, almost to herself. Let's see if the hands match the file. Dash. The mess hall served something the menu called protein loaf. It tasted like compressed cardboard soaked in artificial umami. I ate every bite. The avatar body processed food differently. Flavors struck harder. Textures registered with uncomfortable clarity. The loaf was not merely bland. It was aggressively, specifically bland. Every ingredient announced itself and disappointed me one by one. Salt. Soy isolate. Something that might once have been corn. What I wanted was coffee. Not Pandora coffee. That did not exist. Real coffee. Dark roast. Slightly burnt. Pulled from the old break room machine at Meridian Energy Solutions, where I had spent 7 years of my previous life. The machine dripped too slowly, made too much noise, and produced coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a radiator. God, I muttered, what I'd give for a bad cup of coffee right now. I sat in a corner with my legs folded awkwardly beneath a table built for humans half my size. Other avatar drivers sat at the far end of the hall, 2 women and 1 man, laughing about something I could not hear. Their blue skin caught the fluorescent light. They moved easily, naturally. None of them looked like they were negotiating with their own limbs every time they reached for a cup. A dried bead of nutrient gel still clung to my forearm from the lab spill. I scratched it away. The skin underneath tingled. No, not the skin. Deeper. The neural cue hanging down my back pulsed against my shoulder blade. A single heavy throb, warm and strange, like a second heartbeat trying to find the rhythm of the first. I reached behind me. My fingers brushed the braid's tip. The fine tendrils at the end curled and uncurled like the arms of a sea anemone. At my touch, they reached back, stretching toward my hand, searching for connection. In the movie, this was Tsahelu. The neural bond. Connect your braid to a dire horse, and you could ride it. Connect to a tree, and you could hear Eywa. Connect to another Na6 braid, and the tendril tips grazed my fingernail. Electricity lanced up my arm, across my shoulder, down my spine. For half a second, my vision went white. It was not pain. It was information. A cascade of sensory data flooded through me. Chemical traces in the recycled air. The electromagnetic hum of the compound's power grid. A faint biological pulse somewhere beyond the walls. The cue was not just a nerve. It was an antenna. And Pandora was broadcasting. Hey, you okay? A technician at the next table leaned toward me. Human. Concerned. Muscle cramp, I said, yanking my hand away from the braid. The electric sensation faded. Happens with new drivers. Yeah, the cue gets twitchy. He shrugged. Dr. Augustine says some avatars are more sensitive than others. Neural conductivity variance or something. Usually wears off in a week. I gave a small nod. Except it was not wearing off. It was getting louder. I finished the protein loaf. Either the taste had improved, or my standards had collapsed. It did not matter. Calories were calories, and this body burned through them like a furnace. The cue pulsed again. Faint. Insistent. Calling towards something I could not name. Dash. Dr. Grace Augustine. Grace pulled up James Chen's pre-deployment file for the 4th time that day. She spread the data across her desk screen. Motor skills assessments. Cognitive baselines. Academic transcripts. Psychological evaluation. All of it said the same thing. Average. Competent enough to justify the expense of an avatar. Unremarkable enough to vanish inside the program. The man in her lab today did not match the file. His hands were fine. Better than fine, actually. The calibration work he had done was precise, almost elegant. But the knowledge behind those hands was hollow. He had looked at the specimen containers like he had never seen one before. He had handled the sensor array with mechanical perfection and no conceptual understanding. Muscle memory without the mind that had built it. Grace pulled the cigarette from behind her ear and lit it. Technically, smoking in the lab wing was illegal. Technically, she had been illegal in this lab wing for 11 years. Cryosleep memory loss was real. Documented. Recoverable in most cases within a few weeks. But this was different. Patients did not usually retain complex motor function while losing basic declarative knowledge. That pattern suggested something else. Neural partitioning, maybe. Damage to hippocampal analogues in the avatar brain while cerebellar function remained intact. Or something she had never seen before. Grace exhaled smoke toward the ventilation duct and tapped Chen's neural conductivity scores. Average before deployment. Max Patel's observation notes from yesterday flagged post-session readings nearly 3 standard deviations above baseline. People did not become more neurally conductive after cardiac arrest. They got worse. Or they stayed the same. They did not triple. She closed the file. Opened it again. Closed it once more. Damn it, Chen, she muttered. What happened to you? The cigarette burned down to the filter. She crushed it into a coffee cup, already rearranging tomorrow's schedule in her head. If Chen's field expedition produced anything anomalous, she would know. And if it did not, she would watch him anyway. Something about James Chen did not add up, and Grace Augustine did not leave data unexplained. My feet were wet. That was the first thing, cold moisture soaking through the mesh of the sleep bay sandals, grass pressing between toes too long, ground soft and damp under weight that shouldn't be here. The second thing was the sky. Polyphemus dominated the horizon, its gas giant bulk painted in bands of ochre and indigo, throwing enough reflected light to see by. The third thing was the fence. I was standing at the perimeter fence of Hell's Gate. Outside air. No exopack. The avatar didn't need one Na6 spec lungs filtered Pandora's atmosphere without effort. But I didn't remember walking here. I didn't remember leaving the sleep bay. I didn't remember opening the exterior door, crossing 200 meters of compound ground, or navigating past whatever security existed between the avatar barracks and the outer wall. My neural queue was extended, fully unfurled, tendrils reaching through the chain link toward the trilene beyond. Reaching for something. How long have I been standing here? Footsteps. The sweep of a flashlight beam crossing the ground 30 meters to my left. Security patrol standard rotation. Hell's Gate maintained a perimeter check every 45 minutes. The light arced toward me. I pressed against the fence. The metal was cold against blue skin. The flashlight swept past, illuminating empty ground where I'd been exposed a moment before and continued its rotation. The guard coughed, muttered something about the humidity, and walked on. My breath came in shaking bursts. Adrenaline or whatever the Na6 equivalent was flooding through a cardiovascular system designed for predator flight response. The queue retracted slowly, tendrils coiling against my braid like reluctant fingers releasing a grip. I sleepwalked. In a body I've had for less than 48 hours, in a facility surrounded by armed guards, on a moon where the air would kill my human body if I still had one. The jungle beyond the fence breathed. Bioluminescence rippled through the canopy in slow waves, cyan, teal, violet, like a living aurora confined to the treetops. Every plant connected to every other plant through root networks and airborne chemical signaling. A nervous system the size of a continent. And something in that system had called me here. Hell's Gate compound 0345 hours. Sleep wasn't coming back. Not after waking up at the fence with no memory of the walk. I paced the avatar barracks for 20 minutes, ducking ductwork, tail catching on furniture sized for people half my height. The other avatar drivers were in their link shares, human bodies sleeping, avatar bodies inert on their cots. I was the only one walking around, because I was the only one who didn't have a human body to return to. The restricted greenhouse occupied a wing of the science division that Grace Augustine had requisitioned during her first year on Pandora. Officially, it housed living specimens of Pandoran flora for study. Unofficially, it was the closest thing to a temple on a military base, a pocket of alien life preserved under glass and grow lights, humming with biological energy that made the rest of Hell's Gate feel dead by comparison. The door lock accepted James Chen's credentials. Level 3 clearance, xenobotany researchers only. The reader blinked green. Inside, the air changed. Thicker, richer. Oxygen content spiked, and my lungs expanded to meet it, ribs spreading wider than they should have been able to. The avatar body responded to the greenhouse the way a dehydrated man responds to water, every pore opening, every sense sharpening. Plants crowded every surface. Shelving units converted into vertical gardens. Bioluminescent ferns trailing from ceiling-mounted planters. Something that resembled a violet orchid the size of a dinner plate, pulsing with internal light in rhythms that matched the neural frequency of the queue on my back. I walked deeper. Past labeled specimens, past monitoring equipment with blinking lights, past a workstation cluttered with Grace's notes. The greenhouse narrowed into a back section where the most sensitive specimens lived, plants too reactive to be kept near standard equipment. A sign on the partition read, Active Neural Specimens Queue Proximity Warning. The warning was for avatar drivers whose queues might accidentally bond with the specimens. For most drivers, this was a nuisance. An unintended connection that lasted seconds and caused mild disorientation. For me, standing 3 meters away, the pull was so strong my hands were shaking. The fern sat on a pedestal at the center of the restricted section. Bioluminescent fronds, 15 of them, each tipped with neural active filaments that waved in air currents too subtle for me to feel. The specimen tag read, Polyphemian Neural Fern, Class 4, Active Colony Sample. Neural Density, 847/cm superscript 3. Do not touch without authorization. I was not authorized. I was a dead man wearing a dead man's credentials in a movie that shouldn't be real, standing in front of a plant that was calling to me across a gap between science and something else entirely. My queue uncoiled on its own. The tendrils at its tip reached toward the fern the way iron filings reach toward a magnet, not choosing, not deciding. Responding to a force that didn't care about consent. Don't. You don't know what this does. You don't know the rules of this world yet. Don't. Contact. The filaments of my Q touched the filaments of the fern, and the greenhouse disappeared. Not literally the walls, the lights, the plants were all still there, but they became background static to a signal so overwhelming that my visual cortex couldn't process both at once. Data poured through the connection: chemical compositions, growth rates, water table depth, nutrient distribution, the health status of every root within a 50-meter radius. Not numbers. Not language. Something older and more fundamental: a living map drawn in biochemistry and electrical impulse. And underneath all of it, a presence. Vast. Patient. Distributed across a network that extended from this greenhouse through the walls, through the foundations, through the bedrock, into the root systems of every plant on the continent. Watching. Not with eyes, with attention. The kind of attention an ocean gives to a stone thrown into its surface. My knees buckled. The floor hit my shins. The connection held the Q wrapped tighter around the fern's filaments, and the data stream intensified. My heart hammered. Sweat, or something like sweat, ran down my temples. Then the text appeared. Not on a screen. Not projected. Burned into my visual field like an afterimage, angular and precise, in a language I'd never studied but could read as easily as English. Resonance detected. New line. Same impossible font. Anomalous consciousness signature identified. The words hung in my vision. Translucent. Overlaid on reality like a heads-up display built from biology instead of glass. Classification: foreign soul, extra-dimensional origin. My breath stopped. The system, because that's what this was, a system, like every transmigration novel I'd ever read on web fiction sites during lunch breaks at Meridian Energy. The system was reading me, categorizing me, deciding what I was. A system. On Pandora. Built into Eywa's planetary network. Interfacing through Tsahela, the neural bond, and manifesting as text because my human origin consciousness couldn't process raw bioneural data any other way. This is real. This is actually happening. I died, I woke up in Avatar, and now the planet's biological internet is giving me a user interface. Awaiting full synchronization. Requirements: sustained Tsahela at neural nexus point. Current location: insufficient. Sample colony provides 3.2% of required bandwidth. Seek primary node. Deep jungle. Coordinates pending. The fern pulsed once, a single bright flare that lit the entire restricted section in white and went dark. The connection severed. My Q whipped free, tendrils curling tight against the braid. The afterimage text faded from my vision in fragments, dissolving like smoke. I sat on the greenhouse floor, breathing, counting heartbeats. My hands pressed flat against the tile, grounding through contact with something solid and simple and not trying to talk to me. 3.2%. The fern had provided 3.2% of whatever bandwidth this system needed, which meant full activation required something orders of magnitude more connected, a neural nexus point. The tree of voices, maybe, or the tree of souls. Locations I knew about from a movie and a sequel, places where Eywa's network concentrated into nodes dense enough to store the consciousness of the dead. Coordinates pending. It wants me to go into the jungle, alone, to plug into something exponentially more powerful than a fern that just knocked me on my ass. Outside the greenhouse windows, the Pandora dawn crept across the compound. Night cycle blue gave way to the first amber bands of Polyphemus reflected sunlight. The plants around me shifted their bioluminescence, dimming, conserving, responding to photocycles that predated human arrival by millions of years. I hadn't moved. 5 hours. The greenhouse lights transitioned from night blue to morning yellow, and I'd been sitting in the same spot, on the same tile, replaying the same 30 seconds of text in my mind. A system. A literal game system embedded in the biological architecture of an alien world, triggered by a consciousness that didn't belong here. It wanted synchronization. It wanted to categorize me, bind me, assign me a role in whatever framework Eywa had built across a planet-spanning neural network. The question wasn't whether to pursue it. Without this system, I was James Chen, a dead man's borrowed face, running out the clock on a 30-day countdown to recycling. With it, I might be something else. The greenhouse door opened. Grace Augustine stood in the doorway, daytop hat in one hand, coffee in the other, lab coat, cigarette behind the ear, and an expression that combined professional curiosity with something sharper, the look of a scientist who'd found her specimen somewhere it shouldn't be. Chen. She stepped inside. Her eyes swept the restricted section, the dark fern, the Q proximity warning sign, the avatar driver sitting cross-legged on the floor at 6 in the morning. Want to explain why you're in a restricted area 4 hours before your shift? I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Couldn't sleep, I said. The bioluminescence patterns. I wanted to observe the night cycle transition up close. Grace sipped her coffee, stared at me over the rim. The night cycle transition observation lab is on the 2nd floor, with chairs and authorized access. I like the direct approach. Her mouth twitched. Not a smile. Grace Augustine didn't smile at avatar drivers, but something adjacent. She looked at the darkened fern on its pedestal. That specimen has been in a dormant phase for 3 weeks, not responding to any stimuli. She crossed to it, ran a finger along one limb frond, as if she checked a wall sensor. Roughly 4 hours ago, it emitted a neural burst that tripped every monitor in this wing. Silence. My tail curled tight against my leg. Interesting coincidence, Grace said, that you happened to be here when it woke up. She turned from the fern to face me, and in her eyes was the thing I was learning to fear most on this moon: intelligent attention from someone who solved puzzles for a living. She tucked her day top hat under her arm. Get cleaned up. Breakfast. Field expedition briefing at 0800. And Chen. Yeah. Next time you can't sleep, my office door's open. The greenhouse at 0300. Less so? She left. The door sealed behind her. The fern on its pedestal stayed dark, but when I stood, one frond lifted just slightly in my direction, like a hand waving goodbye. I got up. My knees ached from the tile. My cue hung heavy against my back, and beneath the weight, beneath the exhaustion and the fear and the impossible scope of what was happening, something new pulsed. Not the cue's call this time. Mine. The approved expedition to Sector 7 launched in 2 hours. Deep jungle. Away from cameras, guards, and scientists who asked questions I couldn't answer. Somewhere out there, coordinates were waiting, a neural nexus point where 3.2% could become 100, and a foreign soul in a borrowed body could find out what Eywa wanted with him. I grabbed my sandals from the floor and headed for the showers. The water was warm, clean, a small luxury on a world trying to eat me alive, and for 30 seconds under the spray, I let myself enjoy something simple before the complicated part started again. The briefing room smelled like recycled air and stale coffee, the second worst coffee I'd encountered in 2 bodies, both of them technically dead. Grace stood at the front with a holographic terrain map bleeding topographical lines across the conference table. 2 other avatar drivers occupied chairs on the far side, a broad-shouldered woman named Park and a wiry man named Gallagher, both in human form, their avatars dormant in the link bay. I sat in the corner designated for drivers currently in avatar bodies. The chair groaned. My tail draped over the armrest and tapped the floor in a rhythm I couldn't control, a nervous tick, apparently, hardwired into James Chen's motor cortex. Sector 7. Grace tapped the map. A section of dense rainforest east of Hell's Gate expanded into 3-dimensional relief. Chen requested solo specimen collection in this quadrant. Standard protocol for new drivers: we assess field competency under controlled conditions. Comms check every 30 minutes. Deviation from assigned grid results in immediate recall. She looked at me, specifically at the shadows under my eyes that even blue skin couldn't hide. Questions. What's the threat assessment for that sector? Park asked, pulling up her own day top hat. Low to moderate. Hexapid herds, some prolmurus activity in the canopy. No recorded Thanator sightings in 18 months. Viper wolf packs were mapped last quarter, 2 packs, well within normal territorial boundaries. Grace flipped to a logistics slide. Equipment lists, emergency protocols, extraction procedures. Routine. The kind of meeting that happened 100 times at Hell's Gate, sending avatar drivers into the jungle to poke plants while armed escorts waited at the perimeter. But her eyes kept drifting back to me. The meeting ended. Park and Gallagher filed out, discussing lunch plans in the mess hall. I stood carefully, because standing too fast in this body meant risking the overhead lighting fixtures, and gathered the specimen kit from the equipment rack by the door. Chen. Grace's voice stopped me at the threshold. She waited until the corridor cleared, then closed the briefing room door with her hip, arms crossed, coffee still in hand. The greenhouse. At 3 in the morning. I told you. You told me you couldn't sleep and wanted to watch bioluminescence. That's a half answer and we both know it. She sipped her coffee. I've been on Pandora for 11 years. I've seen new drivers do stupid things. Walk outside without exopacks, try to pet viper wolves, fall out of link shares. But none of them have ever broken into my restricted specimen lab in the middle of the night. She's not going to let this go. Give her something real. Something she can hold instead of suspicion. My sister died. The words came out before the plan finished forming. Not my sister, James Chen's sister. The detail from his personnel file that Patel's records had buried in a subsection: transfer request motivation, death of sibling, Mei Chen, age 27, cervical cancer, 2149. Grace's posture shifted. The crossed arms loosened half an inch. James Chen requested transfer to Pandora 3 months after she passed. The evaluation board flagged it as potential grief-motivated decision-making, but his scores were solid enough to approve. I looked at the floor. Not hard to fake vulnerability when the vulnerability was real, just borrowed from the wrong person. I came here because Earth didn't have anything left for me. And then I get here, and the one thing that connects me to this world, my human body, is dead too. So I couldn't sleep. And the greenhouse, the bioluminescence, it reminded me of something alive. Silence. Grace studied me the way she studied specimens, looking for structure beneath surface. May, she said quietly. I didn't know her name. Most people don't. She drained her coffee, set the cup on the table with a deliberate click. Grief is normal, Chen. What's not normal is wandering into restricted areas without authorization. I can't protect you from scrutiny if you give them ammunition. She paused. You know about Selfridge's new policy? No. Morning announcement, 7 o'clock. All personnel channels. She pulled out her day top hat and played an audio clip. Parker Selfridge's voice, nasal, corporate, every syllable weighed for legal liability, filled the room. Reminder that avatar drivers represent a significant capital investment by the Resources Development Administration. Any personnel exhibiting signs of psychological instability, including but not limited to erratic behavior, unauthorized facility access, sleep disturbances, or emotional dysregulation, will be subject to mandatory evaluation and potential program removal. This is not optional. Pandora is not a place for people who aren't at their best. Selfridge out. The clip ended. My tail stopped tapping. Erratic behavior, I repeated. Unauthorized facility access. Sleep disturbances. 3 for 3. Grace wasn't smiling. Max Patel filed your grief assessment yesterday. It's clean he's giving you the benefit of the doubt. But if someone reports the greenhouse visit, or if your sleepwalking happens again near a security camera, it won't. Then Selfridge pulls you from the program. 30-day evaluation period doesn't mean 30 days of chances, Chen. It means 30 days of being watched. The expedition kit hung from my shoulder. 12 kilograms of specimen containers, sensors, and sample bags, the tools of a scientist I wasn't, assigned to gather data I didn't need, to maintain a cover that was already fraying at the edges. 28 days left. Maybe fewer, if Selfridge is looking for reasons to cut costs. The expedition, I said. Sector 7. You approved it. I did. Why? If you think I'm unstable. Grace picked up her cup, examined the empty interior, set it down again. A woman buying time with a prop. Because James Chen's pre-deployment file shows a researcher who was passionate about Pandoran bioluminescence. Specifically, neural active flora in low-traffic sectors. Sector 7 matches his published research interests. She met my eyes. If you come back with good specimens and a coherent field report, that's data. Data I can use to argue for your continued participation. Understand? Understood. Don't make me regret this. She left. The briefing room hummed with the absence of her attention, a pressure lifting, like surfacing from deep water. I spent the next hour in the Avatar barracks, James Chen's personnel file open on a borrowed datapad. His academic history. His research publications. His recommendation letters. 3 years of correspondence with the Avatar program, every message carefully crafted to justify a seat on a ship that took 6 years to reach its destination. Mei Chen's obituary was attached to the transfer request. 27. Cancer. A paragraph about her work in biomedical engineering, her love of hiking, a memorial fund in her name. She was real. She had a life, and it ended, and her brother came to Pandora because of it. And now I'm wearing his grief like a costume. The datapad screen blurred. I blinked hard and memorized another detail. Favorite research methodology, in situ neural mapping using portable EEG analogs. Academic advisor, Dr. Elaine Portman, University of British Columbia. Publication record, 6 peer-reviewed papers, 2 in Pandoran Xenobiology Quarterly. James Chen had been thorough, meticulous, the kind of person who prepared for every contingency, except the one that killed him. The expedition approval sat in my inbox, confirmed and time-stamped. Sector 7, grid reference 47 East, authorized for solo operation with comms check every 30 minutes. A patch of jungle nobody cared about, 3 hours walk from the compound, in a sector that Grace's own data showed was neurally active. I closed the file, packed the kit, checked the time. Tomorrow morning, James Chen would walk into the jungle to collect plant samples. And Chase Sinclair would look for something that no specimen container could hold. The jungle tried to kill me inside the first 20 minutes. Not with predators or poison, with gravity. A root system thicker than my thigh breached the soil at ankle height, invisible under a carpet of decomposing leaves, and my foot caught the leading edge at full stride. The Avatar's center of gravity was all wrong. 9 feet of body mass, top heavy, legs built for a loping gait that my brain hadn't mastered. I went down face first into a mat of fern and fungal growth that compressed under my weight like a wet sponge. The specimen kit hit a rock. Something inside cracked glass, probably. One of the Tier 3 containers Grace would expect returned intact. Terrific. First field day. Broke the equipment. James Chen's muscle memory does not extend to jungle navigation. I pushed up. Wiped something luminescent and foul-smelling off my chin. The canopy overhead was a cathedral of green, layer upon layer of foliage so dense that Polyphemus was invisible, its light filtered into scattered coins of amber that shifted with the breeze. Sounds pressed in from every direction, insect analogs clicking in frequencies that tickled the base of my skull, avian creatures calling in harmonic patterns too complex for earth birdsong, and beneath it all, a low hum that vibrated through the soil and into the bones of my feet. The neural queue on my back stirred. Tendrils at its tip uncurled slightly, sampling the air the way a snake's tongue tastes molecules. Every step deeper into the canopy amplified the sensation, a background awareness of biological activity so dense it was almost claustrophobic. Every plant around me was connected. Every root was a wire in a circuit board the size of a continent. I picked myself up, repacked the kit, and started walking again. Slower, testing each step before committing weight. The terrain map on my wrist display showed the assigned grid 2 kilometers northeast. Standard procedure, follow the stream, collect samples at designated coordinates, maintain comms contact, return before 1400. Grace would be monitoring my transponder signal. Any deviation from the route would generate a flag. Comms check. I tapped the earpiece. Chen to base. Position update. Grid 47 East, Point Alpha. Beginning transect. Static. Then a text voice. Board, copy, Chen. Next check at 0830. Base out. The stream appeared 40 minutes into the hike, a meter-wide channel of water so clear I could count individual pebbles on the bottom. It was warm. Bath temperature warm, heated by geothermal activity or biological processes or both. I knelt and scooped a handful. Tasted it. Mineral-rich, faintly sweet, with a chemical complexity that no earth water could match. James Chen would have tested this water, pulled out the spectrometer, run a full chemical analysis, logged every compound. I pulled out the spectrometer, ran the analysis, logged the compounds. If Grace wanted data, she'd get data enough to justify the expedition, enough to make James Chen's field report look exactly like what a grieving xenobotanist on his first solo outing would produce. The stream led northeast. I followed it, collecting samples at each designated point: soil cores, leaf clippings, root fragments sealed in nutrient gel. The kit grew heavier. My shoulders ached in a way that was distinctly new. The Avatar's musculature was designed for endurance, but the joints connecting those muscles to the skeleton hadn't been conditioned by years of movement. Everything worked, but nothing was broken in. At the 90-minute mark, the hexapid appeared. It came through a gap in the undergrowth, a six-legged herbivore the size of a large horse, with an armored head plate and bioluminescent stripes along its flanks. In the movie, hexapides were gentle, grazing animals. Background scenery for scenes about the beauty of Pandora. This one was 2 meters away and hadn't heard me approach. I stepped on a dry branch. The crack echoed. The hexapid's head snapped up. Its nostrils flared twin slits that dilated wide enough to show pink tissue. A sound came from its throat. Not the gentle chirp from the film. A deep, percussive crack that I registered in my sternum, followed by a stomp of its front legs that shook loose soil from the bank. I backed up, slowly, hands open, non-threatening. The hexapid charged. Not at me, past me, close enough that its flank clipped my shoulder and spun me sideways into the stream. Water closed over my head. Cold shock, not the warm upper layer but deeper, colder water from below. My hands found rocks. I pushed up, broke the surface, gasped. The hexapid was gone. Crashing through the undergrowth, panicked by whatever it had smelled on me that wasn't right. The chemical signature of an avatar, maybe, or the wrongness underneath a consciousness that didn't belong in this body, that didn't belong on this moon, that broadcast its alien nature through every pore. I stood in the stream. Water dripped from my queue. The specimen kit floated 3 meters downstream, contents scattered. Grace is going to love this field report. Day 1 in the jungle, attacked by the Pandoran equivalent of a deer. I collected what I could. 2 containers were cracked. The spectrometer was wet but functional. The soil cores were fine sealed containers, designed for worse than a dip in a stream. Another comms check. Another board technician confirming my position. Another 30 minutes of pretending to be a scientist while something in the jungle's root network tugged at my queue like a child pulling a sleeve. The viper wolves found me at the 2-hour mark. 6 of them. Low-slung, muscular, moving through the undergrowth with a silence that made the hexapid's crash seem theatrical. Their leader, the alpha, larger than the others by a third, with scarring across its muzzle, emerged from behind a fallen trunk 10 meters ahead and stopped. Yellow eyes. Fixed on me. My body locked. Every instinct, human instincts, Chase Sinclair instincts from a world where the biggest predator was a bear and the correct response was play dead, screamed at me to freeze. The Avatar's instincts disagreed. James Chen's motor cortex wanted to run. The conflicting signals produced a kind of paralysis, standing in the middle of a Pandoran stream, wet, shaking, specimen kit dangling from one hand, staring at 6 predators who could take me apart in seconds. The alpha sniffed. Its nostrils worked the air, long, deliberate inhalations that sampled my chemical signature the way the spectrometer sampled water. 1, 2, 3 breaths. It cocked its head. The yellow eyes widened, not with aggression, with confusion. Behind it, the pack shifted. 2 flankers moved to the sides, forming a semicircle. A younger wolf, smaller, darker, with unbroken skin, whined. The alpha silenced it with a growl that barely qualified as sound. More vibration than noise. They should be attacking. Viper wolves are pack hunters. 6 on 1, isolated prey, easy kill. Why aren't they? The alpha circled. 1 full rotation around my position, close enough that I could see the individual dermal filaments along its spine, neural active, bioluminescent, shifting color in patterns too complex for camouflage. Communication. It was broadcasting something to its pack. About me. The circle completed. The alpha stopped, facing me again. Held my gaze for 3 seconds that stretched like taffy. Then it turned and loped into the undergrowth. The pack followed. Silent. Gone. Like they'd never been there. I stood in the stream until my legs stopped shaking. Then I sat on a rock and drank warm water and tried to breathe in a pattern that resembled calm. The viper wolves had smelled something on me. Something that wasn't James Chen's avatar, wasn't human, wasn't NA6. Something from the greenhouse, from the connection, the proto-system contact, the moment the fern had lit up and poured data into my brain. A scent, maybe, or a signal. A frequency broadcast through the queue that said, this one is different. Not prey, not predator. Something the alpha didn't have a category for. Beyond the stream, the terrain changed. The canopy thinned. Rocks emerged from the soil, dark, crystalline, veined with mineral deposits that caught the scattered light and threw it back in colors I didn't have names for. The hum in the ground intensified. My queue uncoiled fully, tendrils reaching toward a gap in the rock wall where water disappeared underground. The grotto was behind the waterfall. Not a large waterfall, 2 meters of drop, more of a curtain than a cascade. But behind it, carved by millennia of flowing water, was a chamber that took my breath. Bioluminescence covered every surface. Ferns, mosses, fungi, root clusters, all of it glowing in layered colors that shifted with a rhythm too regular to be random. Pulse, breathe, pulse, breathe. The walls were alive in the most literal sense, neural active tissue threaded through the stone, connecting every organism in the grotto into a single continuous network. I stepped through the waterfall. The water was warm against my skin, and for a moment, the world was only sound and sensation: rushing water, glowing walls, and the deep, steady heartbeat of a planet trying to speak. The queue on my back reached toward the nearest root cluster. I pulled it back. Not yet. Not here, not now, with comms still active and a transponder broadcasting my position to Hell's Gate. But I memorized everything. The approach route, the waterfall, the chamber dimensions, the density of neural active flora. Tomorrow, I could come back. Tomorrow, with the right excuse and enough time, I could make real contact. The grotto pulsed around me: cyan, indigo, violet, and in the shifting light, my reflection appeared in a shallow pool at the chamber's center. Blue skin, yellow eyes, a face that was learning, against all probability, to look like it belonged somewhere. I packed the specimen kit with samples that would satisfy Grace: high-density neural tissue from the grotto ferns, water samples from the stream, soil cores from the mineral-veined rock. Good data. Real data. The kind of results that would justify a second expedition. The walk back took 2 hours. Comms checks every 30 minutes, each one a performance of normalcy. The jungle watched me go, and at the grotto's entrance, as I stepped back through the waterfall, the bioluminescence flared one bright pulse, like a signal lamp before dimming to its resting rhythm. I didn't look back. Looking back would make it harder to leave. And I needed to leave, needed to return to Hell's Gate with dirty specimens and a boring field report, needed to be James Chen for one more night. The compound's perimeter fence appeared through the thinning tree line. Armed guards, chain link, floodlights. The architecture of a species that had crossed light years to wall itself off from the world it came to exploit. I swiped my credentials at the gate, logged my return, handed the specimen kit to a lab tech who cataloged the contents without looking at me. The grotto's location stayed exactly where it belonged in my head, in no report, on no map that RDA eyes would ever scan. The waterfall sounded different at dawn. Yesterday, approaching from downstream, the grotto had announced itself: gradually a growing hum, a shimmer of reflected light, then the curtain of warm water and the chamber beyond. Today, arriving before the sun cleared the eastern canopy, the waterfall was a low roar against pre-dawn silence. No insect clicks, no avian calls. As if the jungle had cleared a perimeter around this place, and everything with survival instincts knew to stay out. I stood at the entrance for 3 minutes, counting heartbeats. The excuse I'd filed with the lab, a follow-up collection run, same sector, same grid, had taken 5 minutes to approve. Grace had signed off without comment. Either the specimens from yesterday had been good enough to earn trust, or she was giving me enough rope to hang myself. Both options ended with me standing here, alone, Q already uncoiling down my back, tendrils tasting the moisture in the air. Last chance to turn around. Go back to the compound. Be James Chen. Collect specimens for 28 more days, then let them recycle this body and whatever's left of me with it. My feet carried me through the waterfall. The grotto was brighter than yesterday. Not uniformly, the bioluminescence had reorganized overnight, concentrating into pathways along the walls and floor that converged at the chamber's center. Root clusters that had been spread evenly now formed a dense knot around the shallow pool, their neural active tendrils extended upward like fingers reaching for something above. Reaching for a cue. Reaching for me. The last time I'd connected to Pandora on Flora, the fern in Grace's greenhouse, the system had given me fragments. Text. A whisper of something larger. 3.2% of required bandwidth. This root cluster, in this chamber, with this density of neural tissue, the numbers were different. My Q could feel it. The tendrils at its tip were rigid with anticipation, straining toward the closest root the way a compass needle strains toward north. I knelt at the pool's edge, removed the specimen kit, the sensor array, the comms earpiece, set them on a dry ledge where the water wouldn't reach, turned off the transponder. Grace would notice the signal drop. I had maybe 40 minutes before she sent someone to check. 40 minutes to find out if this kills me. The root cluster's tendrils mirrored my cues, extended, waiting, neural filaments phosphorescing in rhythmic pulses that matched my heartbeat. Or my heartbeat had matched their rhythm. I couldn't tell anymore which signal was leading and which was following. I reached back and took my cue in both hands. The braid was warm, alive with its own circulation. The tendrils at the tip curled around my fingers, and I guided them toward the root cluster. Contact. The greenhouse connection had been a garden hose. This was a river. Data crashed through the neural link in a torrent that overwhelmed every sensory channel simultaneously. My vision widened out, then fractured into a kaleidoscope of biological information: chemical compositions, growth patterns, water tables, mineral densities, organism health statuses, predator movements, weather systems, tidal fluctuations in underground aquifers. Not from this grotto. From everywhere. From a network that extended hundreds of kilometers in every direction, connecting billions of organisms into a single distributed consciousness. Eywa. Not a metaphor. Not a cultural tradition. Not a convenient explanation for phenomena science hadn't categorized yet. A planetary intelligence, distributed, decentralized, processing information through biological architecture instead of silicon, and now pouring that processing power through a connection point built for a single NA6 nervous system. My nose bled. Hot copper on my upper lip. The avatar body's neural pathways weren't designed for this bandwidth. Warning signals fired through my peripheral nervous system, tremors in my hands, cramping in my calves, pressure building behind my eyes like a migraine condensed into a single point. Pull away. Disconnect. This is too much. I tried. My hands wouldn't respond. The cue's tendrils had interlocked with the root cluster's filaments at a depth that wasn't voluntary anymore. The connection had escalated from surface link to something structural, the neural tissue literally growing into the junction point, forming temporary bridges between plant and avatar nervous systems. Eywa had me, and she was looking. The data torrent narrowed. The flood of planetary information compressed into a focused beam aimed directly at my consciousness, at the anomaly, the thing that didn't belong. I could feel her attention the way you feel sunlight through a magnifying glass, precise, concentrated, analytical. She was reading me. Every memory, every thought pattern, every trace of Chase Sinclair, the car accident, the Meridian Energy cubicle, the investor pitch on a rainy highway, the truck jackknifing, the darkness, the awakening in blue skin. She found what she was looking for. Anomalous consciousness confirmed. The text burned across my visual field, not the tentative fragments from the greenhouse, but bold, sharp-edged, rendered in a font that existed nowhere in nature but that my human pattern brain generated automatically to interpret bioelectrical data. Classification: foreign soul, extradimensional origin. Neural signature: non-native. Earth origin, cognitive architecture detected. Threat assessment: indeterminate. The grotto pulsed. Every bioluminescent surface synchronized into a single rhythm, fast, urgent, the biological equivalent of an alarm. Initiating quarantine protocol. Walls. Not physical walls, neural ones. Partitions building around my consciousness within the planetary network, isolating my signal from the broader system the way a firewall isolates a suspicious process. I could feel them forming, barriers of organized bioelectrical energy that separated my awareness from Eywa's main processing architecture. This was how a planet's immune system dealt with a foreign body. Not rejection, containment. Study the anomaly. Determine its nature. Decide what to do with it. She's boxing me in. Building a cage made of nerve tissue and bioelectricity, and I'm the thing in the cage. Panic hit. Raw, animal panic that had nothing to do with strategy or intellect, the terror of being trapped, held, examined by something so vast that my entire consciousness was a data point in its analysis. My heart rate spiked. The nosebleed intensified, blood dripping onto my chest. The neural overload sent white noise across my vision, and for 3 seconds I couldn't see anything, just static and the taste of copper and the overwhelming pressure of a mind the size of a world pressing against the walls of a skull that wasn't mine. Then the pressure eased. Not slowly, all at once, like a hand releasing a grip. The quarantine barriers remained, but the analysis stopped. Eywa had reached a conclusion. Quarantine complete. Foreign soul contained within subnetwork partition. Partition designation: Dominion Node Alpha. Analysis result: compatible. Integration recommended. New text. Different formatting, cleaner, structured, like a user interface booting for the first time. Eywa's Dominion system initializing. Administrator access granted. A status screen materialized across my visual field. Translucent, overlaid on the physical world like a heads-up display rendered in living light. Numbers, categories, resource counters, all of it presented in a format that my human brain could parse because it had been built, or adapted, specifically for the way Earth origin consciousness processed information. Think of it this way: Eywa's planetary network was an operating system. The NA6 interfaced with it natively through Tsahelu, prayer, tradition. They were the native applications. But my consciousness was foreign software, incompatible with the base architecture. Rather than crash the system or delete the anomaly, Eywa had created a virtual machine, a sandboxed environment where the foreign code could run safely, contained, monitored, but functional. And then she'd given the foreign code administrator privileges within its sandbox. The status screen displayed. Eywa's Dominion. Administrator, Chase Sinclair, Level 1. Neural energy, 50/100 NE. System points, 0 SP. Faith points, 0 FP. Genetic samples, 0. Territorial influence, 0 TI. Citizens, 0 nodes, 0 territory, 0%. Status: awaiting initial directive. The connection released. My cue detached from the root cluster with a wet sound, neural filaments separating, temporary bridges dissolving. I collapsed backward. My spine hit the grotto floor. The bioluminescence dimmed to its resting state, and the chamber went quiet except for my breathing and the waterfall and the sound of blood dripping from my nose onto stone. I lay there, staring at a status screen that floated in my peripheral vision like a persistent notification. Translucent but present. Real in a way that defied every principle of the physics I'd learned in school, the career I'd built, the life I'd lived before a truck turned me into a smear on Montana asphalt. I died. I woke up in Avatar. And now the planet's biological internet just gave me admin access. Laughter. Broken, wet, tasting like blood and mineral water. It echoed off the grotto walls and came back to me distorted, not quite human, not quite sane. The system. In every transmigration novel I'd read during lunch breaks at Meridian Energy, the system was a gift. A cheat code. A mechanism that turned ordinary people into kingdom builders, dungeon masters, cultivation geniuses. The protagonist got a system, leveled up, became powerful, saved the world or conquered it. But those were stories. written by authors who controlled every variable. This was a planetary consciousness that had detected an anomaly in its network and decided for reasons I couldn't begin to understand to give that anomaly tools instead of destroying it. Not generosity. Pragmatism. The way an operating system doesn't delete a virus if the virus can be repurposed. I rolled onto my side. Blood smeared the stone. My hands trembled, fine motor control compromised by neural overload. The status screen hovered at the edge of my vision, patient and impossible. Level 1. 0 resources. 0 citizens. 0 territory. And a body that was bleeding from a connection it shouldn't have survived. I pushed myself upright. Slowly. The grotto spun, steadied. My queue hung limp against my back, tendrils exhausted, neural filaments dimmed to the faintest glow. The root cluster at the chamber's center had retracted, its own tendrils withdrawn, sealed, the junction point dissolving as if the connection had never happened. Except for the interface floating in my vision. Except for the knowledge, solid and irreversible, that Pandora's consciousness knew what I was and had decided to use me. The trembling in my hands wouldn't stop. I pressed them flat against the wet stone, grounding through cold contact. Breathed. Counted. Waited for the grotto to stop pulsing in time with my heartbeat, or for my heartbeat to stop matching the grotto's pulse. Neither happened. They were synchronized now, bonded. A foreign soul and its cage, learning to coexist. I checked the time. 26 minutes since I'd turned off the transponder. 14 minutes before Grace sent a search party for a dead man's avatar wandering unauthorized in the deep jungle. I stood. Wobbled. Stood again. Wiped the blood from my face with the back of one shaking hand. Packed the specimen kit. Reactivated the transponder. The comms earpiece crackled to life. Chen, respond. You dropped off grid. What's your status? Transponder malfunction. My voice came out steadier than it deserved to. Humidity interference. I'm at grid reference 47 east, point gamma. Returning to base. A pause. The tech's voice, less bored than yesterday. Copy, Chen. Dr. Augustine is requesting an incident report for the signal gap. Understood. Chen out. The status screen pulsed once, a gentle flare of light, as if acknowledging my attention, and then dimmed to a background hum, present but unobtrusive. Waiting. The way a tool waits to be picked up. I gathered my equipment and stepped through the waterfall. The jungle greeted me with its cathedral of sound and green, and for the first time since waking in the wrong body, I walked through it with something other than fear. Not confidence. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Purpose. The hike back took 2 hours. My legs worked on autopilot while my mind cataloged what I knew. Level 1. Administrator access. Resources at 0 across the board. No citizens, no nodes, no territory. A system designed or adapted to give me tools for building something on a planet that was about to be torn apart by the RDA's mining operations. In the movie, Jake Sully had stumbled into the NA6, earned their trust, became Torek Makto, led them in a desperate battle against the bulldozers and gunships and corporate greed. And it had worked barely, bloodily, at enormous cost. But Jake hadn't had a system. Jake hadn't been quarantined and categorized and given a user interface by the planet itself. Whatever Eywa was doing, it was different from canon. New. Unpredictable. The compound appeared through the tree lean. Fences. Guards. Humanity's fortress on an alien world. I swiped my credentials at the gate. Logged my return. Handed the specimen kit to a tech who didn't look up. The status screen flickered. New text, sharp and red at the edges, demanding attention. Quest notification. Establish sanctuary node within 72 hours. Reward, 150 SP, plus 1 TRA, sanctuary node, LV1. Failure penalty, system access revoked. Administrator status terminated. 72 hours. 3 days to find a location, claim a territory node, and establish the first foothold of whatever Eywa was building through me, or lose everything. The system. The purpose. Probably the last reason this body had to exist. I walked toward the avatar barracks, hands still shaking, blood still drying under my nose, with a countdown I couldn't pause and a mandate I couldn't refuse. 68 hours. I was standing in the shower block running numbers that wouldn't cooperate, hot water hammering shoulders built for a species that evolved under different gravity, and every calculation ended the same way, not enough time. The quest timer pulsed in the upper corner of my vision, a red numeral ticking down with the mechanical patience of something that didn't care about schedules, cover stories, or the fact that the person it was counting down for had lab obligations in 11 hours. Quest, establish sanctuary node. Time remaining, 67 hours 42 minutes and 18 seconds. Location requirements, neural density greater than or equal to 500/cm superscript 3, minimum 50 square meters uncontested area. Cost, 50 NE, 4 hours continuous presence. Failure, system access revoked. 4 hours. The node claim required 4 hours of unbroken contact with the grotto's root network. The hike to Sector 7 was 3 hours each way. That was 10 hours minimum, and that assumed no complications, no patrols, no comms checks, no Grace Augustine appearing with her day top hat and her questions. The water turned cold. I'd been standing here long enough for the compound's rationing system to cycle to its conservation protocol. The avatar body barely registered the temperature change. NA6 thermoregulation was absurdly efficient compared to human biology, but the shock broke my arithmetic spiral. Stop panicking. You managed project timelines for 7 years. This is logistics. Treat it like logistics. I killed the water, grabbed a towel that was comically undersized for this body, more washcloth than towel, and dried what I could reach. The dried blood from my nose had already been cleaned, but the neural strain lingered as a dull ache behind my eyes, a reminder of what full bandwidth contact with a planetary consciousness felt like from the inside. The interface floated in my peripheral vision. I'd spent the walk back from the grotto learning to navigate it mental commands, like thinking about opening a folder on a desktop computer. The system responded to intention rather than gesture, which meant I could browse menus without anyone noticing unusual hand movements. Territory nodes opened into a submenu. Most options were grayed out, locked behind level requirements or resource costs I couldn't meet. But Claim Sanctuary node glowed active. I expanded it. Sanctuary node core ability. Function, home base, respawn point, core network hub. Requirements, neural dense location, greater than or equal to 500/cm superscript 3, 50 NE, 4 hours continuous Sahela. Benefits, territory, 5 km radius, regenerative field, hostile detection, territorial awareness. Upgrades, available after establishment. The grotto qualified. Neural density over 800 per cubic centimeter, well above the threshold. The location was remote enough that RDA patrols wouldn't stumble across it, and close enough to Hell's Gate that I could reach it within a standard expedition window. The problem was the 4 hours. Standard solo expeditions were capped at 6 hours including transit. I'd used 5 hours today, 3 walking, 2 at the grotto. To claim the node, I'd need at least 10 hours in the field. Maybe 12, accounting for the neural strain that would hit during the claiming process. No standard expedition authorization covered that kind of duration. Citizen registry grayed out. Evolution trees grayed out. Blueprints grayed out. Everything locked behind the sanctuary. The system was designed to funnel me toward this single objective: claim territory first, then build. Without the node, I was a level 1 administrator with an interface and nothing to administrate. Extended expedition. That's the play. Request an overnight field study. Some researchers do them. Grace mentioned neural mapping in James Chen's publication record. An overnight observation of bioluminescent circadian patterns would justify 12 hours in sector. The plan had a problem. Grace had already flagged my behavior as borderline. Requesting an overnight expedition 4 days into my tenure with a grief assessment on my record and Selfridge's new policy about psychological instability would either look ambitious or unhinged. The line between those two interpretations was Grace's judgment call. I dressed and headed for the mess hall, pulling up the expedition request interface on my wrist display. The overnight slot was open. Weather forecast, clear. No scheduled patrols in Sector 7. Submit the request. Worst case, she says no and I'm back to calculating impossible timelines. I submitted it. The confirmation pinged, request pending. Dr. G. Augustine, approving authority. The mess hall was half empty at 19:30 hours. Most personnel ate between 1700 and 18:30, which meant the late crowd was a mix of night shift workers and people who didn't like company. I qualified as both. The protein loaf had been replaced by something the kitchen called stir-fry, which was generous terminology for reconstituted vegetables swimming in brown sauce over nutrient rice. I piled a tray and found a corner table where my height didn't force other diners to crane their necks. The food was terrible. I ate it anyway. The avatar body burned through calories at a rate that would bankrupt a small restaurant, and skipping meals was a luxury I couldn't afford with neural strain still thinning my reserves. Each bite was a transaction, energy in, function maintained, one less variable to worry about. Hey Chen, right? James Chen. A tray clattered onto the table across from me. The man holding it was human-sized, mid-30s, with the kind of face that couldn't hide a single emotion it experienced. Brown eyes wide behind corrective lenses. Hair that suggested a losing war with Pandora's humidity. Lab coat over a t-shirt advertising a band I'd never heard of, or rather, a band Chase Sinclair had never heard of, because this was 2152 and popular culture had moved on. Norm Spellman. He stuck out his hand, then pulled it back when he registered the scale difference between his fingers and mine. We shared lab space. Briefly. During orientation week. Before he gestured vaguely. I heard about the cryo thing. Really sorry. Norm Spellman. Xenolinguist. Avatar driver. In the movie, he was Jake Sully's earnest sidekick, prepared for everything, skilled at nothing practical, desperate to connect with the NA6 and constantly tripping over his own enthusiasm. Thanks, I said. Orientation week's a blur, honestly. Oh, totally. Cryosleep recovery plus first link disorientation. I was a mess for days. He sat without being invited, which was either rude or lonely. Probably lonely. I'm in xenolinguistics. We're down the hall from Dr. Augustine's lab. I see you in the corridor sometimes. The avatar body's kind of, noticeable. Hard to miss at 9 feet. Norm laughed. It was the laugh of a man who hadn't had someone respond to his conversation starters in a while. Bright, too loud, cut short by self-awareness. So how's the field work going? I heard you got solo expedition approval already. That's fast for a new driver. Grace wants results. I'm producing results. She's intense, right? First week, she quizzed me on tonal variations in the Omaticaya dialect for 2 hours straight. I got one phoneme wrong and she made me redo the entire analysis. He said it with admiration, not resentment. A student who loved the harshest teacher. I let him talk. Norm Spellman was a river of information that required almost no prompting: lab schedules, staff dynamics, which corridors had security cameras and which didn't, whose avatar was in maintenance rotation, when the link bay was empty. All of it flowing out in a conversational torrent that he probably couldn't have stopped if he tried. This man is a walking intelligence briefing. And he doesn't even know it. Not an ally. Not yet. An asset. Someone to file away and understand his schedule, his vulnerabilities, his need for connection in a compound full of people who found him exhausting. If I needed help down the line, a distraction, a cover story, a set of human-sized hands in the link bay, Norm Spellman would say yes before the question finished leaving my mouth. The realization tasted worse than the stir-fry. Here I was, cataloging a lonely man's weaknesses over dinner, measuring his value as a resource. Something James Chen might never have done. Something Chase Sinclair, the project manager, the normal guy, the man who died on a highway, would have recognized as manipulative. Except Chase Sinclair has 63 hours to claim a patch of alien jungle or lose the only thing keeping him alive. Morality is a luxury. Survival isn't. Norm was saying something about NA6 verb conjugation. I tuned back in, nodded at the right moments, asked a question about clan dialects that made his face light up. By the time the meal ended, he'd given me his shift schedule, his comm frequency, and an open invitation to stop by the linguistics lab anytime. I thanked him. Meant it, partially. Hated myself, partially. The quest timer ticked, 53 hours 14 minutes and 7 seconds. The expedition request sat in my inbox, unanswered. Grace's approval light was dark. I lay in the avatar barracks with the lights off, staring at a ceiling that was too close and a countdown that was too fast, running routes in my head. 3 hours to the grotto. 4 hours for the claim. 3 hours back. 10 hours. The overnight slot, if approved, gave me 14. Enough margin for complications. Enough time to become something more than a dead man borrowing someone else's face. The approval notification pinged at 2247. Grace's note was 2 words, be careful. I closed my eyes. The status screen dimmed to standby. The timer kept counting. 44 hours to go. And in the morning, I was walking into the jungle to claim a piece of it as mine. I ran the last kilometer. Not because the schedule demanded it. The overnight expedition gave me 14 hours, and I'd made good time through the pre-dawn jungle. I ran because my body wanted to run. Because the queue on my back was pulling me forward like a compass needle, tendrils extended and rigid, pointing toward the grotto with an urgency that bypassed conscious thought and plugged straight into the motor cortex. The waterfall appeared through the tree line. Smaller than I remembered from 2 days ago, memory distorted by fear and wonder, but the sound was the same. Low roar against morning silence. No insect clicks, no avian calls. The cleared perimeter that living things with survival instincts respected. I ducked through the curtain of water. The grotto opened around me, bioluminescence shifting to acknowledge my presence or my cue's electromagnetic signature, or whatever the root network used to differentiate between passing wildlife and something that held administrator access. The root cluster at the center was waiting. Tendrils extended, phosphorescing in rhythmic pulses that synchronized with my heartbeat before I crossed the threshold. The same junction point where, 2 days ago, Eywa had crashed through my consciousness like a freight train and rebuilt my understanding of reality. Last time, you nearly bled out from the bandwidth. This time, you're doing it on purpose. For 4 hours. I set down the specimen kit. Positioned it near the entrance where I could grab it on the way out. The cover story only worked if I returned with samples. Turned off the transponder. Disabled comms. 14 hours of authorized absence, and Grace's 2-word blessing, be careful. The interface pulsed. Claim sanctuary node. Location, Sector 7 Grotto. Neural density, 847/cm superscript 3. Cost, 50 NE. Current, 48/100. Duration, 4 hours continuous. Sahela. Warning, neural strain expected. Maintain conscious coherence. 48 NE. I'd regenerated from the system awakening, but not completely. The claim would leave me with nothing. 0 reserves, 0 margin for error. If something went wrong mid-ritual, there was no backup power to pull from. The quest expires in 44 hours. There is no second chance. I knelt at the pool's edge, took the cue in both hands. The tendrils reached for the root cluster the way they'd reached in the greenhouse that first night, instinct overriding caution, biology demanding connection. Okay, Eywa, let's do this. Contact. The data torrent hit, but different this time. Not the overwhelming flood of the system awakening, where Eywa's full planetary bandwidth had crashed through an unprepared nervous system. This was structured, channeled. A river diverted into an irrigation system, each stream carrying specific information to specific parts of my awareness. The grotto's root network opened to me layer by layer. Topsoil connections first, shallow roots linking ferns, mosses, fungi into a local mesh. Then deeper, the mycorrhizal highways connecting the grotto to the broader forest network, carrying chemical signals across kilometers of subterranean architecture. Deeper still, the bedrock roots, ancient and slow, tapping into mineral veins and geothermal energy that had been cycling since before any life on this moon could think. And through all of it, the assessment. Not Eywa's full attention. I'd earned that during the awakening, and once was apparently enough. This was more like a security clearance check. The subnetwork Eywa had built around me Dominion Node Alpha. My quarantine-turned sandbox was extending itself into the grotto's biological architecture, establishing protocols, writing access permissions, making the grotto mine in a way that wasn't metaphorical. My nose bled. Expected. I'd brought a strip of fabric from the barracks, and I pressed it to my face with one hand while the other held the cue steady against the root cluster. The blood was warm. Copper taste on my lips. A cost, paid in real time. 1 hour. The grotto's surface-level organisms shifted. Bioluminescence patterns reorganized from their natural chaos into geometric configurations, hexagonal grids, like the compound eyes of an insect, each cell pulsing at a unique frequency. The walls were becoming a display. A status readout written in living light. Sanctuary node establishment, 22%. 2 hours. My consciousness fragmented. Not the terrifying dissolution of the awakening, more like a splitting of attention. I was kneeling at the pool, feeling the cool stone under my knees and the warm blood on my lip. Simultaneously, I was the fern cluster 6 meters to my left, photosynthesizing in the soft light, drawing nutrients through roots that connected to the same network my Q was plugged into. Simultaneously, I was the moss carpet along the north wall, sensing vibration through substrate, detecting the footfall of something small, a lizard analog crossing the grotto's entrance. Multiple perspectives. A shared nervous system expanding to include the grotto's entire biological community, with my consciousness as the rooting node. This is what it means to be a territory node. Not ownership. Integration. The land doesn't belong to me, I belong to the land, and the land lets me listen. The fragmentation intensified. 3 perspectives. 5. 8. My individual sense of self, Chase Sinclair, human consciousness in an alien body, became a voice in a chorus, still distinct but no longer solo. The grotto's organisms didn't think in words. They processed in sensation, moisture levels, nutrient gradients, light frequencies, threat vibrations, information without interpretation, data without narrative. My brain tried to impose narrative anyway. Human pattern recognition, insisting on stories even when the data was just data. I pushed against it. Let the sensory chorus wash through without forcing it into categories. Breathed. Existed as part of something larger than a single skull could contain. Sanctuary node establishment, 64%. 3 hours. The headache arrived. Not the sharp lance of the awakening, a deep, structural pressure, like the bones of my skull were being asked to house something they weren't built for. The avatar body's neural architecture was designed for Tsahela, for temporary connections with individual organisms. It wasn't designed to serve as a permanent hub for an entire microecology. Eywa's sandbox was adapting the hardware. I could feel its subtle adjustments to the neural cue's filament density, changes in the conductivity of the tendrils, micro-modifications to the avatar's nervous system that would make future connections smoother. Not painless. The modifications themselves hurt, a burning itch that radiated from the base of my braid down my spine and into my extremities. Blood dripped from my nose onto the stone. I'd soaked through the fabric strip. The pool beneath me reflected a face tight with concentration, yellow eyes glowing brighter than they should, bioluminescent markings along the jawline pulsing in perfect sync with the grotto's hexagonal display. 1 more hour. You can do 1 more hour. I held on. Not with strength, with stubbornness. The quality that had kept Chase Sinclair at a desk job for 7 years, pitching renewable energy to investors who didn't care, because the work mattered even when the results didn't come. The quality that had driven James Chen to spend 3 years applying for a program that sent people 6 light years from home, because his sister died and staying on Earth meant standing still. Borrowed stubbornness. Mine and his. Enough for 1 more hour. Sanctuary node establishment, 100%. Complete. The connection released. Not abruptly, a gradual loosening, filaments separating, perspectives collapsing back into a single point of view. I was Chase again. Just Chase. Kneeling in a grotto that had become, in some fundamental biological sense, an extension of his body. Sanctuary node established level 1. Territory, 5 kilometers radius from node center. Active buffs, regenerative field, hostile detection, territorial awareness. Reward, plus 150 SP, plus 1 territorial authority. Neural energy, 0/100 NE regenerating. I collapsed. Not dramatically, just a slow sideways tilt until my shoulder met the moss carpet along the pool's edge. The moss compressed under my weight, then adjusted, shifting, conforming, building a surface that supported my body in the specific places it needed support. A mattress made of living organisms that recognized me as their network hub and responded accordingly. The grotto breathed around me, walls expanding, contracting. Not metaphor, actual movement, the biological architecture cycling air through the chamber in gentle currents that carried warmth from the geothermal layer below and moisture from the waterfall above. My territory. My sanctuary. The first patch of this alien world that I could call mine, not borrowed, not stolen, not faked. 150 SP. First real resource. Enough to buy, let me check. The interface showed blueprints. Tier 1, bioluminescent markers, 50 SP, healing pod, 100 SP, watcher vine, 75 SP. Basic tools. Surveillance, recovery, boundary marking. The building blocks of something that could grow. But not now. Now, my neural energy was at 0, my nose was crusted with dried blood, and every synapse in my avatar's nervous system was screaming for rest. The grotto's regenerative field was already working, a warm tingling that spread from the moss contact points through my skin and into the tissue beneath, but even accelerated recovery couldn't replace 4 hours of sustained neural drain in minutes. I slept. Not by choice, the body simply shut down, conservation protocols overriding conscious will. The last thing I registered was the grotto's bioluminescence dimming to a soft amber, the waterfall's roar fading to white noise, and the territorial awareness buff expanding through the 5 kilometers radius like a ripple in a pond, touching every organism in range and cataloging it. Mine. This place was mine. For the first time since waking in the wrong body, something closer to peace than fear settled into the spaces between my ribs. A notification waited behind my eyelids, patient and improbable. Citizen binding available, compatible entity detected. 200 meters north. The sound came through the network before it reached my ears. Pain. Not a word, a frequency. A vibration pattern transmitted through root systems and picked up by the territorial awareness buff like a radio catching a distress signal. Something was hurting, 200 meters north of the grotto, and the sanctuary's biological architecture was reporting it with the efficiency of a sensor array. I opened my eyes. The grotto had shifted to evening cycle illumination, soft indigo and violet, energy-conserving rhythms. The moss mattress had grown small tendrils that draped over my shoulders like a blanket. My neural energy readout showed 32/100 partial regeneration during however long I'd been unconscious. The notification still pulsed. Citizen binding available. Compatible entity, Pandora Viper Wolf, Alpha class. Distance, 187 meters north-northwest. Status, injured. Immobile. Pack absent. Binding cost, 10 NE. The Viper Wolf Alpha. The one from my first expedition, scarred muzzle, yellow eyes, the pack leader that had circled me in the stream and walked away. 3 days ago it had studied me like a puzzle it couldn't solve. Now it was trapped, alone, broadcasting pain through a network it didn't know I could hear. Compatible entity. The system wants me to bind it. Turn a predator into a citizen? Is that what citizen means for an animal? I expanded the binding interface. Soul binding tier 1, surface link. Target, willing or subdued creature. Method, Sahalo, neural Q connection. Effects, telepathic link, stat boost, plus 10%, shared senses. Duration, permanent, unless deliberately severed. Creature slot cost, 2 of 10 available. Permanent. Not a temporary partnership, a neural bond that linked the creature's consciousness to my network. I'd feel what it felt. It would receive buffs from the sanctuary. We'd share senses, communicate telepathically. A bound creature wasn't a pet. It was an extension of the system. The pain frequency pulsed again. Sharper. I stood. Gathered nothing the specimen kit could stay. If the Viper Wolf was injured badly enough to trigger a system notification, minutes mattered. The grotto entrance was a curtain of warm water, and beyond it, the jungle had settled into twilight mode. Bioluminescence bloomed across every surface, the forest's night shift clocking in, turning the canopy into a ceiling of living stars. My territorial awareness buff reached ahead, mapping the terrain, root structures, animal movements, water flow patterns. Everything within 5 kilometers was data, and the data guided my feet. North-northwest. Past the stream where the hexapod had clipped my shoulder, the bank still showed the depression from my fall, mud already filling it in. Past the rock formation where I'd first entered the grotto's influence zone. Into a section of secondary growth where fallen trees had opened gaps in the canopy, letting Polyphemus light pool on the forest floor in silver columns. The Viper Wolf was pinned under a branch the diameter of my thigh. Not a fresh fall, the wood was partially decomposed, which meant it had been weakened before it dropped. Fungal damage. A wind gust, maybe, or the weight of a climbing creature. The branch had caught the alpha across its hindquarters, pinning its back legs against a root buttress. The animal had clawed furrows into the soil trying to drag itself free. Blood dark, almost black in the bioluminescent light pooled under its flank. The scarred muzzle swung toward me. Yellow eyes dilated with pain, with adrenaline, with the bone-deep recognition that immobility meant death on a world where everything was either predator or prey. It snarled. Lips pulled back over teeth designed to shear meat from bone. The sound was a warning, a threat, and a plea compressed into one vibration. That's the alpha. The one that smelled me in the stream and didn't attack. Its pack is gone. It's been here long enough to claw trenches in the dirt. If I leave it, something bigger finds it by morning. I crouched. Slowly. 3 meters away, close enough to see individual dermal filaments along the creature's spine, neural active, bioluminescent, flickering in distress patterns. Close enough to see the break, left rear leg, mid-tibia, the bone visible through a tear in the skin. Compound fracture. Without treatment, infection within hours. Death within days. The snarl intensified. The alpha's forelimbs tensed, claws extending, ready to defend itself against the thing approaching from its vulnerable side. Pack instinct. Face forward, protect the flank. Except the pack wasn't here, and one set of jaws couldn't cover 360 degrees. Easy. My voice came out lower than intended, the avatar's vocal cords resonating in the subharmonic range that Pandora fauna used for non-threatening communication. I hadn't tried that deliberately. The body was adapting, pulling from James Chen's muscle memory and the system's neural modifications to produce sounds that meant safe in a language older than speech. The alpha's snarl dropped to a growl. Uncertain. Its nostrils worked the air, sampling my chemical signature the way it had at the stream. Whatever it smelled 3 days ago, it smelled again now, the wrongness, the foreignness, the electromagnetic trace of a consciousness that wasn't supposed to exist on this moon. But this time, something else was mixed in. The sanctuary's resonance. The territorial buff broadcasting through my skin like a pheromone, marking me as part of the network. Not predator, not prey. Note. The growl faded. I moved closer. 1 meter. The alpha tracked me with its eyes, forelimbs still tensed, but the killing intent had drained. In its place, exhaustion, pain, and the desperate pragmatism of an animal that recognized help even when help came in an incomprehensible form. My cue uncoiled. The tendrils extended toward the alpha's neural tendrils, a smaller braid, thinner, running along the back of its neck beneath the dermal armor. Viper wolf cues weren't voluntary the way NA6 cues were. The filaments at the tip opened reflexively in response to proximity, neural tissue seeking neural tissue. Initiate binding. Cost, 10 NE, current, 32/100. Target, Viper wolf alpha class, male, approximately 6 years. Condition, critical compound fracture, blood loss, early infection. 10 NE. That leaves me at 22. Enough to stay conscious. Probably. The filaments touched. Plant connections were data chemical compositions, growth rates, nutrient flows. Structured and interpretable. This was nothing like that. Raw animal consciousness crashed through the bond like a wall of sensation. Hunger, pain, territory, pack loss, rage, fear, cold ground, can't move, danger, no wait, not danger, what is this? No language. No structure. Just the unfiltered experience of being a predator pinned to the earth with a broken leg, watching something approach that should be food but smelled like the forest itself. I gritted my teeth and held the connection. The system's interface layered over the chaos, a translation protocol converting raw animal data into categories my human brain could process. Health status, critical. Pain level, extreme. Pack bond, severed. Pack departed after entrapment, survival protocol, don't wait for the fallen. Emotional state, fear dominant, aggression secondary, surrender emerging. The binding prompt appeared. Soul binding confirm. This action is permanent. Creature will be added to citizen registry. Designation required upon completion. I pushed the confirmation through. Not with words, with intention. The same way I navigated the interface, a thought with weight behind it. The bond locked. Something clicked into place at a level deeper than neural tissue, a resonance between two consciousness patterns that the system recognized as compatible and bridged with permanent architecture. The Viper wolf's awareness flooded into mine, and mine into its, and for 3 seconds the boundary between Chase Sinclair and a 6-year-old Pandoran predator dissolved completely. I was the forest, running with the pack through moonlight, the joy of synchronized movement, 6 bodies working as one organism. The scent of prey, sapid, young, limping, and the burst of speed that was better than any drug because it wasn't pleasure, it was purpose. The fight with a rival pack 3 seasons ago, the scar on the muzzle earned, the dominance established. The den, the warmth, the smell of pack mates sleeping in a pile while rain hammered the canopy above. And then, the branch, the crack, the weight, the pack circling, whining, then leaving one by one because staying meant dying, and the alpha understood this even as he screamed for them to come back. The bond stabilized. 2 awareness patterns, linked but separate, occupying the same neural network without merging. I was Chase. The Viper wolf was the Viper wolf. But between us ran a current of shared sensation that didn't need language to communicate. Citizen bound, Viper wolf, alpha, designation required. A name. The system wanted a name. In the transmigration novels I'd read at my desk at Meridian, back when that desk existed, back when that life was real, the protagonist always named their first companion something dramatic. Something that announced power and purpose. The Viper wolf's mind brushed mine. Cold water. Dark earth. The shadow under the canopy where prey couldn't see you coming. Shadow fang. The word left my mouth before the thought fully formed. Not dramatic. Not calculated. Just, accurate. Designation accepted, Shadow Fang. Citizen number 1 Viper Wolf Alpha. Bond tier, 1, surface link. Status, critical medical intervention required. +1 faith point, first citizen bonus. The interface updated. Citizens, 1 faith points, 1 neural energy, 22/100. And underneath the numbers, the persistent hum of a telepathic connection carrying one simple message from the creature pinned under a branch. Hurts. I know. I reached for the branch. 9 feet of avatar body, muscles designed for a species that lived in trees and ran like the wind. The branch was heavy, waterlogged, dense with Pandoran hardwood, but it shifted when I braced my feet and pulled. Soil gave. Wood cracked. The Viper wolf yelped, a sound that I registered in my ears and in my nervous system simultaneously, the bond transmitting pain like a shared wire. The branch rolled clear. Shadow Fang's hindquarters were free, but the left rear leg hung at an angle that made my own tibia ache in sympathy. Compound fracture. Bone visible through torn skin. Blood less than I'd feared. The cold ground had slowed circulation. You were a project manager, Chase. You organized supply chains and managed timelines. Now you're setting a compound fracture on a wolf the size of a Great Dane, in an alien jungle, at twilight, with no medical training. I tore strips from my expedition shirt. NA6 weave fabric tougher than cotton, flexible, semi-sterile thanks to the compound's laundry protocols. Splint material, a straight branch, snapped to length, bark stripped. I'd seen enough survival shows in my previous life to know the theory. The practice was messy. Shadow Fang bit me twice during the process. Not hard warning snaps, instinctive responses to pain. The bond carried an apology of sorts, not enemy still hurts can't he help it. I sent back the closest thing to reassurance I could manage, stay still almost done the hurting stops soon. The splint held. Not pretty fabric wrapped too tight in some places, too loose in others but the bone was aligned and the wound was covered. Shadow Fang tested the leg, whimpered, and lay back down. The bond hummed with exhaustion and something I interpreted as grudging acceptance. My first citizen is a crippled wolf that tried to size me up for dinner 3 days ago. This is going well. I sat on the forest floor next to a 6-year-old predator with a makeshift splint on its leg and a permanent telepathic link to my consciousness. My hands were sticky with dark viper wolf blood. My expedition shirt was in strips. My neural energy was at 22%, and the sanctuary's regenerative field active within the 5-kilometer radius was already working on Shadow Fang's wound, a warm glow visible at the edges of the bandaging. Through the bond, not words. Sensations. The memory of running pack speed, coordinated movement, the alpha at the center directing with growls and posture. Cold water from a stream. Warm den. The satisfaction of a full stomach. And underneath, the question that animals don't ask in words but communicate in everything they do. Safe? I put my hand on Shadow Fang's flank. The fur was coarse, thick, warm over the rapid heartbeat beneath. The dermal filaments along his spine pulsed once in response to touch, not a bond gesture, just contact. One body acknowledging another. Safe, I said. You're safe. The viper wolf's eyes closed. Not sleep, a predator's half-rest, one ear still tracking the forest sounds, hindquarters still tense. But the killing readiness was gone. Replaced by something fragile that a 6-year-old apex predator probably hadn't offered to another living thing since it was a pup sleeping against its mother. Trust. The sun had set. Polyphemus hung in the gap between canopy crowns, its gas giant bulk filling a quarter of the visible sky. My overnight expedition window was burning, and I was sitting in dirt with blood on my hands and a bond in my head and a sanctuary node humming 5 minutes walk to the south. Through the territorial awareness, movement. Small creatures, night active, following their circuits through the underbrush. No threats. No patrols. No human signatures within 5 kilometers. I should get him to the grotto. The regenerative field is stronger at the node center, and I need to figure out how to explain returning to base with half a shirt and blood that isn't mine. Shadow Fang's mind pressed against the edge of mine, a wordless image of being carried, the indignity of it, the grudging acceptance that walking wasn't an option. I lifted him. 60 kilograms of muscle and fur and teeth and a temper that could open arteries, cradled in arms built for a species that carried their children through treetops. He growled once for form's sake, then went still, eyes tracking the forest over my shoulder while I walked south toward the waterfall. The grotto welcomed us. Bioluminescence intensified as I carried Shadow Fang through the curtain of water, the root network registering the new citizen and adjusting its output to support healing. The moss carpet expanded to accommodate 2 bodies. The regenerative field concentrated around the injured leg, warm light seeping through bandages. I set Shadow Fang down. He curled into the moss, instinct finding comfort in a surface that shaped itself to his body, and his eyes closed for real this time. Proper sleep. The bond carried his consciousness into a quiet place where pain was present but manageable, and the network's warmth was indistinguishable from pack warmth. Through the bond, fading as sleep took him, the sensation of running. Cold water and dark earth and the shadow under the canopy. Not a memory now. A promise. Okay. 1 sanctuary node. 1 injured viper wolf. 0 SP after I buy a healing pod, which I should absolutely do, and 22 neural energy that's regenerating at 5 per hour inside the territory. I pulled up the interface. Blueprints Tier 1. Healing pod, 100 SP accelerated recovery station. Current SP, 150. Buying the healing pod would leave me with 50 SP, enough for bioluminescent markers to define the territory boundary, but nothing else. No watcher vine for surveillance. No defensive structures. Shadow Fang's leg needs priority. If the fracture heals wrong, I lose my only citizen. If it heals right, I gain a scout, a fighter, and a creature that knows this forest better than I ever will. Purchase, healing pod 100 SP. Confirmed. Construction time, 4 hours. Remaining SP, 50. A section of the grotto wall shifted. Not collapse growth. Root tissue extruded from the stone in rapid spirals, weaving a pod-shaped structure lined with bioluminescent gel. The healing pod wouldn't be ready until the small hours, but when it finished, Shadow Fang's fracture recovery would drop from weeks to days. I leaned against the grotto wall. My back found a curve in the stone that matched the shape of my spine, the sanctuary accommodating its administrator, and for a moment, with Shadow Fang sleeping at my feet and the healing pod growing on the far wall and the territorial network humming in a 5-kilometer radius around us, the math worked. 1 node. 1 citizen. 50 SP in reserve. 22 NE regenerating. Not enough. Barely a foundation. But foundations were what everything else grew from, and Chase Sinclair, project manager, transmigrator, accidental administrator of a planetary consciousness's sandbox experiment, knew how to build from foundations. The sun was down. The grotto breathed. And somewhere beyond the perimeter, in a compound full of humans who thought they owned this moon, Grace Augustine was waiting for a field report from a dead man who was becoming something else entirely. I was 30 hours past my last check-in. The comms had been off since morning. When I walked back through that gate tomorrow, there would be questions, hard ones, the kind that required lies precise enough to satisfy a woman who solved puzzles for a living. Tomorrow's problem. Tonight, the wolf heals and the node grows and I figure out what kind of administrator I'm going to be. Shadow Fang's flank rose and fell. The healing pod's roots spiraled another inch from the wall. The grotto pulsed once warm, slow, alive, and I closed my eyes against a ceiling of living light. The floodlights hit me before the voice did. White-hot halogen, angled upward to catch anything taller than human standard approaching the eastern gate. I threw an arm across my eyes. The specimen kit banged against my hip. Behind me, the jungle's bioluminescence dimmed in protest at the intrusion, nature's night cycle surrendering to 100,000 lumens of human paranoia. Hold position. Identify yourself. The voice belonged to a man in RDA security fatigues, sidearm drawn but pointed at the ground. Professional trigger discipline. Name tag, Martinez, D. Behind him, a second guard operated the gate scanner while a third spoke rapidly into a handheld comm unit. James Chen. I kept my hands visible. 9 feet of avatar body lit up like a stage performer, every shade of blue washed pale by the floods. Avatar driver. Xenobotany division. I had an authorized overnight expedition in Sector 7. Martinez checked his day top hat. His face did something complicated. Chen, your overnight authorization expired 14 hours ago. You've been off-grid for 30 plus hours. Comms dead. Transponder intermittent. We've got a search protocol active. 14 hours past authorization. Not 30. The overnight bought me more time than I calculated. But 14 hours is still enough to trigger every alarm in the book. Equipment malfunction. The lie came out smooth. Practiced. I'd been rehearsing it during the 3-hour hike from the grotto, shaping it with each step. The portable comm unit shorted during a stream crossing. Same stream that took my transponder offline intermittently on my first expedition. I sheltered in place per emergency protocol until conditions were safe to return. You sheltered for 14 hours. Viper wolf activity in the area. Pack of 6, maybe more. I wasn't going to hike 3 hours through contested territory at night without communications. Martinez's expression didn't change. He waved me through the scanner. The gate's biometric system confirmed James Chen, avatar driver, clearance level 3, and holstered his sidearm. Dr. Augustine is waiting for you in Lab 3. She's been there since midnight. Of course she has. The walk from the perimeter gate to the science wing took 4 minutes. Long enough for the adrenaline to curdle into something heavier. My hands were shaking again, not the neural fatigue tremors from the grotto, but the specific vibration of a man about to face consequences he'd earned. Through the bond, distant but present, Shadow Fang's heartbeat pulsed in the back of my skull. Slow, steady. The Viper Wolf was sleeping in the sanctuary, legs splinted, regenerative field knitting bone and tissue back together. Safe. Unaware that the person he'd bonded with was about to walk into an interrogation. Lab 3 was lit. Grace stood at her workstation, day top hat in hand, lab coat wrinkled in a way that said she hadn't left this room since the search alert triggered. The cigarette behind her ear was fresh, unlit, but fresh. She'd been chain replacing them. Chen. One word. Loaded with 12 hours of waiting and the specific fury of a scientist who'd vouched for someone and been made to regret it. Grace, sit down. I sat. The lab stool groaned. My tail wrapped around its base like a nervous cat. Grace didn't sit. She stood over me, which was an achievement, given the height difference, and tapped her day top hat against her palm in a rhythm that matched Martinez's trigger discipline, controlled, deliberate, ready. Equipment malfunction. That's your story. The comm unit shorted during a stream crossing. I heard. Martinez calmed me. Your initial statement. She set the day top hat on the bench. Hard. Let me tell you what I see. I see an avatar driver on grief leave who requested solo expeditions in a remote sector within days of his first field deployment. I see that driver returning from his first overnight 12 hours late, with a comm unit that, let me check, yes, functions perfectly well now that it's dry. She picked up the comm unit from my specimen kit. Turned it on. It beeped. Humidity sensitive, I said. Extended immersion. These units are rated for full submersion to 5 meters for 30 minutes. They're designed for Pandora, Chen. They don't short from a stream crossing. Silence. The lab's ventilation hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a centrifuge spun. She knows the equipment story doesn't hold. Give her something better or lose everything. I panicked. Grace's hand stopped tapping. The Viper Wolf pack, I've encountered them before, in the same sector. They circled me on my first expedition. Didn't attack, but I let the pause stretch. Let her fill it with the image of a grieving scientist, alone in alien jungle, surrounded by predators. When the comms went down and I heard them in the canopy, I froze, sheltered under a rock overhang and waited. By the time the sounds stopped, it was too dark to navigate safely. Half-truth. The Viper Wolves had been there. I had sheltered at the grotto. The panic was real, just pointed in the wrong direction. Grace's jaw worked. The anger was still there, but something else was elbowing through the same sympathy that had softened her when I'd mentioned Mei Chen. The recognition that James Chen had lost his sister, then lost his body, and was now alone on an alien moon making bad decisions from a place of fear rather than malice. Martinez filed a formal incident report, she said, quieter now. It goes to Selfridge's office. With the greenhouse visit and the transponder gap from your last trip, that's 3 flags in 5 days. 3 flags. The first day in Max Patel's medical bay, when the neural readings had been anomalous. the greenhouse at 3 in the morning, the transponder gap during the system awakening. And now this. One more incident, one more, and you're in mandatory evaluation. You know what that means. Program removal. Program removal. Avatar recycled. You cease to exist, Chen. There's no human body to go home to. She picked up her cigarette, examined it, put it back behind her ear. I'm vouching for you one more time. The report goes through with a notation that Dr. Augustine observed no behavioral pathology inconsistent with documented grief response. That buys you breathing room. Not much. She's protecting me. Again. And I'm lying to her face. Again. Grace. Don't. She raised a hand. Don't thank me. Don't apologize. Just for God's sake stop giving them ammunition. You're a good researcher. Your specimens from Sector 7 are the best neural density data we've gotten in 2 years. That matters. Don't let whatever's happening in your head destroy the work. She left. The lab door sealed behind her. The cigarette smell lingered. I sat on the stool for a long time. The specimen kit sat on the bench, containers full, data logged, cover story intact. Good specimens. Real science. The ironic armor of competence wrapped around a foundation of lies. Through the bond, Shadow Fang stirred. A flicker of awareness, not awake, just the animal's nervous system registering something through the network link. Pack sense. The alpha checking that its pack was still there, even in sleep. Still here, I sent back. Not words, the sensation of proximity, of safety. The bond carried it like a telephone line carrying tone. The specimen report took 40 minutes. I typed it in the empty lab, cross-referencing James Chen's established methodology in situ neural mapping using portable EEG analogs, the technique from his publications with real data from real specimens collected between moments of existential crisis. The report was good, thorough, the kind of work that would make Grace's notation look justified, the kind of work that bought time for the secret growing in a grotto 3 hours walk from here. My hands had stopped shaking by the time I finished. The lie still tasted bitter, but bitterness was a flavor I was learning to swallow. The Avatar barracks were dark when I reached them. Other drivers asleep in their link chairs or on their cots. I lay down on the undersized bunk, tail curled against my thigh, and closed my eyes. Through the bond, across kilometers of jungle, Shadow Fang's heartbeat counted time. Steady, trusting, waiting in a grotto that glowed with living light, healing in a pod that grew from the walls because I'd told a system to build it. One node, one citizen, one more chance before the cover breaks. Make it count. The ceiling was too close. The bunk was too small. But the distant pulse of a wolf sleeping safe in a territory I'd claimed that was exactly the right size to fill the gap between fear and purpose. 3 days. I'd give them 3 days of perfect behavior. Then the gap in the schedule, the 4-hour window on day 10, and the road back to the place where James Chen ended and whatever Chase Sinclair was becoming could continue. Martinez's report sat in Selfridge's inbox. Grace's notation sat beside it. The balance tipped on a knife's edge, and every hour of model behavior was a gram of weight on the right side. Norm Spellman ate lunch at exactly 1215 every day, at the third table from the window in the mess hall's eastern quadrant, with a linguistics textbook propped against the condiment rack and a protein bar he never finished. I knew this because I'd been tracking his patterns for 3 days, not stalking, observing. The way a project manager observes workflow before restructuring a team. Identifying habits, preferences, gaps. Finding the place where a carefully placed word could redirect a river. You're rationalizing. You're treating a lonely man like a resource. You know this. Day 7. I set my tray across from him. That's Frommer's revised grammar, isn't it? I nodded at the textbook. 3rd edition. Norm's face lit up the way it always did when someone acknowledged his work existed. 4th, actually. The 2149 revision with the expanded case system. They added 63 new verb forms based on field recordings from the Tiffany clan contact. 63. I know. It's incredible. The ergative-absolutive alignment shifts based on the speaker's relationship to the action, not just agent versus patient, but how invested the speaker is emotionally in the outcome. There's no earth analog. I ate my protein loaf, still terrible, still necessary, and let Norm talk. He talked the way a river runs, continuously, branching, occasionally doubling back to cover ground he'd already crossed, but always moving forward. NA6 phonology. Tonal patterns. The political implications of dialect variation between clans. How the Omatakaya's vowel inventory differed from the reef peoples in ways that suggested thousands of years of separation. Through the bond, 5 kilometers southeast, Shadow Fang circled the grotto. The healing pod had finished its work 18 hours after construction, the compound fracture now a hairline, the skin sealed, the muscle rebuilding. The viper wolf limped, but he moved. He ate small prey that entered the sanctuary's territory and didn't leave. He patrolled the perimeter the way alphas do, marking, sniffing, cataloging every scent. And he was lonely. The bond carried it as background noise, a low-frequency hum of social absence that colored everything. Pack creatures weren't built for solitude. The alpha who led 6 wolves through coordinated hunts was now a single animal in an empty grotto, and the wrongness of that sat in his consciousness like a stone in a shoe. I'd been feeling it for 3 days without realizing. The irritability that didn't match my circumstances. The restlessness at night when the barracks went quiet. The pulling sensation toward the jungle that I'd attributed to the system's call but was actually simpler than that. My citizen was alone, and the bond transmitted his isolation like a low-grade fever. Emotional bleed. The network doesn't just share information. It shares state. His loneliness becomes my restlessness. His pain becomes my distraction. I need to manage this or it manages me. And that's why the subjunctive is so fascinating, because it implies a whole philosophical framework where, Norm. He stopped mid-sentence. Blinked. Do you ever eat with anyone else? Or is it always you and the textbook? The question landed harder than I intended. Norm's expression cycled through surprise, self-awareness, and something that looked like gratitude compressed into a wince. Most people aren't. I mean, linguistics isn't exactly, people have their own things. He shrugged. Small. Practiced. Sit with me tomorrow. I want to learn NA6 greetings. The basic ones. The surprise one. You want to learn NA6. James Chen published 2 papers on interspecies communication as mediated by bioluminescence signaling. Seems relevant. It wasn't relevant. James Chen's papers were about plant-to-plant signal pathways, not linguistic exchange. But Norm didn't check, and the offer had the intended effect, a bridge built from shared interest, load-bearing enough to support future requests. You like him. You actually like this man. That makes it worse, not better. I did like him. His earnestness was disarming. His knowledge was encyclopedic. And his laugh that too loud, self-correcting burst was one of the few sounds in Hell's Gate that didn't carry ulterior motive. Norm Spellman was exactly what he appeared to be, a smart, lonely person who wanted to connect with the world he'd traveled 6 years to reach. In the movie, Norm had been a footnote. Jake Sully's shadow. The guy who did the preparation while the protagonist stumbled into destiny. That wasn't fair. Norm deserved better than being someone's backup plan. And yet here I am, building a friendship I might need to weaponize. The guilt was a rock I carried in my stomach, growing heavier each day. The system interface had become a companion during downtime, invisible to others, visible to me, a translucent overlay I could browse with thought alone. 3 days of study had mapped its architecture. Territory nodes. The sanctuary could be upgraded. Level 2 cost 75 SP, Level 3 cost 200. Each level expanded the territory radius and unlocked new blueprint options. Citizen Registry. Shadowfang was listed, Viper Wolf Alpha, Bond Tier 1, Health, 87%, Morale, 34%. That morale number was the problem. Below 20%, the system warned, citizens could suffer behavioral degradation. Below 10%, bond instability. Evolution trees grayed out, but visible. Branch paths for physical, sensory, environmental, neural, and weapon modifications. All requiring genetic samples I didn't have. Blueprints. Tier 1 options, bioluminescent markers, 50 SP, 1 HR, healing pod, purchased, Watcher Vine, 75 SP, 2 HR, storage bladder, 50 SP, 1 HR, nest structure, 100 SP, 4 HR, defensive thorns, 75 SP, 3 HR. Faith points accumulated slowly. 2 FP total, generated by Shadowfang's passive existence within the territory. The rate would increase with more citizens, more structures, more rituals. For now, the number crawled. Neural energy had recovered to 85/100. The sanctuary's regenerative field didn't reach Hell's Gate, but base regeneration 10 NE per hour had done the work over 3 days. I was operational again. Ready for the grotto. Day 10. 4-hour window. Standard lab hours, no expeditions scheduled. Grace is lecturing to new arrivals in the afternoon. Norm has a linguistics symposium review. The lab will be empty from 1000 to 1400. I filed my final daily report. Specimen analysis, neural mapping data, methodology notes in James Chen's published style. 3 days of perfect attendance. Complete paperwork. No unauthorized facility access. No transponder anomalies. No midnight greenhouse visits. Model behavior. Through the bond, Shadowfang circled the grotto. Again. The morale readout sat at 31%. Dropping. I set down the data pad. The lab was empty. Evening light polyphemus reflected amber, filtered through armored glass, painted the benches in colors that reminded me of the grotto's night cycle. Everything on this moon was connected. Even the light. He needs me there. Not through a bond physically there. And I need to be there too, because the emotional bleed is making me sloppy. I lost track of a conversation with a lab tech yesterday. Drifted into Shadowfang's head mid-sentence. That can't happen again. The schedule gap on day 10 glowed in my mental calendar. 4 hours. Enough to reach the grotto, spend 90 minutes, and return before the afternoon shift. Tight, but manageable. If nothing went wrong. Shadowfang's heartbeat pulsed in the bond. Steady. Trusting. 2 lives running parallel, one in a compound of steel and glass, one in a cave of living light. Both waiting for the morning when they could converge. The grotto's bioluminescence flared the moment I ducked through the waterfall, and 30 kilograms of Viper Wolf slammed into my chest. Shadowfang's joy hit the bond like a shockwave. A wall of Pack found Alpha here, not alone. Pack transmitted through neural tissue at the speed of thought. My back hit the moss carpet. The Viper Wolf stood on my torso, forelimbs braced on my collarbones, scarred muzzle inches from my face. His breath was warm and smelled like raw meat and mineral water. The tail thick, muscular, tipped with a sensory cluster, wagged in a pattern so undignified for an apex predator that I would have laughed if 70 kilograms of carnivore weren't compressing my ribcage. Off. Shadowfang off. The command went through the bond more than the voice. Shadow Fang dropped to the floor and circled me in tight, rapid loops, body pressing against my legs on each pass. The limp was almost gone. The healing pods work, visible in the smooth gate where a week ago there'd been a compound fracture. The splint remnants lay in a corner, chewed free by teeth designed for tougher things than bandaging fabric. Through the bond, relief so intense it had texture, like stepping into warm water after a long cold. The loneliness hadn't disappeared. That hollow frequency still hummed underneath, but it had been drowned out by something louder. Not alone. Pack is here. Good. I sat on the moss and let the wolf press against my side. His dermal filaments pulsed in contact rhythms, blues and greens that shifted with his emotional state, broadcasting contentment through bioluminescent signaling that the grotto's flora echoed. The walls brightened in response. The sanctuary recognized its administrator and its first citizen, together, and adjusted its output to match the mood. This is what I was feeling for 3 days. The ache behind my sternum when the lab went quiet. The restlessness at 2 in the morning. His loneliness leaking through the bond and coloring my emotions without my consent. The system confirmed it. I pulled up Shadow Fang's citizen profile. Citizen, Shadow Fang Viper Wolf Alpha. Bond Tier, 1, Surface Link. Health, 94% morale, 31% rightward arrow, 58%, Administrator Proximity Bonus. Note, pack-bonded species require social contact. Morale degradation accelerates without pack interaction. Recommendation, bind additional pack members or maintain regular administrator presence. Morale jumped 27 points just from me being here. A band-aid, not a cure. Shadow Fang needed a pack. Wolves weren't solitary by design. They were social architects, hierarchical, communicative, and deeply dependent on group dynamics for psychological stability. Leaving an alpha alone was like locking a project manager in an empty office with no team, no tasks, and no way to reach the outside world. I know how that feels. Different context, same isolation. I scratched behind Shadow Fang's ear, the spot where the neural cues base met the skull, dense with nerve endings. The wolf leaned in hard enough to push me sideways. Through the bond, a sensation like warm static, pleasure without language. Okay. I stood. Shadow Fang followed, favoring the healed leg only slightly. Let's see what we've got. Dash. The sanctuary perimeter was 5 kilometers from the grotto's center, the territory boundary established by the level 1 node. Everything within that radius was mine. I could feel it, the organisms catalogued, the water table mapped, the predator movements tracked by the hostile detection buff. A living surveillance network powered by root systems and fungal highways. But the boundary was thin. No markers, no defenses, no warning structures. Anything could walk in. Anything could walk out. The upgrade menu pulsed. Sanctuary node upgrade to level 2. Cost, 75 SP. Current, 50 SP. Not enough. I need 25 more SP. The math was tight. I had 50 SP, level 2 cost 75. The deficit was 25 SP earnable through, what? The interface showed options. SP sources. Quest completion, variable. Milestone achievements, 1 time. Territorial expansion, first time bonuses. Citizen binding, 25 to 250 SP per new citizen. Binding another citizen would generate SP enough to cover the upgrade. But binding required a willing or subdued target, Sahalo contact, and 10 any. The only available targets within range were the wildlife that wandered through the sanctuary's territory, and most of those were prey species with minimal utility. Unless I could find the Viper Wolf pack. Shadow Fang's former family, somewhere in the Sector 7 wilderness, leaderless since their alpha went down. One problem at a time. Patrol first. Learn the territory. Then plan. Shadow Fang didn't need the bond to understand the concept of patrol. The word existed in his behavioral vocabulary as instinct rather than language. Walk the boundary, mark the markers, catalog the threats, confirm the territory. We moved together. The Viper Wolf took point low to the ground, ears rotating, nose working the air in methodical sweeps. I followed 3 meters behind, long avatar legs covering ground that Shadow Fang mapped by scent. The system's territorial awareness buff overlaid my vision with data, organism locations, movement vectors, threat levels. Green for harmless, yellow for caution, nothing red. The grotto's immediate surroundings were lush old-growth jungle, dense canopy, minimal understory thanks to the shade. Bioluminescent flora created a permanent twilight effect at ground level, even at midday. Water from the stream fed a network of secondary channels that irrigated the territory like a circulatory system. 2 hours from the first time I'd tripped over a root in this jungle and gone face-first into decomposing fern matter, and now I was walking the same terrain with a bonded predator at my side and a heads-up display mapping every living thing within 5 kilometers. Progress, measured in dirt and data. Shadow Fang paused at the northern boundary. Not a freeze, a hesitation. His body language shifted from patrol alertness to something tighter. Ears flat. Hackles lifting along the spine in a ridge of bioluminescent filaments that went from calm blue to warning amber. Through the bond, a scent signature. Complex. Layered. Fire. Not natural wildfire, something focused, controlled. The chemical signature of a directed burn. Blood. Not animal blood, different iron content, different oxidation rate. Na6 blood. Multiple sources. And underneath, the acrid tang of propellant. Specific. Unmistakable even through the filter of Viper Wolf olfaction. The chemical residue of RDA manufactured ammunition. Shadow Fang's nose tracked the scent trail to its source, a patch of undergrowth at the very edge of the sanctuary's influence, where the territorial awareness buff thinned to background static. Disturbed soil. Broken vegetation. A scorch mark on a tree trunk at roughly chest height, NA6 chest height, where something fast and hot and human-made had punched through bark and into heartwood. I knelt. The soil was dark. Wet. Not from rain, from blood that had soaked in and been partially absorbed by the root network. The territorial awareness buff translated the biological data, NA6 hemolymph, 4 distinct chemical signatures, 3 showing stress hormones consistent with severe injury, 1 showing the specific compounds associated with rapid blood loss, 4 NA6, at least 3 wounded, 1 possibly dying. And this happened recently. The blood hasn't fully oxidized. 2 days, maybe 3. Shadow Fang circled the site, nose to ground. The scent trail led northwest, away from the sanctuary, deeper into jungle that the territorial buff couldn't reach. 4 sets of tracks, 2 walking, 1 dragging, 1 being carried. Moving slow, moving away from whatever had done this to them. RDA ammunition. NA6 blood. In a sector that Grace's data showed as low threat, low traffic, unremarkable. Someone was here. RDA fired on NA6. The NA6 fled northwest. They're wounded, slow, and 3 days ahead. The system interface pulsed. New notification, amber bordered. Potential citizens detected. Species, NA6 4 individuals. Estimated distance, 3.2 kilometers northwest. Status, injured. Moving. Low threat assessment. Investigate. Citizens. The system was classifying wounded NA6 as potential citizens. People, not animals, not plants, who could be bound to the network. Who could generate faith points, provide skills, expand the organization. Who were bleeding in the jungle while I stood at the edge of my territory deciding whether they were assets or obligations. Shadow Fang's head turned northwest. Through the bond, prey tracking instinct repurposed, the alpha's drive to find and assess. Not hunger, curiosity. And underneath, barely perceptible, the ghost of pack loneliness reaching toward the possibility of more. 4 NA6. In the movie, the Omaticaya were the only significant clan in this region, but the additional materials mentioned other clans, smaller ones, decimated by RDA expansion. The Relang. A warrior people whose territory was bulldozed for mining operations. The Relang. Survivors. Running from an encounter with RDA forces in a sector that the military was supposed to have cleared months ago. I could ignore them. Walk back to the grotto, file the discovery under not my problem, and focus on upgrading the sanctuary, binding more wildlife, building the foundation. Safe. Contained. The project manager's approach: scope the project, control the variables, don't take on new liabilities before the infrastructure can support them. Or I could follow 4 wounded strangers into unmapped jungle and offer help from a source I couldn't explain, risking everything I'd built in 5 days for people I'd never met. The blood trail led northwest. Shadow Fang stood at its edge, waiting for a decision with the patient attention of a creature that had learned to trust the alien mind bonded to its own. 50 SP. 1 node. 1 citizen. A cover identity held together with lies and good specimens. Not enough. Not nearly enough for what I was about to do. But the blood was real, and the people were real, and Chase Sinclair, project manager, transmigrator, reluctant administrator of a planetary consciousness's sandbox experiment, had never been able to walk past a problem without at least trying to solve it. I stepped past the boundary. Shadow Fang fell in beside me, nose to the trail, and the sanctuary's bioluminescence faded behind us as we moved northwest into jungle. The system couldn't map. Shadow Fang tracked the blood trail the way he tracked everything, nose to ground, body low, each step placed with the deliberate patience of a predator reading a story written in scent. 3 NA6, wounded. 1 being carried. Moving northwest through secondary growth at a pace that said injured more than fleeing. I followed 2 meters behind, avatar body bent under canopy that thinned as the terrain rose. The sanctuary's territorial awareness had dropped away a kilometer back beyond the 5-kilometer radius. I was blind. No buff, no hostile detection, no organism tracking. Just eyes, ears, and a borrowed set of alien senses still learning to cooperate. The jungle smelled different outside the territory. Wilder. Unfiltered by the sanctuary's regulatory effect. Every scent hit raw, decomposing foliage, mineral soil, the musk of creatures whose territory we'd entered without permission. Shadow Fang's hackles stayed at half-mast, not alarmed, but aware. His ears rotated in continuous sweeps, sampling the soundscape for anything that didn't belong. The blood trail was 3 days old and weakening. Rain had dissolved the exposed droplets, but the subsurface deposits blood that had soaked into soil and been partially metabolized by root systems left a chemical signature Shadow Fang could follow like a highway. 2 kilometers northwest of the sanctuary. 3. The terrain climbed into a ridgeline covered in low scrub and emergent rock. The canopy opened enough to see sky polyphemus hanging in the western quadrant, gas giant bands catching afternoon light. Shadow Fang froze. Not the patrol freeze of territorial assessment. The kill freeze. Every muscle locked, weight forward, tail rigid. Through the bond, a scent image so vivid it was almost visual. NA6. Close. Alive. And the adrenaline tang of someone who knew they were being hunted. The arrow came from above. Not aimed at me, at the ground in front of my feet, burying itself in soil to the fletching. A warning shot. Deliberate. Precise. The kind of accuracy that said I could have put this through your eye but chose not to. I looked up. She dropped from the canopy like a stone 3 meters of controlled fall, landing in a crouch that barely bent the undergrowth. Knife already out. Not an RDA manufacture blade, carved bone, NA6 design, edge honed to a gleam that caught the filtered light. The blade found my throat before Shadowfang could react. Blue skin, war paint ochre and white, smeared by days of running, half the patterns disrupted by sweat and rain. Yellow eyes so bright they burned, set in a face that was angular even by NA6 standards, sharp enough to cut. Young mid-20s in NA6 terms. Lean in a way that spoke of hunger rather than build. And the expression, not fear, not rage. Something colder. Dreamwalker. The word came out like a curse in accented English, functional but unpracticed, each consonant bitten off. Are you here to finish what your machine started? The knife pressed. Not deep a sting, a line of warmth below my jaw. The blade was sharp enough that the pressure was the message. I can open this at any time. Shadowfang snarled. The Viper Wolf's neural filaments blazed amber red, threat display cranked to maximum. Through the bond, kill impulse, pack defense, every predatory circuit screaming attack. No, I pushed back. Hard. The command hit the bond like a wall. Stand down. Do not attack. Shadowfang growled but held position. Teeth bared. Muscles coiled. A compromise between obedience and instinct that wouldn't hold forever. I'm not RDA military. My voice came out steady. Surprising, given the knife. I'm a researcher. Avatar program. I followed a blood trail from my research sector. Researcher. She didn't move the blade. With a Viper Wolf. That obeys you? Fair point. His name is Shadowfang. There was no word for it that didn't require explaining the system. Bonded. To me. Something shifted behind those yellow eyes. Not softening, recalculating. The knife stayed, but the pressure eased a fraction. Tisei Lan. A voice from the undergrowth, older, male, strained with the effort of speaking at volume. Tisei Lan, stop. 3 figures emerged from behind a rock formation 10 meters upslope. An elderly NA6 male, tall even by NA6 standards, hair white at the temples, leaning heavily on a staff carved from a single root. He supported a second figure, smaller, frilier, wrapped in layers of woven fiber that were stained dark at the midsection. And behind them, a young male, teenage, maybe clutching a carved bone pendant in one hand and a spear too big for him in the other. The elder's eyes found me. Found Shadowfang. Found the knife at my throat. He carries no weapons, the elder said. His English was better than the warrior's, slower, more formal, shaped by years of contact with humans. And his creature does not attack without command. This is not a soldier. The warrior Tisei Lan didn't look away from me. All dreamwalkers serve the machines. Different uniforms. Same masters. Not all. The elder took a step forward. His breathing was labored, the jungle's humidity pressing on lungs that had been running for days. Let him speak. Tisei Lan held the knife for 3 more seconds. Then she withdrew it, not sheathing, just lowering, and stepped back to a distance that said, I can reach your throat again in half a second. I touched the cut. Fingers came away blue, shallow. The avatar body had already started coagulating faster than human tissue, thicker clotting factors. Who are you? I asked. Not the warrior, the elder. Adonai Te Eywa Langadon. He spoke his full name with the weight of someone who knew it might be the last time anyone heard it. Of the Relang clan. These are my people. What remains of them? The Relang. I'd been right, the clan from the expanded materials, the warrior people whose territory had been cleared for RDA mining operations. In the outline of this world's future, they were supposed to be survivors. Remnants who connected to the protagonist's network and became Foundation citizens. Except in the outline, there hadn't been a dying elder wrapped in blood-stained cloth. The frail figure Atonite supported was a woman older than him, smaller, with the kind of stillness that living things don't achieve without great effort. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was a shallow rasp that I could hear across the distance. The bandages at her midsection were saturated dark blue blood, Na6 hemolymph, soaking through layers of field dressing. Gunshot wound, I said. 3 days ago. Atonite's voice didn't waver. RDA survey team. They came with bulldozers. We were told the area was designated for resource assessment. They did not assess. They cleared. When we did not leave fast enough. He gestured to the elder woman. To the jungle behind them. To the absence of 13 other people who should have been standing here. Sainum, the young one, made a sound. Not a word. A broken thing that lived in the space between grief and shock. His hand tightened on the carved bone pendant, whale rib, maybe, or something Pandora. Polished by years of handling. A family object. Someone's history. 17 clan members, 3 weeks ago. 4 standing here. The math is RDA ammunition and bulldozer tracks. Shadowfang's aggression had faded. The bond carried something new from the Viper Wolf recognition. Pack creatures understood what it looked like when a group was broken. The alpha who'd lost his own pack to a fallen branch read the body language of 4 survivors carrying their dead weight through hostile jungle, and the growl in his chest softened to silence. The elder woman coughed. Blood flecked her lips. Atonite caught her weight as she sagged. I had a healing pod at the sanctuary. I had a regenerative field that could accelerate recovery. I had system resources that might make the difference between this woman living and dying. But the sanctuary was 3 kilometers south. The woman had a gunshot wound 3 days old. and Lan was standing between me and any possibility of help, knife in hand, watching for the first sign of treachery. I have a place. The words came out before the plan finished forming. South. Hidden. A grotto with healing capability. It's not much, but the wounded she needs more than field dressing. Lan's knife came up. You will not take us to an RDA facility. It's not RDA. It's mine. I met her eyes. Held them. I know that means nothing to you. I know a dreamwalker's word is worth less than the air it takes to speak it. But I nodded toward the elder woman, is dying. And I've buried enough already. The words came from a place I hadn't expected. Not calculation. Not strategy. The memory of Max Patel sitting on a stool, telling me James Chen's body was cremated per standard protocol. The weight of a death I'd inherited from a man I'd never met, whose face I wore like a mask every day. Silence. The jungle breathed around us, clicks and calls and the distant rush of water that might be the stream feeding the sanctuary's grotto. Adonite looked at the elder woman. At Sainum, shaking. At Lan, rigid with distrust. We go, he said. Lan's jaw tightened. We do not know. We go. Adonite's voice carried something that wasn't volume authority. The specific weight of an elder who had survived enough to recognize when stubbornness crossed from strength to suicide. If he means harm, we die here or we die there. If he means help, she lives. The choice is simple. Lan lowered her knife. Didn't she that? Took point without another word, checking sight lines through the undergrowth with the efficiency of someone who'd been running rear guard for 3 days and hadn't slept in longer. I moved to Adonite's side. Helped him lift the elder woman. Her weight was nothing in the avatar's arms, a fragile assembly of bone and muscle that weighed less than Shadowfang, and we started south. The young one, Sainum, fell in behind us. His spear pointed backward, covering our retreat from threats that might not be there but that 3 weeks of running had taught him to expect everywhere. The carved bone pendants swung against his chest with each step. Someone's memory, carried by the youngest survivor. Shadowfang ranged ahead, nose working, checking the trail. Through the bond, the wolf's instincts repurposed, not hunting prey, but guiding pack. New members. Strange smelling, injured, frightened. But moving together, and for a pack creature, together was the first requirement of safety. 3 kilometers to the sanctuary. The elder woman's breathing grew shallower with each 100 meters. Lan moved through the jungle like a ghost, silent, watchful, her knife hand never relaxing. And Adonite walked beside me with the steady gait of someone who'd been walking towards something for a long time and had finally found a direction. The waterfall appeared through the tree line. The grotto's bioluminescence pulsed behind the curtain of water, welcoming, or warning. Lan's hand went to her knife. It's safe, I said. I promise. Her expression told me exactly what a Relang warrior thought of Dreamwalker promises. The elder woman's blood was wrong. Not the color. Na6 hemolymph was dark blue regardless of health, but the consistency. Thin. Watery. The kind of blood loss that meant internal organs weren't getting enough perfusion, that the body had started rationing fluid to the brain and heart while everything else shut down in slow succession. I laid her on the moss carpet near the healing pod. The grotto's bioluminescence adjusted brighter around her body, dimmer elsewhere, the root network redirecting energy to where it sensed the most need. The regenerative field hummed against her skin, a warm glow that seeped through bandages and into tissue. It wasn't enough. Network healing status. Target, unbound Na6 female, age 65. Condition, critical ballistic trauma, abdominal, internal hemorrhage, organ failure, progressive. Limitation, network healing operates at 12% efficiency on unbound individuals. Recommendation, bind target for full healing access. Warning, binding a dying individual carries 40% risk of incomplete soul integration. 12% efficiency. The sanctuary could heal bound citizens at full power, but strangers unlinked to the network received barely a trickle. Binding her would unlock full healing, but at a 40% risk of incomplete soul integration. The system didn't elaborate on what that meant, and my imagination filled the gap with possibilities that ranged from bad to catastrophic. Lan stood at the grotto's entrance, silhouetted against the waterfall's glow. She hadn't entered. She watched from the threshold, knife in hand, back against the stone wall where she could see both the grotto interior and the jungle behind her, covering all angles. Even now, Adonite knelt beside the elder woman. His hands scarred, old, steady, unwrapped the bandages. The wound was a ragged entry point below the left rib cage, the flesh around it discolored and hot to the touch. Infection had set in despite whatever field medicine they'd managed. The bullet or fragment was still inside. 3 days of walking had shifted it. Her name is Pikire, Adonite said. He didn't look at me. His attention belonged entirely to the woman. She was Tsahik for 31 years. She taught every child born to the Relang since before I had gray hair. He began a chant. Low, rhythmic, in a Na6 dialect I couldn't identify, not Omaticayan, not any of the linguistic variants Norm had catalogued in his textbook. Older. The cadence of a language that had evolved in isolation from the larger clans. Sainum joined, his young voice cracking on the higher notes but holding the melody. I accessed the system. Proximity healing activate. Cost, 15 NE. Effect, accelerated cell regeneration, inflammation reduction, pain suppression. Efficiency on unbound target, 12%. 15 NE from my current 55 would leave me at 40. Not great, not devastating. And 12% efficiency might not save her, but it could buy time. Do it. The healing activated. The moss beneath Pikire glowed brighter warm gold spreading from the root network through the surface layer, concentrating around the wound. The elder woman's breathing eased a fraction. Her face, tight with pain even unconscious, relaxed. Adonite's chant paused. He looked at the glowing moss. At me. Eywa's light, he whispered. Something like it, I said. The healing slowed the bleeding, reduced the inflammation, pulled the infection back from its advancing edge. But the internal damage organ failure, progressive hemorrhage was beyond what 12% efficiency could address. The system was trying to bail a sinking ship with a teacup. An hour passed. 2. The grotto shifted to night cycle illumination. Tiseilan hadn't moved from the entrance. Sainum had fallen asleep against the far wall, exhaustion overriding fear, the carved bone pendant clutched against his chest. Shadow Fang lay curled near the healing pod, eyes half-closed, monitoring through the bond with the passive alertness of a sentinel. Pikire's breathing changed. The interval between breaths stretched. 3 seconds. 5. 7. The regenerative field pulsed harder, the network dumping energy into a losing battle, the grotto's bioluminescence flickering as biological resources were redirected from ambient functions to healing. Not enough. Never enough. Adonite took her hand. His chant resumed quieter now, private, the words shifting from prayer to farewell. Can you do more? Sainum's voice. Small. He'd woken. His eyes moved between me and the dying woman and the glowing walls as if expecting a miracle that the architecture of this place seemed designed to deliver. I tried. The words tasted like the confession they were. The healing, it needs a stronger connection. One she can't make in this state. Then make it for her. 40% risk of incomplete soul integration. That could mean trapping her consciousness in the network without a body. That could mean corrupting the bond. That could mean things I can't predict because this system didn't come with a manual. I can't. Not safely. Not without. I stopped. The explanation was too complicated and too honest, the kind of truth that involved words like system and binding and risk assessment that would mean nothing to a teenager watching his elder die. Sainum's face crumpled. Not into tears, into the specific blankness of someone who'd used up their grief allocation for the month and had nothing left for this. Pikire's breathing stopped at moonrise. The last exhale was quiet, barely a sound, more of an absence. The grotto's healing glow faded as the network registered the loss, biological signatures zeroing out, cellular activity ceasing, the complex electromagnetic pattern that the system recognized as alive dissolving into background noise. Adonite closed her eyes. His hand stayed on hers. The chant continued, shifted now from farewell to something else. Commitment. A promise that the name Pikire would be spoken until there was no one left to speak it. I sat at the grotto's edge. Not close enough to intrude. Not far enough to dismiss. Sainum pressed the carved bone to his forehead and made no sound. The pendant had belonged to someone. Maybe Pikire. Maybe another of the 13 who hadn't made it this far. Tiseilan entered the grotto for the first time. She crossed the space without looking at the walls, the bioluminescence, the healing pod, the moss that shifted under her feet. Her attention was a blade, and it was pointed entirely at Pikire. She knelt, took the dead woman's other hand, held it the way you hold something precious that you can't keep tight enough to remember, gentle enough to let go. No sound. No tears. The warrior's face was stone, and behind it, something that would break anything softer. I stayed where I was. The system's interface floated in my peripheral vision, notifications dim to near invisible. No quest. No milestone. No reward for the failure of watching an old woman die in a cave that was supposed to heal her. You have a healing pod that fixes broken wolf bones in 18 hours, and you couldn't save a person. Because she wasn't bound. Because the network doesn't share its gifts with strangers. Because the difference between citizen and outsider is a line you drew the moment you accepted this system. The thought was ugly. I kept it. The burial preparations took 2 hours. Adonite directed specific rituals, precise positioning, a protocol that survived even when the people who practiced it numbered 3. They wrapped Pikire in the cleanest cloth they had. Sainum gathered flowers from the grotto's walls, bioluminescent blooms that dimmed when picked but held their shape. They buried her beneath a root cluster at the grotto's western wall. The roots parted to accept the body, the sanctuary's biological architecture responding to the burial the way soil responds to seed, making space for what was given. As the roots closed over the grave, I pressed my hand to the network junction above it. Something passed through. Not data. Not a signal. A tremor in the root system, faint, warm, dissolving, that carried the fading echo of a consciousness that had spent 65 years walking this moon and now returned to the network that connected everything. Not a soul saved. Not a memory stored. Just an acknowledgement. The planet noting that something had been here and was now somewhere else. Adonite must have sensed it. His eyes met mine across the burial site. Eywa received her, he said. I nodded. It was the truest thing I could offer. Tiseilan approached me afterward. Not hostile, different. The knife was still out, still unsheathed, but the grip had loosened. She stood at arm's length and looked at me with an expression I couldn't categorize. You tried, she said. I failed. Yes. A pause. Not awkward, deliberate. But you did not pretend. You did not promise and then explain why the promise was impossible. You put your hands on her and tried to make your strange light work. Another pause. That is something. She turned her back to me. In Tiseilan's body language vocabulary, the grammar of a warrior who faced threats front on and showed her spine only to those she didn't consider lethal. Turning her back was a statement. Not trust. Not yet. But the absence of active distrust, which for a woman who'd watched her clan die at human hands, was a bridge over a canyon. She joined Night at the burial site. Helped him arrange the final stones. Shadow Fang's mind brushed mine through the bond warmth, pack awareness, the recognition that the group had changed shape. Grief was a scent the wolf understood. Loss altered the chemical signature of living things, and Shadow Fang catalogued the change the way he catalogued everything, data for the territory's map. The grotto breathed. The walls pulsed their slow rhythm. And beneath the root cluster at the western wall, the faintest trace of Pikair's passage lingered like warmth in stone after the fire goes out. Night sat cross-legged on the moss. His staff lay across his knees, root wood, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, worn smooth by decades of handling. His eyes were closed. Dawnlight filtered through the waterfall, catching the spray and throwing refracted color across the grotto's living walls. I sat lower. Deliberate. The posture of someone presenting information to an authority rather than dictating terms. Body language mattered with the Relang Tse-lan read physical positioning the way Grace read data, and Night's decades of spiritual leadership meant he parsed respect from patronization at a glance. Sainum sat beside his elder, cross-legged, the carved bone pendant resting in his lap. He'd slept poorly, the bioluminescence had disturbed him, the moss had been foreign under his body, and the loss of Pikair sat on his shoulders like a physical weight. But he was present. Listening. Tse-lan stood. Of course she did. Back to the wall, knife accessible, positioning that covered both the grotto entrance and the space where I sat. She hadn't slept at all. This place, Night said. He opened his eyes. They were the deep amber of aged Na6, not the bright yellow of youth but a warmer tone, like preserved honey. It responds to you. The light. The moss. The roots that parted for Pikair's burial. You are connected to it. Not a question. An observation. The kind of precision that came from 60+ years of interpreting the relationship between living things and the world they inhabited. Yes. No point lying about the obvious. The grotto's behavior adjusting to my presence, shifting bioluminescence on my approach, the moss forming bedding to my body shape was evidence anyone with functioning eyes could interpret. How? Partial truth. Give them the framework without the origin. Tell them what the system does, not where the operator came from. When I arrived on Pandora, I made Sahela with the root network in this grotto. The connection was different from what normal Avatar drivers experience. Stronger. Deeper. The planet's neural network Eywa recognized something in me and created a subsystem. A partition within her larger consciousness. I paused. Tested the words. They sounded clinical, too human, too analytical for an audience raised in spiritual tradition. Eywa chose me as a keeper, an administrator of a small piece of her network. This grotto is the center of that piece. Within its reach, I can heal, I can communicate, I can. I searched for the word. Bind. Bind, Tse-lan repeated from her wall. Flat. Dangerous. Not enslave. Not control. I held up my hands open, empty. Think of it as Sahela, but sustained. Permanent. A bond that links individuals to this network and to each other. Shared awareness. Shared healing. Shared strength. I extended my hand toward Shadow Fang, who lay near the healing pod. The Viper Wolf raised his head. Through the bond, I pushed a simple instruction. Come here. Shadow Fang stood, padded across the grotto, and pressed his flank against my leg. His dermal filaments pulsed in sync with the wall's same rhythm, same frequency. Visually connected. Shadow Fang was my first binding. I found him injured, compound fracture, alone, his pack gone. The bond let me heal him. Let him communicate. Let us. I scratched the wolf's ear. He leaned in. Work together. Night's breathing had changed. Faster. His knuckles whitened on his staff. Not fear, excitement compressed behind discipline. The amber eyes were wide, reflecting the grotto's bioluminescence in twin pools of gold. Neutral Imokria, he said. The words hit the grotto like a stone hitting water. Sainum's head snapped up. Even Tse-lan, rigid, skeptical, armored in distrust, shifted her weight. Neutral Imokria, Night repeated. The tree of binding. In the oldest songs before the Omaticaya, before the great clans, when the people were still scattered and small, Eywa created keepers, administrators. He used the English word deliberately, tasting its shape. Individuals given the gift of sustained Sahelo, the power to bind willing souls into a shared network, to protect, to build, to prepare for threats the people could not face alone. He set his staff aside, stood. The movement cost him his joints, protested, his balance wavered, but the standing itself was the message. He was addressing Chase Sinclair not as a stranger but as a category. Something he recognized from scripture. I spent 40 years studying the old songs. The Relang preserved them longer than any clan our singers carried verses the Omaticaya forgot generations ago. I believed they were myth. I believed the keepers were metaphor. His voice cracked. Not with grief, with the specific fracture of a man watching belief become evidence. I was wrong. Legitimacy. He's handing me legitimacy I didn't earn and can't return. He thinks I'm the fulfillment of prophecy. I'm a project manager from Montana who died in a car crash and got dumped into a movie. The guilt was a blade. I pushed it down. Not gone, filed. For later processing. Adonite. I need you to understand I'm not a prophet. I'm not divine. The system is real. The binding is real. But I'm learning as I go. I make mistakes. The healing failed for Pikair because I don't have enough power yet, not because Eywa chose to let her die. Eywa's gifts do not come complete, Atenite said. He sat back down satisfied, resolved, the recognition settled into his bones. They come as seeds. You are the seed, and this he gestured at the grotto, the walls, the network humming through the roots, is the first shoot breaking soil. Tisailan made a sound. Something between a scoff and a breath caught sideways. She pushed off the wall and crossed to where Atenite sat, crouching beside him with the fluid grace of someone who could shift from rest to combat in a heartbeat. You believe him? Not a question. I believe what I see. The walls breathe. The roots parted for Pikire. His creature obeys through thought, not command. The healing light exists. These are facts, Tisailan. Not faith. Facts given by a dreamwalker. She turned to me. You wear a human's body. You serve the machines at Hell's Gate. You speak our language through their technology. And you ask us to bind ourselves, our minds, our spirits to a network you control. Every word was a weapon. Precise, aimed, designed to dismantle the framework I just presented. Tisailan wasn't attacking blindly. She was attacking the argument. I'm asking you to consider it, I said. Not today. Not while you're grieving. But consider that this place kept you safe overnight. That the healing, limited as it was, eased Pikire's pain. That Shadow Fang, the wolf's head lifted at his name, is healthier and stronger than the day I found him, because the network provides. And what does the network take? Smart question. The right question. Connection. Awareness. I can feel what bound citizens feel, not thoughts, not secrets. Emotional state. Physical condition. Location within the territory. The bond is shared, not one-directional. You would sense me as clearly as I sense you, so you would know where I am, what I feel, whether I am injured. Yes. And I cannot leave without you knowing. You can leave. The bond doesn't prevent movement. It provides awareness, not control. Tisailan stared at me, the kind of stare that tested for fractures, searching for the break in the facade that would reveal the colonizer beneath the healer's mask. She didn't find it. Not because it wasn't there. My mask was made of genuinely borrowed identity and genuine ignorance, but because the specific thing she was looking for, the RDA's particular brand of exploitation, wasn't what I carried. I will not bind, she said. Level. Final. I will stay because Atenite stays and Sanom follows Atenite. I will eat your food and sleep under your roots. But I will not give my spirit to a dreamwalker's network. That's your choice. It stays your choice. No one binds unwillingly. Atenite. She looked at the elder. Warning. Protection. Affection compressed into a single word. Atenite placed his hand on her knee. The gesture was familiar, practiced, parental, the touch of someone who'd been managing this particular woman's ferocity since she was young enough to need managing. My choice, child. He stood again. Crossed to where I sat. Extended his hands, palms up, Q swaying behind him with the voluntary loosening of someone preparing for Tsahelu. I am Atenite Eywa Langadin. I offer myself to the binding. Willingly. Before Eywa and the memory of Pikire. The Q-tips of my neural braid reached for his. NA6 to NA6 bonding or avatar to NA6 was different from the animal connection with Shadow Fang. Richer. More complex. The filaments touched and interlocked with a precision that animal bindings lacked. Neural architectures designed for compatible communication. Soul binding initiated. Target, Atanite Erwaralang Itan. Species, NA6 age, 67 status, healthy, exhaustion. Bond tier, 1, surface link. Cost, 10 NE, current, 40/100. Atenite's consciousness opened to the network like a door swinging wide. Not the raw animal torrent of Shadow Fang's binding, structured, layered, the complexity of a mind that had spent 67 years accumulating memory, belief, and understanding. I caught fragments, a grove of trees destroyed by bulldozers, the faces of children he'd taught, Tisailan as a girl swinging from branches with a fierceness that had only sharpened with age. And beneath everything, faith. Genuine, bone deep, untranslatable. The conviction that Eywa was real, that the network was sacred, and that the binding he'd just accepted was the holiest act of his remaining years. Citizen bound, Atanite Erwaralang Itan. Citizen number 3. Plus 50 SP, NA6 citizen bonus. Faith generation, plus 0.5 FP/day. The bond settled. Atenite exhaled a long, shaking breath, and when he opened his eyes, they were luminous. Tears he'd been holding since Pikire's death tracked down his cheeks, and he didn't wipe them. I can feel him, he whispered. The wolf. He is, content. Curious about us. Through the bond, Shadow Fang's awareness of the new citizen. Not threat assessment recognition. Pack expansion. The Alpha's social architecture accepting a new member with the pragmatic grace of a species that survived by growing its numbers. Sainum was on his feet before Atenite finished speaking. Me too. The boy's voice cracked. Adolescent and ancient, the sound of someone who'd lost more than his years should allow and was reaching for anything that resembled belonging. I want to feel it. Please. I looked at Tisailan. She stood motionless, watching her elder weep with joy and her youngest clan member beg for connection. Her knife hand was white at the knuckles. But she nodded a single, tight movement that wasn't permission but wasn't prohibition. Sainum's binding was faster, simpler. A young mind, less layered, opening to the network with the uncomplicated eagerness of someone who didn't know enough to be afraid. When the bond locked, he laughed. The sound, bright, surprised, breaking through the sediment of grief, echoed off the grotto walls. Citizen bound, Sainum te Kairizi Ralang Itan. Citizen number 4. plus 25 SP, NA6 citizen bonus. Faith generation, plus 0.2 FP/day. I can feel him. Sainum turned to Shadow Fang. The Viper Wolf's ears perked. Through the bond, 2 new threads of awareness joining the network, adding their frequencies to the shared signal. Not words presence. The warmth of not alone. And the walls, the plants, everything is. He pressed his hand to the moss. His bioluminescent markings pulsed in sync with the grotto's rhythm, clan bioluminescence adapting to the network's frequency. Visual proof of integration. The Relang youth, scarred by 3 weeks of running and the loss of everything he'd known, standing in a cave of living light with tears on his face and wonder rewriting the geography of grief. Citizen count, 4. Network status, stable. Total faith generation, 0.9 FP/day. System points, 100 SP. Tiseilan watched it all. Her knife stayed out. Her posture stayed rigid. But in her eyes, yellow, sharp, burning with something she wouldn't name, I caught a flicker of something that wasn't hatred. Not trust. Not acceptance. Something smaller and more dangerous. Curiosity. I stood. My NE was at 20/100, the bindings had taken their toll, and the morning sun was already well above the canopy. Hell's Gate was 3 hours south. Grace had expected my field expedition to take 6 hours. I'd been gone 16 hours. Again. After the 30-hour absence. After the greenhouse. After every flag I've raised in 10 days. I looked at Adonite seated, peaceful, his awareness humming with the new bond. At Sainum, pressing both hands to the walls, grinning. At Tiseilan, unbound, uncompromising, protecting her people from a position of deliberate exile. I have to go back. To the compound. There are people who will come looking if I don't. I addressed Adonite but watched Tiseilan. This place is yours now. The sanctuary will feed you, there are edible plants within the territory, and water. Shadowfang will patrol. I can feel you through the bond from anywhere on the moon. And the Dreamwalker returns to his masters, Tiseilan said. The Dreamwalker returns to his cover story. I picked up the specimen kit, battered, half empty, the excuse that kept me alive at Hell's Gate. If I disappear, they'll search this sector. You don't want that. Tiseilan's expression didn't change, but she stepped aside from the entrance. The smallest gesture. A door held open by someone who wouldn't admit they were holding it. I ducked through the waterfall. The jungle closed around me, familiar now, less hostile, the terrain that had tripped me and charged me and nearly killed me on my first expedition becoming the road between 2 lives I was learning to run simultaneously. The bond stretched. Thin but present. Shadowfang at the sanctuary, warm and alert. Adonite, a calm bass note of faith. Sainum, a bright treble of discovery. 3 citizens, 1 grotto, 1 impossible secret growing roots in alien soil. I ran. The avatar body covered ground in long, loping strides that James Chen's muscle memory couldn't have produced, something new, something the system's neural modifications and weeks of practice were building from the intersection of human determination and NA6 physiology. The jungle blurred. Bioluminescence streaked past in ribbons of color. 2 new voices hummed in the network. Hesitant. Wondering. Alive. And behind me, growing smaller with distance but not disappearing, Grace Augustine's compound waited with questions that were getting harder to answer. 3 chairs. 1 table. The configuration of a room arranged for sentencing rather than conversation. Selfridge sat behind the table in his administrator's office, a space designed for a man who ran mining operations worth trillions, furnished with the generic corporate austerity of someone who spent money on equipment instead of comfort. Gray walls. Gray carpet. A holographic display showing quarterly extraction targets that nobody in the room cared about. Gray stood to his left, arms crossed, cigarette absent, not even the unlit prop behind her ear. She'd removed it deliberately, the way a lawyer removes personal effects before a deposition. Professional mode. No sympathy accessories. Martinez stood by the door, not guarding it, just present. The security officer's day top-pad glowed with a file I couldn't read from across the table, but the thickness of the scroll bar suggested comprehensive documentation. I sat in the chair they'd designated. The avatar body made the corporate furniture look toy-like, my knees pressed against the table's edge, tail forced into an uncomfortable curl against the chair back. 9 feet of blue-skinned evidence that the Resources Development Administration's avatar program had a problem. Dr. Chen. Selfridge's voice was the same nasal tenor from the morning announcements, every syllable insured against liability. Do you know why you're here? Because I've been building a secret biological kingdom in the jungle and lying to everyone who's tried to help me. I can guess. Selfridge tapped his day top-pad. A file expanded on the holographic display. Chen, James Avatar Driver Behavioral Incident Log. October 3rd, unauthorized access to restricted greenhouse facility at 0300 hours. He read without inflection. October 5th, transponder signal loss for 26 minutes during field expedition. October 7th, extended beyond authorized expedition window by 14 hours. October 11th, extended beyond authorized expedition window by, he checked the number, 16 hours. He looked up. That's 4 documented incidents in 11 days. Against a policy that clearly states 3 triggers mandatory evaluation. The room was silent except for the ventilation system's hum. The same sound that had filled every room I'd been in since waking up in the wrong body. Recycled air pushed through filters designed for human lungs, processing Pandoran atmosphere into something breathable for a species that didn't belong here. I have explanations. Dr. Augustine has relayed your explanations. Equipment malfunction. Viper wolf activity. Grief-related sleep disturbances. Selfridge set the data pad down. The Avatar program represents an investment of approximately 47 million credits per unit, Dr. Chen. Per unit. That's development, growth, maintenance, link equipment, and personnel support. When a unit shows signs of psychological instability, I'm not unstable. When a unit shows signs, Selfridge continued, tone unchanged, protocol requires evaluation. Evaluation takes a minimum of 2 weeks, during which the avatar is maintained in dormant storage and the driver that's you undergoes cognitive and psychological assessment. 2 weeks dormant. No body, no consciousness, no connection to the sanctuary, to Shadowfang, to Adenite and Sanum and Tsailan waiting in a grotto that would lose its administrator while I sat in a hospital ward being assessed by people who'd never find the real problem because the real problem was that I died in Montana and woke up in a science fiction movie. This is it. This is where the cover breaks. Grace hadn't spoken. Her silence was its own statement. She'd advocated for me twice, vouched for my stability, put her professional reputation behind a man she'd known for 11 days. And I'd burned that investment like a deadline missed by a project manager who couldn't keep his timeline straight. The memory hit sideways. My first morning in this body, Max Patel cleaning his glasses while he delivered the death notification. 30-day evaluation period. I'd been so focused on the 30 days that I'd forgotten the evaluation could come sooner. Mr. Selfridge. The door opened. Norm Spellman walked in like a man walking into traffic, aware of the danger, committed to the crossing, vibrating with the specific frequency of someone who'd made a decision they couldn't undo. Sorry to interrupt. He wasn't sorry. His voice had the rehearsed quality of words practiced in a corridor for 3 minutes before entering. I have context that's relevant to Dr. Chen's absences. Selfridge's expression did something complicated. Martinez shifted his weight. Grace's eyes narrowed not at Norm, but at the situation. She was reading the room the way she read data, looking for the pattern beneath the surface. Dr. Spellman, this is a closed administrative. I asked James to collect specimens for my research. Norm held up a datapad. The screen showed a document headers, methodology sections, specimen lists, formatted in the precise academic style of a man who'd spent his career in institutional documentation. Off record. My fault. The Xenolinguistics project requires neural active flora samples from high-density sectors for comparative analysis of bioluminescent signaling patterns across NA6 clan territories. Dr. Chen's expertise in neural mapping made him the ideal collector. He set the datapad on the table. The document was clean, time-stamped, internally consistent, and fabricated. I knew it was fabricated because Norm's hands were trembling in a way that the documented confidence didn't support, and because the specimen list referenced collection protocols that James Chen had published but that Norm couldn't have known about without reading the personnel file I'd memorized in my bunk a week ago. Selfridge read the document. His lips moved slightly, a man parsing legal exposure more than scientific content. This isn't in the system. I hadn't filed it yet. Interdepartmental specimen requests require cross-authorization from both lab heads, and I was waiting for Dr. Augustine's signature. Norm glanced at Grace. The glance was a prayer. The extended expedition times were my fault. I gave James coordinates that required longer transit than standard grid assignments. He was following my instructions. Grace's jaw worked. She was doing the math. Norm's story didn't fully align with my previous excuses, but it was close enough to provide reasonable doubt. More importantly, it gave her a lifeline to argue against evaluation without looking like she was covering for a driver she'd already defended twice. Dr. Augustine. Selfridge turned to her. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Each one a century. Norm's research project is legitimate. The specimen overlap between xenobotany and xenolinguistics is documented in our departmental charter. She picked her words like surgical instruments. If the extended expedition times were due to off-record specimen requests, that's an interdepartmental communication failure, not a behavioral pathology. Selfridge leaned back. The chair creaked. His eyes moved between Norm's trembling hands, Grace's controlled expression, and my 9-foot blue frame occupying a chair that wasn't built for any of this. Final warning. He pointed at me with the datapad. Official documentation. One more incident, and you're in evaluation. No appeals. No advocacy. No creative specimen explanations. He looked at Norm. File your interdepartmental requests through proper channels, Dr. Spellman. This isn't a campus lab. Yes, sir. Dismissed. All of you? The corridor outside Selfridge's office was empty. Grace walked past without looking at me, her footsteps crisp, measured, the stride of someone processing anger and deciding where to put it. She turned the corner toward the science wing and disappeared. Martinez followed Selfridge back into the office. The door sealed. Norm stood in the corridor. His hands had stopped trembling. The datapad hung at his side, its fabricated document still glowing. Norm, don't. He held up a hand. The gesture was Grace's. I'd seen her make the same motion in the lab, the universal sign for I need a minute before I can be spoken to. Just, don't. He walked toward the mess hall. I followed. Not because the conversation was finished, but because walking beside someone who'd just risked his career for you was the minimum response when words couldn't carry the weight. The mess hall was between lunch and dinner service. Empty except for a janitor mopping the far corner and the persistent smell of protein loaf that no amount of cleaning eliminated. Norm sat at his usual table third from the window, eastern quadrant. The linguistics textbook was absent. He'd come straight from wherever he'd been when he heard about the evaluation. I sat across from him. The stool groaned its familiar complaint. Neither of us spoke for 2 minutes. Norm's eyes were fixed on the table surface, processing something that had nothing to do with phonemes or ergative case systems. Then he pushed his dessert across the table. A fruit Pandoran origin, something the mess hall had started stocking from the greenhouses. Purple-skinned, dense, slightly sweet. The only food in the cafeteria that tasted like something you'd actually choose to eat. I took it, bit into it. The sweetness hit different than anything the protein loaf dispensary could produce. Real flavor, grown in real soil, connected to the real biological network of a world that was trying to communicate with me. Thanks, I said. The word covered the fruit and everything else. Norm nodded, still not looking at me, but the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction, and when he finally spoke, it was in NA6, a sentence I only half understood, something about storms passing and trees remaining. Through the bond, kilometers away, Shadowfang dozed in the grotto. At night chanted quietly over Pikair's burial site. Sainum practiced Q exercises at the pool's edge, his bioluminescent markings pulsing in sync with the sanctuary's rhythm. And Tiseilan's frustration burned like a signal fire at the network's edge. The unbound warrior pacing the perimeter, restless, wanting to leave, unable to explain why she didn't. The Dreamwalker's grotto hummed with a frequency At night had spent 67 years waiting to hear. Not a sound, a presence. The walls breathed in cycles that matched his heartbeat, and when he placed his palm against the root clusters near Pikair's burial, the network answered with warmth that wasn't temperature but recognition. You belong here. Not in words. In the language that predated language, the electrochemical whisper of Eywa's distributed consciousness, speaking to a soul that had spent a lifetime learning to listen. The bond was a river. It flowed from the grotto's root network through the neural pathways the Dreamwalker had opened, carrying data that Adonite's traditionalist mind translated into spiritual experience. He could feel Shadowfang, a warm, patient presence in the network, all instinct and loyalty, circling the perimeter with the devoted attention of a creature that had found its purpose. He could feel Sainum bright, curious, overwhelmed, the boy's consciousness flickering through the bond like a torch in wind as he tried to process the scale of what he'd joined. And he could feel the Dreamwalker, distant kilometers away, at the human compound but present. A thread of awareness in the network's weave, carrying the particular cognitive signature that Adonite had never encountered in any NA6 or any animal. Structured, layered, organized in patterns that felt alien even through the translator of Tsahelu. Not NA6. Not human. Something between. Something new. The Utral Imokria, the tree of binding, was real. The songs Adonite had memorized as a youth, carried through the Relang's oral tradition for generations after the great clans abandoned them as myth, described exactly this: a keeper who could sustain Tsahelu indefinitely, bind willing souls into shared consciousness, and build territory from living architecture. The songs said the keeper would come when the people needed protection most. 17 members of the Relang 3 weeks ago. 4 survivors 3, now, with Pikair gone. If this wasn't the moment of greatest need, Adonite couldn't imagine what would be. You sit there all day. Tiseilan's voice cut through his meditation like a blade through fabric, touching the walls, chanting. Meanwhile we eat whatever grows within these borders and wait for a Dreamwalker to decide our fate. Adonite opened his eyes. The warrior stood at the grotto's entrance, backlit by the waterfall's spray. Her silhouette was tense, shoulders high, weight forward, knife hand resting on the bone handle at her hip. She'd been pacing since dawn. The sanctuary's territory was 5 kilometers in radius, and Tiseilan had walked every meter of it twice. You mapped the boundary, he said. Someone should know where the cage ends. It is not a cage. It is a territory we cannot leave without the machines finding us. It is a place run by a being we do not understand, who serves the humans during the day and plays at prophecy at night. Tiseilan entered the grotto. Her footsteps were silent on the moss hunter's instinct, even indoors. Adonite. I watched you weep when he bound you. I watched Sainum laugh like a child. Neither of you asked what happens if the Dreamwalker dies. If the humans come for him. If this system breaks. Valid questions. Adonite had considered each of them in the quiet hours between chanting and sleep. If the keeper dies, the songs say the network endures. The consciousness distributes. We would not lose the bond, it would change shape. The songs. Tiseilan's voice could have frosted metal. The songs also say the people numbered in the millions and rode Ikran as children. Songs are aspirations, not architecture. And yet you are here. Tiseilan stopped pacing. The stillness was more aggressive than the movement. I am here because we are 3 survivors with no territory, no allies, and no clan willing to take remnants of a people the Omadikea abandoned decades ago. Each word was a stone placed with precision. I am here because this place has water, food, and a predator that patrols the border. I am not here because I believe your Dreamwalker is a gift from Eywa. Then why did you stay? Because the alternative is dying in the jungle. She left. Through the entrance, past the waterfall, into the green architecture of a forest that belonged to someone else's system. Adonite listened to her footsteps fade, tracked her through the bond, though the connection was indirect. Sainum's awareness following Tiseilan's movements from his practice spot near the pool, the boy's attention automatically gravitating toward the woman who'd kept them alive for 3 weeks of running. She stayed because it is safe. She will deny it. She will test every wall, push every boundary, argue every decision. and she will stay. Adonite placed his hand on the root cluster. The network pulsed. Somewhere distant, the Dreamwalker's consciousness registered the interaction, a brief flicker of attention, acknowledged and withdrawn, the keeper checking on his people from across the gap between their worlds. Be patient with her, Adonite thought into the bond. Not words intention. The Dreamwalker might hear it, might not. The grotto breathed. The walls shifted. And Adonite returned to his chanting, building the spiritual foundation for a community that didn't know it was being founded. Saenum. Shadow Fang was the strangest and most wonderful thing Saenum had experienced in a life that now included the destruction of his clan, the death of his grandmother Pikire, and the existence of a dreamwalker who could bind souls through Tsahalo. The viper wolf lay beside the pool, forelimbs crossed, eyes half-closed, tail curling and uncurling in lazy patterns that matched the grotto's bioluminescence. Through the bond, Saenum could feel the animal's emotional state like a current running underneath his own thoughts, contentment, alertness, the specific satisfaction of a pack creature whose pack was growing. Saenum pressed his hand to the moss and felt the network expand beneath his fingers. Root systems carrying data, organism health, water levels, nutrient flows, the electromagnetic signatures of every living thing within 5 kilometers. He was 15 years old, and he could feel the forest thinking. The carved bone pendant swung against his chest as he leaned forward. His mother's. Carved by his father from the rib of a stern beast. He'd carried it since they died on the first day of the RDA clearing, since the machines ate the trees and the soldiers fired on anyone who stood between metal and earth. Mother would have loved this place. She would have understood what it means. Tsahalo passed through his awareness a blazing knot of frustration at the sanctuary's eastern boundary, walking fast, checking sightlines. She hadn't bound to the network, but Saenum could still track her through Shadowfang's territorial sense, a warm body moving through monitored space, catalogued but not connected. She was testing the edges. Saenum understood. Tsahalo processed uncertainty through movement, through combat, through the physical assertion of control over space she couldn't control emotionally. He wished she would bind. The network's warmth, the sensation of not alone that hummed through every nerve, was the first comfort he'd known since the bulldozers came. If Tsahalo felt it, if she let the bond carry even a fraction of the belonging it carried for him. But Tsahalo's choices were her own. The Dreamwalker had said so. Adonite had confirmed it. Saenum lay on the moss beside Shadowfang. The wolf's flank rose and fell. Through the bond, 3 heartbeats synchronized his, the wolf's, and somewhere distant, the Dreamwalker's. Separate bodies, shared rhythm. The bone pendant warmed against his skin. Not from body heat, from the moss beneath him, the network conducting warmth to the exact spot where grief pressed heaviest. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 23 days, sleep came without the sound of machines. Night at Hell's Gate was fluorescent tubes and recycled air. Chase Sinclair lay in his bunk and felt 2 worlds at once. The Avatar barracks, undersized bed, ceiling too close, other drivers breathing in human rhythms from their link chairs. His body was here 9 feet of borrowed biology, fed by cafeteria food and sustained by a cover story held together with fabricated documentation and one man's unexpected loyalty. The sanctuary, living walls, breathing moss, bioluminescence pulsing in cycles that matched the heartbeats of 4 citizens and 1 unbound warrior. The bond carried their states in background layers: Adonite's meditative calm, Saenum's dreaming wonder, Shadowfang's sentinel alertness, and Tsahalo's restlessness, which he registered not through the bond but through its absence, a gap in the network's awareness where a person moved without connection, visible only through the ripples she left in others' perceptions. She tested the boundary, walked every meter, came back. That's not the behavior of someone who's leaving. That's the behavior of someone who's deciding to stay and needs to understand the shape of the commitment. Through Saenum's sleeping awareness, Chase caught a fragment, Tsahalo accepting water from the boy near the pool. A small thing. The kind of thing a warrior who'd been running rear guard for 3 weeks rationing water, giving her portions to the wounded, might allow herself once she'd confirmed the supply was reliable. Progress. Incremental. Measured in sips rather than declarations. The bond pulled him deeper. Not sleep, a state between consciousness and rest where the network's data flowed through him in soft currents. The grotto's night cycle illumination. Shadowfang's half-dreams of running through moonlight. Adonite's chant, quieter now, rhythmic as breathing. Saenum's warmth against the wolf's fur. 2 lives. 2 places. 1 consciousness spread between them like a bridge that existed only because both shores held weight. He let the current carry him. Not fully 1 thread of attention remained at Hell's Gate, tracking sounds, monitoring for the approach of security guards or curious colleagues. But the rest of him sank into the sanctuary's rhythm, feeling his citizens settle into sleep one by one, until the network hummed with the specific quiet of a community at rest. Tsahalo was the last to sleep. Chase tracked her through the ambient data, body temperature dropping, muscle tension easing, heart rate slowing from the rapid pace of guard mode to the measured cadence of someone who had finally, reluctantly, allowed exhaustion to override vigilance. She slept with her knife in her hand. But she slept. The alarm came through Shadowfang's nervous system at 0300, a jolt of adrenaline transmitted through the bond that hit Chase's sleeping body like an electric current. His eyes snapped open. The Avatar barracks dark, quiet, other drivers sleeping. His body was in bed. His mind was in the sanctuary, riding the bond's emergency channel with a clarity that erased the distance between compound and grotto. Through Shadowfang, threat. The wolf was on his feet, hackles raised, neural filaments blazing amber in the grotto's night cycle darkness. His nose worked the air in rapid sweeps, cataloging a scent signature that triggered every predator recognition circuit in his nervous system. Heavy musk. Territorial marking compound. The specific chemical cocktail of an apex predator large enough to consider viper wolves a secondary food source. Thanator. Hostile detection alert. Entity, Pandora Thanator, juvenile, estimated 4.5 meters. Distance, 450 meters north-northeast, approaching. Threat level, high. Note, entity is outside territory boundary but approaching node influence zone. The system's notification overlaid his vision in the barracks red-bordered, pulsing, demanding attention from an administrator whose body was 3 hours' walk from the threat. Juvenile. Not full-grown. Still 4.5 meters of armored predator with 6 legs and jaws that could bite through steel plating. Shadowfang can't fight that. Neither can 3 NA6 with bone weapons. Through the bond, At Night was awake. The Elder's consciousness surfaced from meditation into sharp alertness. A man who'd survived 67 years on a moon full of predators recognized the quality of the alarm. His awareness pushed into the network, seeking Chase's signal. Keeper. Something approaches. Not words, the impression of them. At Night's traditional mind filtered the bond through spiritual vocabulary, but the urgency was unmistakable. Chase closed his eyes in the barracks. Let his awareness sink fully into the bond. His physical body wouldn't move, couldn't. The avatar was lying in a bunk at Hell's Gate, breathing normally, to all appearances sleeping. But his consciousness distributed through the network, riding the connections to see through his citizens' senses. Through Shadowfang, the Thanator's scent growing stronger. The creature was moving along a game trail that intersected the sanctuary's northern boundary, the same area where he and the Viper Wolf had found the NA6 blood trail. Not coincidence. Predators followed prey trails, and 4 wounded NA6 moving through this sector had laid down a scent map that anything with a nose could follow. Through Adenite, the Elder was standing, staff in hand, positioned near the grotto entrance. His breathing was controlled. Calm. The kind of calm that said I have faced worse while simultaneously saying I cannot face this without help. Through Sainum, panic. The boy was awake, pressed against the far wall, clutching his spear with both hands. His bioluminescent markings flickered in rapid pattern stress response, the NA6 equivalent of a racing heartbeat visible on the skin. Tisailan was not in the grotto. Chase's awareness swept the sanctuary. Shadowfang's territorial sense mapped every organism within the 5-kilometer radius, and Tisailan's unbound body registered as a warm signature moving north. Toward the boundary. Toward the Thanator. She's going to intercept it. Alone. With a bone knife and no bond to fall back on. Through Adenite, Tisailan. Stop. No response through the bond. She wasn't connected. The Elders shouted. NA6 echoed through the grotto and out into the jungle, but Tisailan was already 200 meters beyond the waterfall, moving with the specific speed of a hunter who'd decided that defense was an active verb. Chase gripped the bunk's edge. His physical hands clenched metal. His distributed awareness tracked 3 crisis points simultaneously, Shadowfang holding position at the grotto, At Night trying to keep Sainum calm, and an unbound warrior running towards something that could kill her in seconds. I can't reach her. I'm 3 hours away in a body that can't help. The system has no offensive capability at this range. The best I can do is coordinate through the bond and hope Tisailan knows what she's doing. Through Shadowfang, the Thanator entered the territory's outer edge. The hostile detection buff identified it in crisp detail. Juvenile male, approximately 3 years old, 4.6 meters nose to tail, weight estimated at 800 kilograms. Not the full-grown monster from the movie's action sequences, but enough mass and tooth to kill anything smaller than a stern beast. The creature moved with the fluid grace of something that had never learned fear. 6 legs carried its armored body through the undergrowth in a smooth, undulating gait that barely disturbed the vegetation. Its sensory quills, the fan of neural active appendages behind its head, spread wide, reading the forest's electromagnetic field for prey signatures. It wasn't hunting specifically. Territorial scouting, a juvenile establishing range, testing boundaries, cataloging the resources in a sector it might claim. The sanctuary's influence made it hesitate. Not repel. Chase's level 1 node didn't generate enough defensive energy to turn away an apex predator, but the neural field was unfamiliar. Foreign. The Thanator processed it the way it would process any anomaly, with caution, approaching slowly, ready to fight or flee depending on what it found. If it enters the grotto and finds the citizens, instinct takes over. Enclosed space. Prey animals. It won't scout anymore, it'll hunt. A sound broke through Shadowfang's awareness. Not from the Thanator, from above. A crack of stone against wood, sharp and deliberate. The Thanator's head snapped up. Sensory quills oriented toward the canopy at 2 o'clock northwest of its current position. Tisailan. She was in a tree. 50 meters from the Thanator, perched on a branch that put her above the creature's direct line of sight. The thrown stone had struck a trunk behind and to the left, drawing the predator's attention away from the sanctuary and toward empty forest. The Thanator turned. Its body realigned with the sound muscles bunching, 6 limbs adjusting grip, the armored tail sweeping undergrowth clear as it pivoted. A second stone hit a tree further northwest. The pattern said prey, running, that direction. The Thanator followed. Through the network's ambient awareness, Chase tracked the chase. Tisailan moved through the canopy with a speed and precision that betrayed years of training in a forest the Relang had called home since before the RDA arrived. She wasn't running from the Thanator, she was leading it, drawing it away from the sanctuary along a route she'd mapped during her perimeter walks, using terrain features she'd catalogued not as a prisoner but as a tactician. Ridge to the northwest. The ground dropped sharply beyond the ridgeline, a slope too steep for a Thanator's bulk to navigate without slowing. Lan knew this because she'd walked it yesterday, testing boundaries. Now she used it as a weapon. The Thanator hit the ridgeline at full speed. Its front limbs cleared the drop, but the rear quartet lost purchase on the crumbling soil. 800 kilograms of predator skidded down a 40-degree slope, claws tearing furrows in the earth, sensory quills flailing for balance. Lan didn't watch it fall. She was already moving south, back toward the sanctuary, taking a parallel route through the canopy that avoided the creature's recovery path. The Thanator regained its footing at the slope's base, shook dirt from its quills, and oriented not toward the sanctuary, not toward its original path. Southeast. Away. The ridgeline had disrupted its territorial mapping, and the creature's instinct defaulted to retreat from unfamiliar terrain rather than further investigation. Through Shadowfang, the Thanator's scent receding. The wolf's hackles lowered by increments as the threat signature diminished. Not gone, the predator would return eventually. Juvenile Thanators explored widely but deflected. Bought time. Chase's body was shaking. Not from cold, not from neural strain, from adrenaline pumped through a system that had been experiencing a predator encounter secondhand. Every spike of fight or flight transmitted through the bond with a fidelity that the Avatar's endocrine system couldn't distinguish from direct experience. His hands gripped the bunk's metal frame hard enough to creak the welds. Sweat, or the Na6 equivalent, slicked his palms. Through Saenum, Lan entered the grotto through the waterfall. She was bleeding, a claw graze along her left forearm where a low branch had caught her, or where the Thanator's swipe had come closer than her trajectory suggested. The wound was superficial but vivid, dark blue blood running from elbow to wrist, dripping onto the moss in a pattern the regenerative field immediately began addressing. At Night crossed to her. His hands were already reaching for the wound. Elder's instinct, the caretaker's response trained over decades. Let me see. It is nothing. Lan pulled her arm away. Reflex. The warrior's rejection of vulnerability as a visible state. You're bleeding on the floor. The floor has survived worse. But she let him look. Let his old hands probe the edges of the gash, testing depth, checking for embedded material. The regenerative field's warmth seeped into the wound, the sanctuary providing what Lan wouldn't ask for. Saenum stared at her from across the grotto. His spear was still in his hands. His eyes held the specific brightness of someone watching the impossible, a woman who'd run toward a Thanator with stones and a knife and come back alive. Don't, Lan said, catching the look. Don't make it into something it isn't. You let it away. I wasn't ready to run again. The words landed flat. Deliberate. The same words she'd have used if someone asked why she'd eaten breakfast. Functional, devoid of heroism, stripped of anything that could be interpreted as attachment to a place she claimed to despise. This is where we are. Until we are somewhere else, I keep what's here intact. Through the bond, Chase caught At Night's awareness, not directed at him, but the Elder's thoughts carried a texture that the network relayed. Pride. The specific pride of someone who'd watched a woman he'd raised since childhood do the thing she was born for, in defense of people she insisted she didn't care about, in a place she'd called a cage less than 12 hours ago. She defended the sanctuary. Unbound, unasked, running toward an apex predator with rocks. She can call it pragmatism. She can call it anything she wants. What it is a choice. Saenum offered water. A carved cup from the supplies they'd brought during the march, relaying craftsmanship, polished by use. Lan looked at it. At the boy holding it. At the sincerity in his face that no amount of trauma had managed to extinguish. She took the cup. Drank. The gesture was small, a sip, a nod, a return of the vessel. But yesterday she'd refused At Night's water. Yesterday the sanctuary was a temporary prison. Today, a woman who'd bled for its defense was accepting its hospitality. Chase opened his eyes in the barracks. His body was soaked with proxy sweat, his hands cramped from gripping the bunk frame. The ceiling was too close. The air tasted recycled and stale. Phantom pain traced a line along his left forearm, not his injury, not his blood. The bond's emotional bleed carrying sensation across kilometers, writing someone else's wound onto his nervous system in ghost script. He pressed his palm to the forearm. Solid. Unbroken. The ghost pain faded, but the adrenaline didn't. The Thanator will come back. Juveniles are persistent, they revisit territory until they claim it or find something better. Next time, Lan might not have the terrain advantage. Next time, the creature might come from a different direction, one she hasn't mapped. The system interface pulsed in his peripheral vision. He pulled up the blueprint menu, searching for anything that could address a predator-level threat. Defensive Thorns 75 SP3 HR build time. Function, area denial. Physical barrier. Effective against creatures up to Class 3. Note, Thanators are Class 5. Defensive Thorns provide deterrent, not prevention. Watcher Vine 75 SP2 HR build time. Function, surveillance. Early warning. No defensive capability. 75 SP for a deterrent that wouldn't stop the threat. 75 more for surveillance that would tell them the threat was coming without helping them survive it. He had 100 SP, enough for one option, not both. Watcher Vine first. Early warning gives them time to evacuate or prepare. Defensive Thorns next, once I earn more SP. And the node upgrade to level 2 expanded territory, stronger buffs, maybe enough influence to actually deter a class 5. Purchase, Watcher Vine 75 SP. Confirmed. Construction time, 2 hours. Remaining SP, 25. At the sanctuary, a root tendril began extending from the grotto's northern wall, thin, flexible, lined with sensory organs that would spread through the canopy and create a detection web covering the approaches that the Thanator had used. 2 hours until operational. Not fast enough for tonight, but the Thanator was gone for now. Through the bond, T-Saylan's pain faded as the regenerative field closed her wound. At night wrapped the arm in clean fiber, not because the sanctuary's healing needed assistance, but because the act of bandaging was human, and some gestures mattered more for the gesture than the medicine. Chase lay in his bunk. The proxy adrenaline ebbed slowly, leaving behind a fatigue that no amount of sleep would address, the exhaustion of watching a crisis unfold from 3 hours away, unable to act, dependent on citizens he'd known for 2 days to defend a territory he'd claimed for 10. She bled for it. Whatever she says, whatever she calls it, T-Saylan bled for a place I built. That makes it hers too, whether she admits it or not. The Thanator would return. The sanctuary needed walls, weapons, warning systems. It needed more citizens, more resources, more of everything that the system's progression path was designed to provide. And Chase needed to be there physically, not through proxy when the next threat came. The barracks hummed with recycled air. The bunk was too small. And through the bond, 4 citizens and 1 unbound warrior settled back into the quiet that follows survived danger, each of them a little more committed to a grotto in the jungle than they'd been at sunset. He closed his eyes. The proxy pain was gone. The phantom adrenaline fading. But the memory of T-Saylan accepting water from Sanum, the smallest possible concession, the tiniest crack in armor built from years of loss, played behind his eyelids like a fire that didn't need fuel to keep burning. The expedition request form had 17 fields, 4 drop-down menus, and a mandatory risk assessment section that required Chase to estimate his probability of death from Pandoran wildlife on a scale of 1 to 5. He circled 3, the same number James Chen had used on every pre-deployment form. Conservative enough to avoid psychiatric attention. Honest enough that Grace couldn't accuse him of underestimating the terrain. The day toppad's glow was the only light in the lab. 0530, an hour before shift start, the science wing empty except for the overnight analytical equipment humming through its calibration cycles. Chase had been here since 0400, when the proxy adrenaline from the Thanator crisis had finally metabolized enough for his hands to hold a stylus without shaking. Through the bond, the sanctuary settling into its morning rhythm. Adenite's pre-dawn chant vibrating through the root network like a bass note. Sanum sleeping against Shadowfang's flank, the boy's bioluminescent markings pulsing in sync with the wolf's breathing. The Watcher Vine completed 2 hours after purchase, its surveillance tendrils now spread through the canopy in a 200-meter web of biological sensors cataloging every movement within detection range. And T-Saylan, awake, pacing the perimeter with the claw graze on her forearm sealed by the regenerative field, moving through pre-dawn darkness with the relentless energy of a woman who'd fought a Thanator yesterday and was looking for what came next. The Thanator would come back. Juvenile predators didn't abandon territorial investigations after one failed approach. They adapted, learned the terrain's weaknesses, and returned along vectors that bypassed the obstacles they'd encountered. The Watcher Vine would provide warning. The defensive thorns Chase needed to purchase would provide deterrent. Neither would provide protection against an 800-kilogram apex predator that had decided the sanctuary's territory overlapped with its own. I need to be there. Physically present. Not monitoring through the bond from 3 hours away while my citizens handle threats my system should be addressing. The expedition form was the answer. Not a single-use authorization, a standing research project. Multi-visit, multi-day, institutionally sanctioned field presence in Sector 7 that would justify regular trips to the sanctuary without requiring individual expedition approvals that Grace had to sign and Selfridge had to tolerate. The proposal sat on his day topad, long-term neural network mapping in isolated flora clusters, a longitudinal study of bioluminescent communication patterns in high-density sectors. Real science. Legitimate methodology. The kind of project that James Chen's publication record supported and that Grace's research interests would find irresistible. The cover story, built from real data, armored in institutional formatting, designed to make regular Sector 7 visits look like exactly what the Avatar program was supposed to produce. He attached the specimen data from every expedition, the neural density readings, the flora samples, the bioluminescence patterns that Grace had called the best data we've gotten in 2 years. Evidence of value. Proof that James Chen's fieldwork justified continued investment. The proposal needed Grace's approval, which meant the proposal needed to survive Grace's scrutiny, and Grace Augustine's scrutiny had dismantled better constructed arguments than this one. Grace read the proposal for 3 hours. Not continuously. She'd pick it up, mark a section, set it down, light a cigarette, stub it out, pick the proposal up again. The cycle repeated with the rhythmic patience of a scientist who treated document review the way a jeweler treated gem inspection, every facet examined, every flaw catalogued, every strength weighed against the cost of endorsement. Chase sat across the lab, pretending to run spectral analysis while monitoring Grace's progress through the specific cadence of her cigarette consumption. Fast smoking, frustrated. Slow smoking, intrigued. No smoking, fully absorbed. She'd been in the no-smoking phase for 40 minutes. The longitudinal framework is sound. Grace set the day top hat down. Picked up her coffee cold by now, the third cup, abandoned and reclaimed twice. The methodology matches Chen's published approach. The specimen data supports the location choice. She looked at him over the coffee cup. The look was professional, analytical, and loaded with the specific attention of someone who'd been watching James Chen's behavior for 18 days and had built a file of observations that no formal report contained. I'll approve it. With conditions. Here it comes. Regular check-ins. GPS tracking active throughout all field sessions. And a mandatory partner for any expedition exceeding 4 hours. She sipped the cold coffee. Didn't wince. I'm assigning Norm Spellman. The words landed with the precision of a chess move, deliberate, multi-layered, serving objectives that Chase could see and objectives he suspected. On the surface, safety protocol. No avatar driver works alone in hostile terrain for extended periods. Standard procedure. Defensible. Underneath, surveillance. Grace was assigning her most loyal junior researcher to accompany a driver she didn't fully trust, in a sector where that driver's behavior had been consistently anomalous. Norm would observe. Norm would report. And Grace would have data from a source she considered reliable about what James Chen was actually doing in Sector 7. The irony was architectural. Grace was deploying Norm as intelligence, the same function Chase had been developing Norm for since their first shared meal in the mess hall. Two people using the same man for the same purpose from opposite directions. Norm's a linguist, not a botanist. The project's cross-disciplinary. Bioluminescent signaling patterns have communication implications that overlap with xenolinguistic research. It's a legitimate collaboration. Grace's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. And Norm could use the field experience. He's been desk-bound too long. She's testing me. Testing whether I'll resist the partner assignment, which would confirm I'm hiding something. And she's testing Norm whether proximity to my fieldwork produces observations that validate or contradict her suspicions. Fine. Norm it is. Don't make me regret this. The phrase was becoming Grace's signature, a 3-word contract that carried more weight each time she deployed it. She'd said it before the first expedition. Before the overnight. Before the evaluation where Norm had saved Chase's career with fabricated documentation. Each repetition added a layer of meaning. The first time, it had been a warning. Now it was something closer to a prayer. Norm Spellman reacted to news of his field assignment the way Norm Spellman reacted to most positive developments, with excessive enthusiasm moderated by immediate anxiety. Neural network mapping. In the field. With actual specimens. He gestured with his fork, scattering protein loaf fragments across the mess hall table in a pattern that Adenite might have interpreted as a prayer formation. That's the linguistic applications alone, bioluminescent signaling as a proto-communication system, if we can establish correlation between signal frequency and information content. Norm. Sorry. Yes. I'm excited. Is that obvious? Your fork is a weapon. He set it down. The mess hall hummed with dinner-hour traffic, the specific white noise of 200 people eating food they didn't enjoy in a facility they didn't choose on a moon that was trying to kill them. Chase had grown comfortable in the noise. It was cover. Nobody eavesdropped in the mess hall because everyone assumed that nothing interesting was said over protein loaf. The project starts day 15. 2 days of prep, then our first joint expedition. Chase lowered his voice. Not conspicuously, the gradual decrease of someone shifting from professional to personal conversation. I need to know something before we go out there. Norm's enthusiasm dimmed. The shift was visible, the bright surface retreating behind the cautious analytical framework of a man who'd already risked his career once for the person sitting across from him. What do you need to know? How you feel about the RDA's expansion operations. The clearance work. The bulldozer routes that are pushing into sectors the survey data says shouldn't be opened for decades. The question wasn't subtle. Chase hadn't designed it to be. Norm Spellman was intelligent enough to recognize a recruitment probe and honest enough to answer it directly. I feel. Norm set down his fork. Properly this time. I feel like I traveled 6 years through space to study the most complex biological network in known science, and the organization that paid for the trip is systematically destroying it. I feel like the Avatar program was supposed to be a bridge between species, and instead it's a cost-justified excuse for colonial extraction. And I feel like he stopped. Looked at his plate. At Chase. At the mess hall full of people who were, in various capacities, complicit in the process he'd just described. Like the right thing to do isn't always the same as the safe thing. Yes. Norm's voice was quiet. That. Chase let the admission settle. Through the bond, Shadow Fang's distant awareness, the wolf patrolling the sanctuary's perimeter with the steady rhythm of a sentinel who'd found purpose. Sainum's evening routine, the boy practicing Q exercises at the pool, his bioluminescent markings pulsing in patterns that the network was teaching him to control. Adenite's chant, carrying the specific frequency of an elder preparing his community for something he couldn't name but could feel approaching. He's ready. Not for binding, for truth. The binding comes after, if he chooses it. But the truth has to come first, because Norm Spellman is the kind of person who makes informed decisions or doesn't make them at all. Norm. Chase met his eyes. The gaze held not the trained eye contact of NA6 greeting protocol, but the human equivalent, direct, personal, carrying weight. In 2 days, I'm going to show you something. Something that will change how you understand this moon, this program, and your place in both. I need you to come with an open mind and a closed mouth. Norm's throat moved. A swallow. The physical marker of a man processing the gap between curiosity and commitment. Okay. Not okay casually. Okay as a promise. What I show you stays between us. Not Grace. Not your research notes. Not anyone, until I say otherwise. The mess hall noise pressed in. Protein loaf. Recycled air. 200 people living ordinary lives 50 meters from a conversation that was about to alter the trajectory of at least one of them permanently. Okay, Norm said. The word was different this time. Heavier. The inflection of a man who'd weighed the cost and decided the unknown was worth the price. Chase picked up his fork. Finished his meal. The protein loaf tasted like nothing, which was, at this point, almost comforting. Familiar. The expedition form sat in his inbox approved, time-stamped, institutional permission to take a lonely xenolinguist into a jungle where a secret waited behind a waterfall. Norm talked for the first hour of the hike. Not nervously academically. The xenolinguist processed unfamiliar terrain the way he processed unfamiliar data, by narrating it. Every plant species he recognized received a taxonomic designation. Every animal call triggered a phonological analysis. Every bioluminescent pattern was catalogued against the published literature on NA6 environmental signaling. Chase let him talk. The running commentary served a dual purpose. It established a baseline of Norm's observational capacity, high, and it provided cover for the silence that would have been conspicuous if two researchers walking through hostile jungle weren't exchanging observations. The jungle was different now. Not objectively the same canopy, the same root systems, the same ambient bioluminescence that Sector 7 had carried since before human arrival. But Chase's perception of it had changed. The territorial awareness buff, even at this distance from the sanctuary, provided a faint overlay of biological data that made the forest feel populated rather than empty. Organisms registered as presences rather than obstacles. The stream they followed wasn't just water, it was a nutrient highway feeding the sanctuary's root network from upstream sources that the system had mapped and catalogued. The first time he'd walked this trail, he'd tripped over roots and been charged by a hexapid. The second time, he'd discovered the grotto. The third time, he'd claimed a territory node and woke up bleeding from his nose in a cave that had become his home. Now he walked it with a companion, carrying a secret that was about to expand from one skull to two. Through the bond, Shadow Fang at the sanctuary, detecting their approach. The wolf's territorial instinct catalogued the two-body signature, one familiar, Chase, one novel, Norm. The alpha's response was professional, known entity plus unknown, proceeding to assessment position. Shadow Fang repositioned from perimeter patrol to the grotto entrance, where he could evaluate the newcomer from a defensible location. At the 2-kilometer mark, Chase stopped. Norm. The narration halted mid-syllable. The spiral fern's bioluminescent output suggests circadian regulation through a melatonin analog pathway that. There's something ahead. Norm's expression shifted. The academic retreating behind the field researcher, the man who trained for Pandora conditions and knew that something ahead in the jungle was the precursor to decisions that textbooks couldn't prepare for. Something dangerous. Something that changes everything. Chase turned to face him. The trail stretched behind them. 2 hours of walking, 2 hours of exit route back to Hell's Gate. Ahead, the waterfall, the grotto, and 5 days of kingdom building that no human at Hell's Gate had ever seen. What I'm about to show you isn't in any research database. It's not in Grace's files. It's not in the Avatar program's protocols or the RDA's survey data. It exists because Pandora built it, and I found it, and I've been building on it since day 5. Norm's mouth opened, closed. The data processing look, his analytical framework spinning up, searching for categories that could contain the statement Chase had just delivered. If you walk forward, you see everything. And once you see it, you can't unknow it. Your relationship with the Avatar program, with Grace, with the RDA, all of it shifts. Permanently. Chase paused. Let the weight settle. You can turn back. I'll tell Grace the expedition was routine. The data supports it. Nobody asks questions. Your career stays intact. Your worldview stays comfortable. And if I walk forward, then you and I have a conversation that takes a lot longer than the 4-hour expedition window allows, and we figure out together what to do with information that the most powerful corporation in human history would kill to either control or destroy. The jungle breathed around them. Insects clicked in frequencies that Norm's phonological training parsed automatically. Communication, territorial marking, mating calls rendered in chemistry instead of language. The stream gurgled. Somewhere above, an avian creature called in harmonic sequences that the xenolinguist's ear tracked and filed. Norm looked at the trail ahead. At Chase. At the trail. 30 seconds. The duration of a man's entire value system being weighed against his curiosity. He walked forward. Dash. The waterfall appeared through the treeline at 1030, the same curtain of warm water that Chase had ducked through on his second expedition, when a proto-system contact had dragged him from a greenhouse at 3 in the morning and sent him stumbling into the jungle to find something his borrowed body was designed to connect with. That had been day 4. 12 days ago. The grotto behind the waterfall had been a cave with glowing plants and a neural dense root cluster. Now it was a sanctuary level 1 node, 5-kilometer territorial radius, populated by 4 citizens and 1 unbound resident, equipped with a healing pod, a watcher vine, and the beginnings of a community that Adenite called sacred and Tisay Lan called temporary. Chase ducked through the waterfall. The grotto's bioluminescence brightened the network, recognizing its administrator, adjusting output, the living walls shifting from conservation mode to active display. the hexagonal status patterns organized along the western wall. The moss carpet thickened under his feet. The healing pod's golden glow pulsed in greeting from its alcove near the pool. Behind him, Norm stepped through. The xenolinguist stopped at the entrance. Water dripped from his avatar hair. His mouth was open, not speaking, not breathing through it, just open. The mechanical response of a jaw that had lost contact with its neural control pathways because every available processing cycle was being redirected to visual interpretation. The grotto was not a cave. It was a facility. Every surface bore the marks of biological engineering, organized bioluminescence, structured root networks, the healing pod's engineered growth lines visible beneath its membrane. The Watcher Vine's surveillance tendrils extended through the ceiling, their sensory organs visible as small, jewel-like clusters that tracked movement with a precision no natural vine possessed. And at the grotto's entrance, positioned exactly where territorial instinct and administrator instruction had placed him, Shadow Fang. The Viper Wolf Alpha sat on his haunches, scarred muzzle, yellow eyes, 65 kilograms of apex predator, watching the newcomer with an intelligence that no wildlife documentary had ever captured because no wildlife documentary had ever filmed a bonded creature assessing a potential pack member. Shadow Fang's neural filaments glowed not amber, threat, not red, danger, blue-green, curiosity, the color the wolf used when encountering something new that didn't trigger defensive response. Norm's avatar body locked, every muscle rigid, the freeze response of a man who'd studied Viper Wolf behavior in academic journals and was now experiencing it at 2 meters distance. He won't attack. Chase crossed to Shadow Fang and placed his hand on the wolf's flank. Through the bond, reassurance. Friend, not prey. Assess, don't defend. Norm, meet Shadow Fang. My first citizen. Norm's mouth worked. Sounds emerged, not words, not yet, just the vocal precursors that the human brain produced when language centers were overwhelmed by sensory input. His eyes tracked from the wolf to the walls to the healing pod to the ceiling-mounted vine to Chase's hand on an apex predator's fur. He stopped. Started. Your first citizen. Bonded through Tsahalo. Permanent neural link. He's part of a network, a biological system that Eywa created. I'm the administrator. Shadow Fang stood. Padded toward Norm. The Viper Wolf's nose worked the air, sampling the newcomer's chemical signature with the methodical thoroughness of a creature that stored scent identities the way databases stored records. Norm held absolutely still. Shadow Fang sniffed his hand. Considered. Licked it once, the Viper Wolf's equivalent of a preliminary acceptance stamp, the declaration that this one is not food and may be allowed further into the territory. A sound broke from Norm's throat. Not quite a laugh. The overwhelmed, involuntary vocalization of a scientist standing inside proof of everything he'd traveled 6 years to study. There's more, Chase said. A lot more. And from the grotto's interior, emerging through the healing pod's golden glow with the unhurried dignity of an elder presenting his sacred space, at night. Staff in hand. White-haired. Amber-eyed. The spiritual leader of a destroyed clan, standing in a sanctuary built by something he believed was prophecy fulfilled. Behind him, Sainum. Bone pendant against his chest. Spear in hand, too big, always too big, but held now with the confidence of a boy who'd earned his place. And behind them both, visible only as a silhouette on the upper ledge, Tisei Lan. Knife across her knees. Yellow eyes tracking the second dream walker with the cool precision of a sentinel evaluating whether the territory's population had just grown by one ally or one threat. Norm. Chase's voice was steady. The moment required it. These are the Relang. Survivors of an RDA clearance operation. They live here, under the protection of a network that Eywa built through me. And I need you to sit down, because what I'm about to explain is going to take a while. Norm sat. Not on a chair on the moss, which adjusted to his body weight with the responsive precision of a living surface designed for exactly this purpose. His legs folded under him. His hands found the ground. The bioluminescence pulsed beneath his palms. And for the first time since Chase Sinclair had woken in the wrong body on the wrong moon, the secret had a witness who wasn't bound by the system or shaped by NA6 tradition. A human scientist, sitting on living moss, with a wolf at his side and 3 NA6 watching from positions that ranged from welcoming to wary. The explanation began. Norm asked questions the way a river erodes stone continuously, from multiple angles, each query cutting deeper into the material than the one before. The interface. You said it manifests as a visual overlay. Can you describe the rendering format? Is it text-based? Symbolic? Does it use a known semiotic system or something the network generates natively for your cognitive architecture? Text. English. Translucent. Overlaid on my visual field like a heads-up display. Chase sat across from Norm at the grotto's pool, the water between them reflecting bioluminescence in rippled patterns that Norm's linguistics-trained eye tracked involuntarily. The system generates it specifically for my brain Earth origin cognition. If a NA6 had the same access, the interface would probably render differently. Images, maybe. Sensory impressions. Because NA6 cognitive processing is primarily visuospatial rather than linguistic. Norm's datapad was in his lap. He wasn't writing, his hands were too occupied with gesturing, but the device recorded audio with the passive thoroughness of technology that didn't need prompting. Chase would have to address the recording later. For now, the questions were more important than the security protocol. The binding. Sahela-based, permanent neural link, 2-directional. You said you can sense citizens' emotional states, physical condition, location within territory. Norm's voice had shifted from academic to operational, the analytical framework processing data in real time rather than storing it for later review. Can you sense their thoughts? Memories? Can you control their actions? No. The bond carries state, not content. I feel what they feel. I don't think what they think. And control. Chase looked at Knight, who sat at the western wall, listening with the patient attention of an elder who'd already been through the explanation once and was now monitoring its reception. The bond provides awareness, not authority. Citizens are autonomous. They can leave the territory. They can refuse instructions. The system doesn't override free will, but it does influence behavior. Emotional bleed. You mentioned that. If your citizens feel your emotions and you feel theirs, the feedback loop creates a kind of emotional synchronization. Over time, that could produce conformity. Consensus through proximity rather than coercion. He's found the ethical crack in under 30 minutes. The xenolinguist who studies how language shapes thought has immediately identified how the bond might shape feeling. Yes, the emotional bleed is real. I've experienced it. Shadowfang's loneliness affecting my mood, Sainum's fear during the Thanator approach registering as my own anxiety. Chase kept his voice even, honest. If Norm was going to commit, he needed to commit to the truth, not a sanitized version of it. Managing it is part of being an administrator. Recognizing which emotions are mine and which are network bleed. It's not perfect. Norm absorbed this. His fingers tapped his thigh. The processing rhythm Chase had learned to recognize as active cognition rather than nervous energy. Through the grotto's bioluminescence, his avatar's faint markings pulsed in patterns that reflected the root network's proximity without the organized synchronization that bound citizens displayed. The relang. Norm turned to Adenite. His posture shifted, the subtle adjustments of someone switching from scientific interrogation to cultural engagement. Shoulders softer. Head slightly inclined. The body language of a xenolinguist who'd studied interclan respect protocols, even if his earlier attempt at field application had existed only in training manuals. Elder Adenite. May I ask, the binding you underwent, was it what you expected? Adenite's amber eyes assessed Norm with the same thoroughness they'd assessed Chase 5 days ago, measuring the sincerity beneath the question, testing for the specific quality that the elder's spiritual framework classified as worthiness. I expected Eywa's touch, Adenite said. His English was deliberate, shaped by decades of limited human contact. I received more. The bond is not a single thread, it is a weaving. I feel the keeper, the wolf, the boy, the forest itself, speaking in frequencies my body was built to hear but my ears had never accessed. He placed his hand on the moss. The songs of the Relang describe this. Utral Imokria, the tree of binding. We believed it was legend. It is not. Utral Imokria. Norm's linguistic training caught the phrase, processing it through dialect analysis and comparative phonology simultaneously. That's not standard Omaticaean. The phoneme cluster in Imokria uses a consonant sequence I've only seen in archaic NA6 texts pre-diaspora period, before the Great Clan separation. The Relang preserved what others forgot. Adenite's voice carried the specific pride of a culture bearer who'd spent decades maintaining traditions that larger clans had abandoned. Our songs are older than the Omaticaea's songs. Our memory is longer. Norm's daytop had hand twitched. The reflex of a researcher hearing previously undocumented linguistic data and wanting desperately to record, analyze, and publish it. He controlled the impulse. Barely. Sainum had been watching from the pool's edge, cross-legged, the bone pendant resting in his lap. The boy's curiosity about the second dreamwalker manifested as a steady, forward-leaning attentiveness that Chase recognized from the bond's ambient awareness, the Relang youth evaluating a potential community member with the straightforward assessment of someone too young for diplomatic pretense. You speak NA6, Sainum said. Not a question, an observation. He'd been listening to Norm's pronunciation of Utral Imokria with the critical ear of a native speaker. I try. Norm's self-deprecation was genuine. My accent is wrong, but fixable. Sainum grinned. The expression transformed his face, the grief-haunted teenager becoming, briefly, a boy who'd found something to teach instead of something to mourn. The consonant here he demonstrated, producing the archaic phoneme cluster with the effortless precision of someone who'd learned it from elders who'd learned it from elders who'd learned it from the beginning. Your tongue is too high, lower, behind the teeth. Norm tried, failed, tried again. Sainum corrected. The exchange was for 30 seconds, exactly what both of them needed, a young NA6 and a human linguist, bonding over the specific pleasure of shared language learning, in a cave of living light on a moon where their species were supposed to be enemies. Tisei Lan watched from above. Through Sainum's awareness in the bond, Chase caught her expression, guarded, evaluative, but not hostile. The warrior assessing whether the second Dreamwalker carried the same capacity for harm as the species he represented, or whether, like the first Dreamwalker, the one she'd held a knife to and gradually stopped hating, he might be something else. 2 hours of questions. 2 hours of answers that were complete except for the pieces Chase withheld: the transmigrator origin, the metaknowledge, the specific details of a system that presented reality as a game interface because the consciousness driving it was built for that kind of processing. He told Norm about the system's capabilities, nodes, binding, territory, blueprints. About the resources, NE, SP, FP, their generation and expenditure. About Eywa's autonomous actions, the communication jamming that had never been explained, the proto-system contact in the greenhouse that first night. He showed Norm the healing pod, the Watcher Vine's surveillance output, the moss carpet that adjusted to body weight and shape. He showed him the bond. Not through binding, through demonstration. Chase placed his hand on Shadow Fang's flank and narrated, in real time, what the wolf was sensing: Norm's chemical signature, curiosity, adrenaline, cortisol, the grotto's ambient temperature, 22.3 degrees, the position of every organism within the territorial radius. Information flowing through a neural link that converted animal perception into human-readable data. Norm's scientific framework strained. Not breaking, stretching. The xenolinguist who'd built his career on the assumption that NA6 communication systems were the most complex biological information networks in known space was now standing inside proof that Pandora's actual communication architecture was orders of magnitude more sophisticated than anything the published literature described. This is he stopped. Started. Stopped again. The linguistic processing engine that made Norm Spellman one of the Avatar program's most valuable researchers had encountered a phenomenon that exceeded his vocabulary's carrying capacity. The data structures. The information transfer rates. The organized bioarchitecture. Grace has been studying Eywa's network for 15 years. If she saw this. She can't see this. Not yet. But the scientific implications are enormous. And irrelevant if the RDA gets here first. Chase held Norm's gaze. The moment required directness, not diplomacy. I built this to protect people. NA6 survivors who have nowhere else to go. A piece of Pandora's consciousness that the RDA would dissect for research papers if they found it. Everything you see here, the grotto, the citizens, the network exists because I chose to build rather than report. And that choice was. Norm searched for the word. Illegal. Under every RDA protocol I can think of. Unauthorized construction, unauthorized indigenous contact, unauthorized biological experimentation. All of it. Yes. And you want me to what? Keep the secret? Help you build? Become part of? He gestured at the grotto. At the walls. At the Relang survivors who'd been watching a dreamwalker struggle with the gap between his training and his reality. I want you to choose. Knowing everything I've told you. Knowing the risks. Knowing that the RDA would terminate both of us if this came to light. Chase kept his voice level. I can offer you binding, a permanent place in the network. Or I can offer you nothing except the knowledge that this exists and the trust that you won't report it. Either way, the choice is yours. The grotto hummed. The bond carried 4 citizens' awareness: Shadow Fang's patient assessment, Adenite's spiritual attention, Sainum's hopeful curiosity, and from the ledge above, Lan's silent evaluation. None of them intruded on the moment. The network's collective intelligence recognized that this decision belonged to Norm alone. Norm looked at the walls, at the organized bioluminescence, at the healing pod's golden glow, at Sainum, who'd corrected his pronunciation with the easy generosity of a boy who'd lost everything except the capacity to teach, at Shadow Fang, whose intelligent yellow eyes held none of the aggression his species was known for and all of the patience that the bond had taught him, at the moss beneath his hands, which had grown tiny tendrils around his fingers, the network reaching out, not binding, just touching, the biological equivalent of an extended hand. I need to think, Norm said. Take the time you need. How much time do I have? Chase checked the interface. The expedition window: 4 hours in the field, 2 hours transit each way was burning. They needed to return to Hell's Gate before the GPS log showed extended stationary time that would generate the same questions that had brought Grace's attention to his previous expeditions. 4 hours. Norm laughed. The sound was different from his mess hall laughter, not the too loud burst of social anxiety, but the quiet, broken laugh of a man whose universe had just expanded past his ability to map it, and who recognized the absurdity of applying a 4-hour deadline to the most consequential decision of his life. 4 hours, he repeated. You are asking me to decide the trajectory of my entire career, my relationship with every institution I've ever been part of, and my understanding of consciousness itself in 4 hours. Welcome to Pandora. Chase almost smiled. Almost. Everything here happens faster than you're ready for. Norm sat in the grotto for the remaining time, hands on the moss, bioluminescence reflected in eyes that were seeing the world rebuild itself in real time. The tendrils around his fingers didn't pull, didn't bind, just maintained contact, the network's biological patience communicating through touch what Chase's words had communicated through language. Stay, or go, but know what's here. Through the bond, Sainum's hope, fears, undisguised, the 15-year-old's transparent desire for the linguist who'd tried his consonants to choose the path that kept him close. Adenite's calm, the elder who'd walked his own version of this threshold and come through it transformed. Shadow Fang's pragmatic assessment: this one smells like he belongs. Let him decide. And Lan, still on the ledge, still watching. Her silence carried the weight of someone who'd decided long ago that trust was a currency she couldn't afford, and who was watching another person face the same calculation from the other side of the choice. The expedition window shrank. 3 hours. 2. The return hike would take 90 minutes at a pace that didn't raise suspicion. We need to go. Chase stood. Norm stayed seated. His hands pressed into the moss. The tendrils held. His eyes wide, luminous in the bioluminescence, carrying the specific gravity of a man whose scientific training had just been validated and destroyed in the same afternoon found Chase's. I haven't said yes. I know. I haven't said no. I know that too. Norm stood. The tendrils released his fingers gently, the network withdrawing its touch with the same patience it had extended it. He looked at Adenite, at Sainum, at the walls that pulsed with organized light, carrying data that exceeded every model of biological information systems the human species had ever constructed. "Show me the way back," he said. "I need to think somewhere that isn't." He gestured at the grotto, at the living architecture, at the specific impossibility of standing inside proof of a planetary consciousness and trying to evaluate it with the tools of a species that had only just learned the planet was conscious. "Isn't this?" They left. Through the waterfall, into the jungle, back along the trail that was becoming as familiar to Chase as the corridor between his Meridian Energy cubicle and the break room coffee machine. 2 hours of walking. 2 hours of silence. Norm didn't talk. For the first time since Chase had known him, the xenolinguist had run out of words. His avatar body moved through the jungle on autopilot while his mind, Chase could see it in the unfocused eyes, the mechanical gait, the lips that moved without producing sound, processed an information load that exceeded every bandwidth limit his training had built. They passed through the perimeter gate at 1500. Swiped credentials. Logged return. The security tech didn't look up. Through the bond, 3 hours south, the sanctuary pulsed in the afternoon light. At night's chant carried through the root network, reaching Chase in frequencies that made the processed air of Hell's Gate feel thin by comparison. Sainum had returned to his Q exercises. Shadow Fang patrolled. And somewhere between the classified data in Norm Spellman's head and the decision in Norm Spellman's heart, a choice was forming that would either expand the network's human contingent to 2 or leave Chase's secret resting in the hands of a man who hadn't promised anything except to think. Through the bond, the faintest echo from the grotto's moss carpet. The tendrils that had held Norm's fingers were still extended, still reaching toward the place where the linguist had sat. Waiting. The 4-hour mark passed, and Norm hadn't moved. He sat on the moss carpet near the pool, the same spot where Pikire had died, though he didn't know that, with his avatar legs folded under him and his hands pressed flat against the bioluminescent surface. The grotto's root network pulsed beneath his palms, responding to the proximity of an unbound consciousness with the patient curiosity of an immune system encountering something not yet categorized. I watched from the entrance. Didn't push. Didn't prompt. Norm Spellman was a man who processed the world through data, and he'd just been handed a data set that invalidated everything he'd spent 6 years traveling from Earth to study. Through the bond, at night's awareness, calm and observant from his meditation spot near the western wall. Sainum's excitement, vibrating at the network's edges. The boy wanted to show Norm everything, explain everything, but I'd asked him to wait. Shadow Fang dozed at the perimeter, one ear tracking the Watcher Vine's surveillance feed for threats. The defensive thorns I'd grown along the northern approach bristled in patterns that matched the Viper Wolf's vigilance. And Tisei Lan, present but separate, crouched on a rock above the waterfall, sharpening her knife with a stone she'd selected 3 days ago for its grit. She'd said nothing when Norm arrived. Hadn't acknowledged the second Dreamwalker's existence beyond a single glance, yellow eyes measuring, categorizing, dismissing. Norm's hands pressed harder into the moss. His bioluminescent markings, the faint patterns along his avatar's jawline and forearms, flickered in response to the root network's electromagnetic field. Not bonded. Not connected. Just adjacent. 2 systems in proximity, leaking signal. The neural density alone. He stopped. Started again. The organized structure of the root network in this chamber exceeds anything in the published literature. Grace has been studying Eywa's network architecture for 15 years and she hasn't found anything approaching this level of integration. He's still processing it as science. That's fine. Science is where Norm lives. Let him come to the rest on his own. It's not in the published literature because nobody's looked in the right place, I said. The grotto isn't typical. The sanctuary node concentrates the network's activity, amplifies it. What you're feeling through the moss is a fraction of what bound citizens experience through the link. Norm looked at his hands. The moss had grown tiny tendrils around his fingers, not binding, just touching. Reaching. The network recognized potential and responded with the biological equivalent of an outstretched hand. The Relang. At night and Sainum. Norm's voice was measured. Controlled. The academic building a framework around data that refused to fit existing categories. They're bound. Permanently connected to this network. They can feel each other. Feel Shadow Fang. Feel you? Yes. And the system, the interface you described. The stats, the resources, the blueprints. That's not metaphor. Not cultural interpretation. Actual quantifiable mechanics embedded in the planetary biological network. Yes. And Eywa, the consciousness that the NA6 pray to, that Grace has spent her career trying to prove exists as more than collective neural activity. Eywa created this interface specifically for you. Because you're. He paused, choosing words. Anomalous. Eywa detected something in my consciousness that doesn't belong. Instead of rejecting it, she quarantined it and gave the anomaly tools. I'm a bug, she decided to feature. Norm almost smiled. Almost. The expression died halfway, replaced by something heavier. The RDA is going to destroy this world, James. He used the cover name, Habit, but his eyes said he'd stopped believing it was my real one somewhere during the last 4 hours. Not today, not tomorrow, but the mining operations are expanding. The clearance protocols are getting more aggressive. I've seen the survey maps, they're pushing into sectors that aren't supposed to be opened for decades. Something's accelerating the timeline. In the movie, the acceleration was unobtainium prices and Selfridge's quarterly targets. Quaritch provided the muscle. Grace provided the moral opposition that got steamrolled. And Jake Sully provided the last-minute miracle that cost hundreds of lives on both sides. I know, I said. You know. Not a question. Something in his tone had shifted the academic's precision, giving way to the raw edge underneath. You've known since you woke up in this body. Not just that Pandora's in danger, you know the specifics. You know what's coming. That's why you built this. The grotto was quiet. The waterfall's roar faded to background static. Even the bond felt muted at night, and Sanom holding their awareness at the periphery, giving us space. I know enough, I said carefully. Not everything. Not the details. But enough to understand that what the RDA is building toward will destroy things that can never be rebuilt. And I'm trying to build something that can survive it. Norm stood. His avatar body unfolded with the awkward grace of someone still learning the geometry of 9-foot limbs better than my first week, but still catching on the wrong angles. He crossed the grotto. Stopped in front of me. The RDA is destroying this world. He said it again. Different emphasis. Not despair declaration. You're trying to save it. That's enough for me. Norm. What does binding mean? Exactly. Not the spiritual framework at night uses. The mechanics. I told him. Telepathic connection, persistent, two-directional, carrying emotional state and sensory data. Shared skills through the archive system. Healing within territory. Stat boosts. And the emotional bleed. His feelings would color mine would color his. Permanent. Not reversible without significant system intervention. Norm listened. Processed. Asked 3 follow-up questions about neural architecture, 2 about information theory, 1 about consent protocols. Then, do it. The binding was different from the NA6. Not harder, different. Norm's avatar body was human-grown, its neural cue a synthetic recreation of NA6 biology rather than the genuine article. The connection point was the same cue to cue, filament interlocking, but the signal that flowed through carried a cognitive architecture I recognized. Human thought patterns. Linear logic overlaid with associative leaps. The internal monologue that NA6 minds processed as image-feeling combinations, Norm's brain rendered as language. Soul binding initiated. Target, Norm Spellman, human, avatar body. Specialization, xenolinguist/research specialist. Bond tier, 1, surface link. Cost, 10 NE, current, 55/100. Note, first human citizen. Cross-species integration protocols activating. The bond locked. Norm gasped a sharp intake of breath that echoed off the grotto walls. His hands flew to his temples. Not pain overload. The network's citizen feed flooding through a consciousness that had spent 35 years isolated inside a single skull. He swallowed. Shadow Fang. He's warm. Content. That's him, isn't it? The feeling like sunlight on fur. That's him. And Sanom, he's excited. He wants to show me something. The plants near the eastern. Easy. Don't chase every signal. Let it settle. Norm's eyes were wet. Avatar bodies weren't supposed to produce tears. The lacrimal system was a simplified recreation, functional but limited. But the network's influence was doing something to the biology, the same way it had modified my neural cues conductivity during the system awakening. Adapting the hardware to serve the software. This is what Sahela should feel like, Norm whispered. Not the 5-second touch and release they teach in training. Not the partial connection with a dire horse or a tree. This is complete. Citizen bound, Norm Spellman. Citizen number 5. Plus 25 SP, human citizen bonus. Faith generation, plus 0.3 FP/day. Cross-species milestone, first human NA6 integrated network. Bonus, plus 100 SP. 100 SP bonus. The system rewarded first citizen, first node, first cross-species integration. The resource counter ticked upward and I filed it for later. Adonite rose from his meditation spot and crossed the grotto. His weathered face carried an expression I hadn't seen before, not devotion, not faith, but something softer. Welcome. The elder placed both hands on Norm's shoulders, and through the bond, Norm felt the full weight of Adonite's belief that this network was sacred, that every new soul who joined it strengthened the whole, that Eywa's plan was unfolding in real time through the grotto's living walls. Kaltsi, brother, Adonite said. Norm's NA6 came out perfect. Of course it did. He was a xenolinguist who'd spent years mastering the language. But through the bond, the words carried an additional layer that speech alone couldn't provide, sincerity without pretense, stripped of the social filters that language was designed to impose. Sanom didn't wait for permission. The boy barreled across the grotto and grabbed Norm's hand, pulling him toward the pool, already explaining in rapid-fire NA6 that Norm tracked effortlessly the bioluminescence patterns and the network's feeding schedule, and the time Shadow Fang caught a hexapid at the northern boundary and shared the meal through the bond's sensory feed. 5 citizens. 1 node. A cross-species network that the system is calling a milestone. And a man who just committed his career, his identity, and his consciousness to a cause he understood for exactly 4 hours before saying yes. Through the bond, Norm's grandmother's voice. Not deliberately shared, an accidental bleed, a memory surfacing because the emotional register of belonging triggered a lifetime of associations. A woman singing in a kitchen, the smell of something baking, warmth that existed only in the past tense of a language Norm hadn't spoken since childhood. We both felt it. Both paused. The intimacy was startling, a peek behind the curtain of someone else's inner life, unasked and irrevocable. Sorry, Norm said. That wasn't. Don't apologize. It happens. The bond doesn't distinguish between public and private thoughts when the emotional signal is strong enough. He nodded. Filed it. Adapted. Norm Spellman processed data faster than anyone I'd met in either life. We left the sanctuary at 1604 hours until the overnight window closed. The hike back was different from every previous solo trek through Sector 7. Norm walked beside me, his avatar body matching my stride with improving coordination, and between us ran a current of shared awareness that made conversation both unnecessary and irresistible. Can you hear me? Through the bond, not speech. Norm testing the range. Clear. Keep it low. High bandwidth transmission drains any at distance. This is, James, this is extraordinary. The information transfer rate alone. Chase. A pause. Through the bond, confusion, recalibration. My name is Chase. Chase Sinclair. James Chen died in cryosleep. I'm someone else. The confession traveled the bond in sensation rather than language. The car accident, the darkness, the awakening in blue skin, the weight of a borrowed name carried for 15 days. Not the full truth, not the transmigration, not the meta-knowledge, but the piece of truth that mattered. The identity was real. The lies were scaffolding around something genuine. Norm absorbed it. The bond carried his reaction in layers: surprise, processing, acceptance. Faster than speech would have allowed. Chase. Okay, Chase. Hell's Gate's perimeter emerged through the thinning canopy. Floodlights. Chain link. The architecture of human fear on an alien world. They swiped credentials at the gate, logged return times, nodded at the security tech who didn't look up. Two men carrying a secret that pulsed between them like shared circulation. Separate bodies. Connected minds. Walking into a compound full of people who had no idea that the ground beneath their assumptions had shifted. Grace Augustine stood at the science wing entrance, data pad in hand. She watched them pass. Her eyes tracked from Chase to Norm and back, not suspicion exactly, but the specific attention of a scientist who'd noticed a variable change and couldn't yet identify which one. She made a note on her data pad. Norm's stress spiked through the bond, a hot flare of anxiety that Chase absorbed and dampened before it could reach his face. Steady. She doesn't know. She's observing. She always knows. Eventually. They parted at the corridor junction. Professional nods. Research colleagues returning from a routine expedition. Nothing to see. Grace's datapad stylus tapped twice against the screen. She turned and walked toward her office without a word. Dr. Grace Augustine. The GPS logs didn't lie. Grace spread the expedition data across her desk. Holographic projection, high resolution, every waypoint time-stamped and coordinate locked. Chen and Spellman's route from 2 days ago traced a clean line from Hell's Gate to Sector 7, northeast along the standard transect, arriving at grid 47 east at 0930. Then nothing. 6 hours of stationary signal at coordinates that corresponded to an area her own surveys had flagged 3 years ago as anomalously neural dense. No movement. No specimen collection waypoints. No grid traversal. Just 2 avatar drivers, parked at a single location for 6 hours, before hiking back. She lit a cigarette. Technically illegal in the office. She'd been technically illegal in this office for 11 years and counting. The smoke curled toward the ventilation duct, where the filters would catch it before anyone in the corridor noticed. James Chen. Or whoever was behind those yellow eyes. 11 days ago she'd sat in this office reviewing his personnel file for the 4th time, looking for the pattern beneath the surface. Motor skills without knowledge. Behavioral anomalies without pathology. Neural conductivity readings that Max Patel had flagged as 3 standard deviations above baseline readings that, in 15 years of Avatar program oversight, Grace had never seen approach. Then the greenhouse incident. The transponder gaps. The extended absences that no equipment malfunction could fully explain. The formal evaluation where Norm Spellman, earnest, awkward, terminally transparent Norm had walked in with fabricated documentation and the worst poker face in the Alpha Centauri system. And now this. 2 researchers stationary for 6 hours at a neural dense site, returning with specimens that were genuinely excellent, the best neural tissue data Grace had seen in years, and a changed dynamic that Grace couldn't quantify but couldn't miss. They moved differently. Not physically, the avatar bodies hadn't changed, but the spatial awareness between them had shifted. Before the expedition, Chen and Spellman occupied space as colleagues, parallel trajectories, independent attention, the social geometry of people who ate lunch together but worked separately. After the expedition, they moved as a unit. Complementary positioning. Shared attention allocation. The kind of unconscious coordination that Grace had observed in NA6 hunters who'd spent decades bonding through Tsahela. In 2 people who'd known each other for 3 weeks. She pulled up Norm's debriefing notes. She'd cornered him in the lab yesterday, routine, casual, the kind of collegial check-in that wasn't an interrogation but functioned as one. The neural density readings were consistent with our hypotheses about substrate-level information transfer, Norm had said. Too fast. The words rehearsed, the cadence wrong. Norm Spellman didn't speak in prepared sentences. He rambled. He over-explained. He circled back and corrected himself. The polished version meant he'd practiced, which meant he was hiding something. And the 6 hours stationary. Data collection. In situ readings require extended baseline establishment. You know that, Grace. She did know that. She also knew that James Chen's published methodology specified 30-minute baselines, not 6-hour ones. and she knew that Norm's left hand had been tapping his thigh in a rhythm that didn't match any of his documented nervous tics, a new pattern, as if responding to a signal source she couldn't detect. Grace stubbed out the cigarette, opened the expedition scheduling interface. 2 keystrokes added her name to the next Sector 7 deployment, Dr. G. Augustine, Principal Investigator, Neural Mapping Team. If there was something at those coordinates that explained the anomalies, the readings, the behavior, the changed dynamic, the fabricated alibis, she'd find it herself. 15 years on Pandora had taught her one thing above all: data didn't lie. People did. And right now, 2 people she cared about were lying to her face with increasing skill. The scheduling notification would hit their datapads in minutes. Let them prepare. Let them plan. Let them coordinate whatever it was they were coordinating, with those glances that moved too fast and those silences that lasted too long. Grace Augustine wasn't going to Sector 7 to catch them. She was going because the scientist in her demanded answers, and the mentor in her needed to know if the people she was protecting were worth the cost. She lit another cigarette. The first one had been for frustration. This one was for courage. The notification hit Chase's datapad at 19:30. Norm's ping 3 seconds later. Through the bond, Norm's anxiety erupted like a geyser, hot, vertical, overwhelming every other signal in the network. Adonite stirred at the sanctuary, sensing the disturbance. Sanom's curiosity spiked. Even Shadowfang lifted his head, the wolf's pack instinct reading stress through the telepathic link and responding with alert posture. Grace. She added herself to the next expedition. I see it. Chase sat on his bunk, datapad open, staring at the scheduling update. Sector 7. Neural Mapping Team. Principal Investigator. She's going to find the sanctuary. Yes. What do we do? The question carried weight that speech alone couldn't convey. Through the bond, Chase registered the full scope of Norm's fear, career destruction, scientific credibility, the RDA's response to unauthorized NA6 contact, the militarized reaction to discovering biological structures outside human control. Every scenario Norm had catalogued during 4 hours of processing in the grotto, now compressed into a single emotional transmission. We prepare. 3 days. Grace's expedition was scheduled for day 21. 72 hours to decide whether to hide, deflect, or reveal. And this time, unlike the system's first quest, the countdown wasn't displayed on a translucent interface. It ticked in the hollow of Chase's stomach, measured in the cadence of a woman who'd spent 15 years searching for proof that Eywa was real. The next 2 days were an exercise in coordinated deception. Chase and Norm developed protocols through the bond faster than speech, more precise, the mental link carrying data at rates that made verbal communication feel glacial. When to share through the bond, when to speak aloud for cover. How to maintain baseline behavior in the lab, the mess hall, the corridors where security cameras tracked movement patterns. What expressions to wear when Grace's attention swept the room like a searchlight. Norm was terrible at it. Not the technical aspects, his mind was sharp, his data processing excellent, and the bond's efficiency meant he could coordinate with Chase while simultaneously running legitimate research tasks. But the deception component broke against the fundamental obstacle of Norm Spellman's character. He couldn't lie to Grace Augustine. Not convincingly. Not without the stress registering in his bioluminescent patterns, his vocal cadence, his spatial behavior. Through the bond, she asked me about the substrate readings again. I panicked. I said consistent with hypotheses, and she looked at me like I'd grown a second Q. What did she say? Nothing. That's worse. Grace saying nothing means she's adding it to the file. 3 desserts appeared on Norm's tray at dinner. Stress eating. The mess hall's Pandora fruit, the same purple-skinned variety Chase had eaten the night Norm saved his career with fabricated documents, disappeared in rapid succession while Chase monitored the bond for spillover anxiety and dampened what he could. Across the mess hall, Grace ate alone. Datapad propped against the condiment rack. Not Norm's linguistics textbook, expedition logistics, route planning, equipment manifests. Preparing for day 21 with the thoroughness of a scientist who expected to find something and intended to document it completely. She's not going to be surprised, Norm sent. She's going to be prepared. There's a difference. I know. What's the plan? The plan. Chase ran scenarios through the bond, letting Norm process them in parallel, 2 minds working the problem from complementary angles. Hide the relaying during the expedition, present only the grotto as a research site. Risk, Grace's instruments would detect the sanctuary's modifications. Probability of success, low. Redirect to a different sector, claim the original coordinates were logged incorrectly. Risk, Grace would check the raw GPS data, which couldn't be altered. Probability, 0. Or, stop running. Show her everything. Bet the entire operation on the character of a woman who'd spent 15 years fighting for a world that was trying to swallow her whole. That's not a plan, Norm sent. That's a prayer. Prayers work better when you've done the prep. We have 3 days. Tselan's knife moved across the whetstone in strokes so measured they could have kept time. The sound filled the grotto's upper chamber, a rhythmic scrape that the bioluminescent walls translated into subtle flickers, the sanctuary's neural network registering the vibration and responding with light. She'd been sharpening for 40 minutes. The blade didn't need it. The obsidian-edged bone had been combat-ready since the day she'd carved it from the skeleton of a creature that tried to eat her clan. But the sharpening was communication, the Relang warrior's equivalent of a raised hand, a cleared throat, a message delivered through action rather than words. I am preparing. Something is coming. I will be ready. I stood at the grotto entrance and watched the waterfall catch the morning light. Day 19. 2 days until Grace Augustine walked into this chamber and saw everything I'd built. The Dreamwalker scientist. Lan didn't look up. She comes in 2 days. Yes. You told Norm. You showed him this place. He bowed willingly. The strokes continued. Even. Patient. Now you bring another. Grace is different. She's not being recruited, she's investigating. She suspects something and she's coming to find it. Then we hide. We can't. She has GPS data. She knows the exact coordinates. Her instruments will detect the sanctuary's modifications within minutes of arrival. The knife stopped. Lan's eyes lifted yellow, sharp, carrying the focused intensity of someone calculating angles of attack. Then we stop her. No, she will see the relaying. She will report to the machines. Soldiers will come. Grace Augustine has spent 15 years fighting the RDA's expansion. She runs the Avatar program as a shield for NA6 culture, not a weapon against it. She's documented illegal clearance operations, filed protests against mining expansion, argued with Selfridge in meetings that got her funding cut. She's not the enemy. She is human. So am I. The statement landed in the space between them. Lan processed it, the Dreamwalker who wore a NA6 body but carried a human mind, who built sanctuary with alien technology for people who had every reason to hate his species. The contradiction she'd been living inside since the day he'd offered shelter to survivors who'd been shot by his people. You are. She searched for the word. Different. Grace might be different too. And if she is not? The question hung in the bioluminescent air. Through the bond, Adonite's calm awareness, the elder monitoring from his meditation spot. Sanom's tension, the boy picking up the emotional bleed from both Chase and Lan. Shadow Fang's alertness, the Viper Wolf positioned at the perimeter where the Watcher Vine's surveillance feed showed clear approaches on all vectors. And Norm distant, at Hell's Gate, his anxiety a persistent background hum. If she's not, I said, then you do what you do. Lan held my gaze. 3 seconds. 5. The knife in her hand caught the light bone and obsidian, polished by use, edge capable of opening arteries with surgical precision. I do not like this plan. Neither do I. The Elder believes in you. Sanom worships you. The wolf follows because the bond tells him to. Norm bound himself in 4 hours. She resumed sharpening. The strokes were faster now, not anxiety, but preparation. I am the only one here who thinks clearly about what you are. A stranger wearing borrowed skin, building something he cannot explain, asking us to trust a species that burned our home. Yes. If the woman threatens this place, threatens my people, I will not wait for your permission. I know. She nodded. The sharpening resumed its measured rhythm. Communication delivered. Terms established. The Relang warrior had given her answer, cooperation bounded by a line she'd draw in blood if necessary. I left her at the upper chamber and descended to the grotto's main level. The sanctuary had grown since its first days, subtle changes that accumulated into something visible. The moss carpet was thicker, more responsive, forming seating structures and sleeping platforms tailored to individual body shapes. The wall's bioluminescence was brighter, more organized, the hexagonal display patterns now capable of showing network data in color-coded arrays. The healing pod had been used twice since Shadow Fang's fracture, once for Lan's claw graze, once for Sanom's twisted ankle during a perimeter run. The defensive thorns along the northern approach had matured waist-high barricades of hardened biological material, sharp enough to deter anything below Class 4. The Watcher Vine's surveillance tendrils spread through the canopy for 200 meters in every direction, feeding movement data to the territorial awareness buff in real time. Progress. Tangible, visible, earned through SP spent and time invested. But against the kind of attention Grace Augustine brought, scientific instruments, analytical frameworks, 15 years of Pandora expertise, it was a glass house inviting a woman who threw rocks professionally. Through the bond, at Hell's Gate, Norm was digging. Not physically, digitally. Using his lab access to pull Grace Augustine's research history, personnel evaluations, published arguments, and documented conflicts with RDA administration. The information flowed through the mental link in compressed bursts, faster than reading, more complete than verbal summary. Grace's record was a battleground. 15 years of fighting for the Avatar program's scientific mission against an administration that viewed the entire operation as a PR exercise for the mining operation. She'd been reprimanded 4 times for unauthorized contact with NA6 populations. She'd filed 7 formal protests against clearance operations that violated the RDA's own environmental protocols. She'd been threatened with program termination twice and survived both through the sheer quality of her published research, too famous to fire, too principled to silence her students. The NA6 school she'd established and been forced to close when security concerns overrode educational objectives. Students she'd taught English and mathematics, who taught her NA6 in return, who she still referenced in off-record correspondence as my kids. She lost them, Norm sent. The school closing broke something in her. She's never been the same since. Everyone who was here before says so. That's not leverage. That's a wound. I know. But it's also context. She didn't close the school because she wanted to. Quaritch closed it. Selfridge backed him. Grace fought and lost. And spent the next decade fighting differently. Through research. Through data. Through making herself indispensable. Through the bond, Norm's assessment, filtered through the analytical framework of a mind that processed people the way Grace processed specimens carefully, systematically, with genuine care beneath the methodology. Grace Augustine was loyal to Pandora, to the NA6, to the scientific mission she'd staked her career on. She was not loyal to the RDA, to Selfridge, or to the military apparatus that Quaritch represented. If anyone in Hell's Gate would look at the sanctuary and see something worth protecting rather than something to report, it was Grace. If, Norm amended. That's a big if. Every decision I've made since waking up in this body has been a big if. This one has better odds than most. I spent the afternoon preparing the sanctuary itself. Not hiding evidence, presenting it. The grotto's main chamber was rearranged, the healing pod positioned prominently, its growth lines visible, the organic architecture unmistakable as something engineered rather than natural. The network's bioluminescence displays set to their most organized patterns, hexagonal grids showing territorial data, citizen health status, surveillance feeds. Evidence that this wasn't a cave. It was a facility. Biological, alive, and purposeful. Adonite understood without being told. He positioned himself at the pool's edge, seated, dignified, staff across his knees. The elder of a destroyed clan, present in a sanctuary built by something he believed was holy. His testimony would carry weight with Grace in ways that Chase's explanations couldn't. Sainum cleaned the grotto's lower passages, then stood near the entrance looking simultaneously terrified and determined. The boy had absorbed enough of the network's emotional data to understand the stakes. Another human was coming, and the community's survival depended on her reaction. Shadowfang took a position at the perimeter. Through the bond, the wolf's territorial instincts mapped Grace's probable approach route and established surveillance on every vector. Not hostile, watchful. The alpha protecting the den. And Tisei-lan. Tisei-lan climbed to a ledge above the waterfall. Out of sight from the main chamber. Not hiding positioning. If Grace walked in and the meeting went wrong, the Relang warrior would be above and behind the threat before anyone registered movement. I looked at my community. 4 citizens. 1 unbound protector. A cave full of living light and biological infrastructure that defied everything the RDA thought it understood about Pandora. A secret that had grown from 1 man in the wrong body to something that 5 people, 6, counting Tisei-lan, depended on for survival. The system interface pulsed in my peripheral vision. Resources, 175 SP after the cross-species milestone bonus. Node level 2 with expanded territory. 5 citizens generating faith. A surveillance network, a healing facility, and a defensive perimeter. Not enough to fight the RDA. Not enough to alter the timeline. Not enough to save this world from what was coming. But maybe enough to convince 1 scientist that what was growing in this grotto was worth protecting. Through the bond, Norm's awareness, taut with anxiety but steady. Adonite's faith, deep and immovable. Sainum's hope, fierce in its fragility. Shadowfang's loyalty, simple and absolute. And from the ledge above the waterfall, where Tisei-lan sat with her knife in her lap, silence. The specific silence of a woman who'd made a promise she intended to keep, watching over people she'd die for, in a place she still refused to call home. Night came. The grotto shifted to its evening cycle, indigo and violet, conservation mode, the biological systems banking energy for another day. Through the bond, Norm dreamed at Hell's Gate, restless, anxious dreams that bled into the network in fragments of color and motion. Adonite chanted softly. Sainum slept against Shadowfang's flank, the bone pendant rising and falling with each breath. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. The scenarios ran through my mind in loops. Grace's face when she sees the grotto, her voice when she asks the first question, the moment where everything pivots on whether a woman who spent her life searching for proof of Eywa's intelligence can accept that proof in a form she never imagined. The waterfall roared. The defensive thorns bristled. The watcher vine's tendrils swayed in the pre-dawn breeze, counting the hours. 2 days became 1. 1 became hours. Through the bond, 5 heartbeats synchronized in the dark, separate bodies, shared rhythm, all of them pointed toward a dawn that would change everything or destroy it. Grace Augustine packed her field kit at Hell's Gate, instruments calibrated, day top had charged, a fresh cigarette behind her ear. 4 hours until departure. Grace set the pace. Not fast, deliberate. The stride of a woman who'd been walking Pandora jungle for 15 years and had calibrated her body to the specific rhythm of terrain that tried to kill you if you rushed. 3 abreast on the trail. Chase on the left, Norm in the center, Grace on the right with her field kit on one shoulder and a sensor array in the opposite hand, its display pulsing with neural density readings she hadn't looked at once since leaving the compound. She didn't need to. She knew where they were going. The transect route takes us northeast through the secondary growth corridor. Grace's voice was lecture hall casual, the tone she used when teaching, when establishing facts before building arguments. Standard protocol for neural density mapping puts our first collection point at grid 47 east, approximately 90 minutes from the perimeter. Through the bond, Norm's anxiety, a persistent drumbeat. Chase dampened it before it reached his face. From there, we proceed to the anomalous density zone that your last 3 expeditions spent. She checked her day top had, a performance of consultation she didn't need, an average of 5.7 hours stationary at, which is unusual for specimen collection, unless you're collecting specimens of a type not listed in any of your filed reports. The jungle pressed in from both sides. Canopy closing overhead, filtering Polyphemus light into amber coins on the forest floor. The same trail Chase had stumbled down on his first expedition, tripping over roots, faceplanting into decomposing fern matter. 17 days ago. A lifetime measured in impossible events. Grace Norm started. I'm not finished. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. Grace Augustine's authority was tonal, embedded in cadence rather than volume. I've accessed every GPS log from your Sector 7 expeditions. I've cross-referenced your specimen data with the collection timestamps. The specimens are genuine excellent work, actually, but they account for approximately 40% of your field time. The other 60% is unaccounted for. A hexapod broke from the undergrowth 50 meters ahead, its 6 legs carrying it across the trail in 3 strides. Chase's avatar body tensed muscle memory from the first expedition, when a hexapod had charged him into the stream. The memory lived in his body now, not as fear but as reflex. Grace watched the hexapod disappear. Noted it. Didn't comment. I brought a full instrument suite. Neural density scanner, electromagnetic field mapper, biosignature tracker, atmospheric chemistry array. Whatever you've been doing at those coordinates, I'm going to find it. You can let me discover it on my instruments, or you can tell me now. Through the bond, she's giving us an opening. Take it or she finds it herself. I know. The trail narrowed at the stream, crossing the same stream where Chase had fallen, where the Viper wolf pack had circled him, where the Alpha with the scarred muzzle had sniffed the air and walked away instead of killing. The water was warm, bath temperature. The rocks beneath were slick with bioluminescent algae that pulsed at their footsteps. Grace. Chase stopped. The stream split around his ankles. You're right. There's something at those coordinates. Something that your instruments will detect the moment we're within range. And I need you to see it with your own eyes before your instruments tell you what it is. Grace's hand tightened on the sensor array. Her expression didn't change, the same controlled attention she'd worn since the lab, since the first day she'd quizzed him on specimen protocols and watched his hands contradict his knowledge. I've been waiting 11 days for you to say that. Longer than that, Norm said quietly. You've been waiting 15 years. Grace looked at him. Something passed between them, mentor and student, scientist and colleague, 2 people who'd spent years sharing a worldview that was about to shatter. Show me, dash. The waterfall appeared through the tree line at 1030. The sound reached them first, low roar against morning quiet, the same acoustic signature Chase had followed on his second expedition when the proto-system contact had pulled him from the greenhouse at 3 in the morning. That felt like a different person's memory. A version of Chase Sinclair who hadn't yet built anything, who hadn't yet lost anyone, who was still measuring the distance between terror and purpose. Grace's sensor array began screaming. Not literally, the display lit with readings that the device's default parameters couldn't process. Neural density off the scale. Electromagnetic field signatures organized in patterns no natural formation produced. Biosignatures, multiple species, multiple individuals, configured in a spatial arrangement that implied habitation rather than wilderness. What the hell? Grace stopped walking, stared at her instruments, stared at the waterfall, stared at Chase and Norm, who stood on either side of her with the specific posture of people presenting something they'd prepared for and still dreaded. Through the waterfall, Chase said, "There's a grotto behind it." Grace's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The scientist warring with the professional, 15 years of institutional caution pressing against an appetite for discovery that had brought her 4 light years from Earth. You first. Chase ducked through the curtain of warm water. The grotto opened around him, familiar now, the sanctuary's bioluminescence adjusting to his presence with the welcoming precision of a system recognizing its administrator. The walls brightened. The moss carpet shifted. The hexagonal display patterns organized into greeting mode, a biological status board presenting network health, citizen locations, territorial integrity. Behind him, Norm's familiar tread, then Grace's lighter step. Then silence. Grace Augustine stood in the grotto's entrance with water dripping from her hair and her sensor array hanging forgotten at her side. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were wide. The bioluminescence reflected in them twin pools of living light captured in the face of a woman who'd spent a career looking for God and found something that wasn't God but wasn't nothing either. Eywa. The word came out like a prayer and a hypothesis simultaneously. She's real. She's doing something. The grotto breathed around her. Walls expanding, contracting. Root clusters pulsing in organized rhythms. The healing pod on the eastern wall, organic architecture unmistakably engineered, its growth lines visible beneath the bioluminescent membrane. The watcher vines, surveillance tendrils extending through the ceiling, sensory organs tracking movement in the canopy above. Adonite stood from his position near the pool, staff in hand. White-haired, amber-eyed, wearing the dignified composure of a spiritual leader presenting his sacred space to an outsider for the first time. "Welcome, dreamer of truth," he said in accented English. "We have been expecting you." Grace's sensor array hit the ground. She didn't notice. Behind Adonite, Sainum, standing straight, the bone pendant visible against his chest. The boy's bioluminescent markings pulsed in sync with the wall's visual proof of network integration visible on his skin. And beside him, Shadow Fang the Viper Wolf Alpha, scarred muzzle, yellow eyes tracking the newcomer with alert curiosity rather than aggression. His neural filaments glowed in recognition patterns, known entity, non-hostile, administrator's guest. And at the sanctuary's edge, visible only to those who knew where to look, a shadow on the ledge above the waterfall. Tisei Lan, knife in lap, watching. The data structures are. Grace crossed to the nearest wall. Her hands found the root network's surface bioluminescent tissue warm beneath her fingers, neural activity detectable through touch alone. It's not computation. It's something else. Biological but organized. I've spent my whole life hoping to find proof and now I'm standing inside it. Her knees buckled. Not collapse, surrender. The controlled descent of a woman whose legs had decided, independent of her rational mind, that standing was no longer the appropriate posture for the magnitude of what she was experiencing. She knelt on the moss. Her fingers traced the root patterns. Her breathing was fast, too fast, and tears streaked her face with the abandon of someone who'd stopped caring about professional composure the moment she'd walked through the waterfall. Through the bond, Norm's awareness, tight with concern. Adnight's satisfaction, deep and warm. Sanem's pride, she sees it. The Dreamwalker teacher sees what we are. Shadowfang's pragmatic assessment, new pack member, pending. Grace. Chase crouched beside her. Not touching, present. There's more. A lot more. And I'll explain everything. But I need you to understand what you're looking at before I tell you what it means. She wiped her face with the back of one hand. The gesture was pure Grace, impatient with her own emotions, irritated at the interruption they represented in the data collection process. She sniffed. Looked at the wall. At night. At Shadowfang. At the healing pod and the Watcher Vine and the defensive thorns visible through the entrance. NA6 survivors. Living biological infrastructure. An integrated neural network with organized data transfer protocols. A viper wolf that responds to mental commands. She stood. Her legs held this time. You've been building this for how long? 17 days. 17. She stopped. Processed. The number didn't align with the scale of what she was seeing. That's impossible. This level of biological integration would take years, decades. If it were purely natural growth, yes. But it's not. Chase held up his hand. Extended his neural cue. The grotto's walls brightened in response, a visible connection between administrator and territory that required no instruments to detect. Eywa created a system. An interface. For me specifically. It accelerates growth, organizes construction, manages territory. And it's real, Grace. Not metaphor. Not cultural interpretation. Real. Grace's hands trembled. Not with fear. With the specific tremor of a scientist standing at the edge of a discovery so large that every paper she'd ever published, every argument she'd ever made, every night she'd spent defending the Avatar program's scientific mission against Selfridge's budget cuts, all of it became prologue. She reached for his hand. Not a handshake. Not a formal gesture. A scientist reaching for data. A woman reaching for proof. 15 years of questions condensed into the space between her fingertips and his palm, the threshold where observation became participation. Her fingers touched his. The grotto pulsed once, bright, warm, the network acknowledging the contact like a circuit completing. Tell me everything, Grace said. And don't you dare skip the methodology.